Chapter 16 Chapter 87 to Chapter 96, Facing Colonel Rhodes's gun, the woman turned around, revealing a stunning face full of exotic charm. Her beauty was both mature and captivating, yet she carried an opposite sense of purity. The combination of the two gave her an indescribable allure. Her green eyes sparkled like gems, filled with emotion, and just looking at them made the air feel warmer. Rhodes swore that any man would be instantly captivated by the woman in front of him. He found himself momentarily stunned, a dangerous lapse for a soldier. Thankfully, he quickly regained his composure, suppressing the heat rising within him. Tightening his grip on the pistol, he aimed it directly between her eyes. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" Rhodes demanded. This was a military camp. Even though there weren't many soldiers outside, it wasn't the kind of place an ordinary person could just walk into. "Nice to meet you, Colonel Rhodes," the woman said with a soft smile, her red lips curving upwards. She didn't seem fazed by the gun at all. Instead, she spoke in a low, almost teasing voice, "We are not enemies, and I don't think the thing in your hand poses any threat to me." "Yeah," Rhodes replied, maintaining a calm and dismissive demeanor, though in reality, sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. He was starting to realize that this woman might not be bluffing. Despite her beauty, there was something about her that felt monstrously dangerous, like she wore the skin of a human, but hid the ferocity of a beast underneath. Just looking into her striking green eyes filled him with an inexplicable fear. It was unsettling, and for the first time in a long while, Colonel Rhodes felt his fighting spirit waver. It was terrifying. "The reason I'm here is the same as yours," the woman said calmly, showing no aggression. "And I appreciate your help." She didn't make any hostile moves. Instead, she simply turned and walked out of the camp. Rhodes kept his gun trained on her, but no matter how much he tried, he couldn't muster the courage to pull the trigger. Just before leaving, the woman spoke one last time. "Oh, by the way, Colonel Rhodes, I hope you won't mind if I borrow one of your cars." The woman's graceful figure vanished completely into the blinding white light outside. It wasn't until Rhodes heard the familiar crackling of the military vehicle's engine starting up, followed by the sound fading into the distance, that he fully relaxed. His body, which had been tense with adrenaline, suddenly felt like it had just come out of a sauna, his forehead dripping with sweat, and his back soaked with cold perspiration. He breathed heavily, his eyes wide with the fear of having just narrowly escaped something terrifying. "Damn that woman," Rhodes muttered under his breath, incredulous. No one had ever shaken him like that, not since his childhood, and certainly not since joining the military. There had been no hostile stance, no harsh tone or threatening glare. In fact, everything about her posture, her gaze, her words, had been so calm, even gentle. And yet, that calmness made him feel as if death itself had been staring him in the face. It had shaken him to his core, left him trembling and afraid. Rhodes had a gut feeling that, just as the woman hinted, his trusted weapon would have been useless against her. If she had wanted to kill him, he realized, he wouldn't have had the courage to resist. "This is insane. What the hell did I just encounter?" Rhodes muttered as he walked out of the camp, still overwhelmed by shock and fear. When he stepped outside, a wave of confusion crossed his face. Soldiers were patrolling and organizing equipment as usual, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman had just driven off in one of their vehicles. Rhodes stood there, stunned. In the desert, a military open-top Humvee sped across the sand, kicking up clouds of yellow dust behind it. Natasha, dressed in a gray suit and short vest, was at the wheel. One hand gripped the steering wheel while the other rested casually on the door. Sunglasses perched on her face completed her look as she spoke while driving. "That map will save us a lot of time," Natasha said. "With my knowledge in hockey, I'll be able to locate the remaining area easily. Don't worry, my current range of awareness is far broader than you think. You'll be ready to back me up when needed." Yelena's enthusiastic voice echoed through the headset. Natasha smirked, her red lips curling slightly as she glanced up at the blazing sun in the sky. Despite the intense heat, Natasha didn't react to the harsh rays of the desert sun. After receiving the super soldier serum, her strength had increased tenfold. According to Leon, the serum had not only enhanced her physical abilities but had also helped her transcend the limits of human genetics. In 2 words, evolution. The most noticeable effect was not just the improvement in her physical abilities but also her adaptability. Her body now adjusted itself automatically to harsh environments. Even in the scorching 40-degree heat, she didn't feel the burn of the sun's rays or the discomfort of ultraviolet exposure. Beyond that, her intelligence in hockey had also been significantly enhanced. Maybe she had a natural talent in this area. Aside from Wanda, her hockey was far stronger than anyone else's, and she could use its power to suppress her own aura, even affecting the vision, hearing, and other senses of those around her. That's how she was able to walk into the military camp, drive off in the Humvee, and yet the soldiers acted like they hadn't even seen her. Her observation hockey allowed her to sense the presence of others, detect objects outside her field of vision, and gauge their location in numbers. The range varied from person to person, but Natasha's hockey could spread over more than 10 kilometers. She was like a walking, human radar. The Middle East was vast, and while Rhodes had spent months searching large areas, her abilities saved her a lot of trouble. As she drove, Natasha extended her hockey, scanning the surroundings. 45 degrees, 13 kilometers to the east peaceful, a settlement with calm energy, she muttered. 60 degrees, 12 kilometers to the west also peaceful. 30 degrees, 8 kilometer. To the south fewer people, agitated atmosphere, small armed forces. Natasha's senses suddenly picked up on something. A large group of people. Their aura was cruel and bloodthirsty, like wild dogs. But what caught her attention most was the presence of two distinct auras, one of which felt heavily suppressed. Natasha's eyes lit up. Yelena, I think I've found it. Finally. I'll be right there, Yelena replied. In the dark cave, Tony Stark, who had been missing for several months, lay on a wooden board, wearing a dusty gray tank top. He stared blankly at the small window in the corner, the only source of light. He could no longer remember how many days and sleepless nights he had spent there. In the beginning, he had clung to life by holding onto a car battery, then he fell into a state of despair. He was forced to create a new weapon, the Jericho missile. Finally, encouraged by the old man named Yinsen, he resolved to use his intelligence to escape. In the corner not far away stood a tall object covered by a rag, his only hope for escape. Tony's chest rose and fell, and he could feel his life force weakening. Every night, the pain in his chest would wake him up multiple times. His eyes were unfocused, and his mind felt completely blank. Not far away, Yinsen, with gray hair at his temples and glasses, sat in front of the stove, brewing low-quality coffee. Aside from the chaotic noise outside, the cave was quiet and strangely peaceful. Noise. It seemed distant. Tony Stark was still in a daze when he suddenly sensed something was wrong. He sat up abruptly from the board and looked at Yinsen in surprise. Yinsen had stood up at some point and was now looking at Tony with the same concern. What's going on outside? Tony asked. I don't know, Yinsen replied, shaking his head. But this is where those guys gather, and they have a large armed force. There shouldn't be any accidents, right? Tony frowned and glanced at the large object in the corner, still covered by a cloth. He estimated it would take about a week to complete, and he couldn't afford for anything to go wrong now. Boom, ta, ta, ta. Suddenly, an explosion echoed through the cave, followed by a barrage of gunfire and roars in a language Tony couldn't understand. The explosion shook the cave, and both Tony and Yinsen realized that a firefight had broken out between the terrorists and another group. Damn it, Tony muttered impatiently. He had no idea who the other group was. If it was the US military, that would be fine. But if it was someone else, it would undoubtedly disrupt his escape plan. Yinsen leaned against the metal door, listening carefully to the chaos outside. He could understand the language of the terrorists and tried his best to gather information from their screams amidst the explosions and gunfire. What are you hearing? Tony asked. It sounds like someone is attacking this place. From what they're saying, it seems like there's only one person on the other side. They're calling them a devil, Yinsen said, his face filled with confusion. Did I hear that right? One person, a devil. Tony's already haggard face turned a shade darker. Damn, he muttered. He hated this feeling of facing an unknown danger. All he could do was sit there, praying for some slim chance of survival. It was a helplessness he vowed never to experience again. Boom. The explosions grew louder, and the entire cave began to shake more violently. Dust and bits of gravel fell from the walls with each tremor. This time, though, the chaos was accompanied by the sound of a shrill, desperate scream. Tony's unease intensified. Yinsen pressed his ear against the metal door, trying to hear more. Suddenly, a slightly magnetic, hoarse voice of a woman's reached their ears. The gentleman leaning against the door, could you please step back? Yinsen and Tony were stunned and exchanged a glance. Yinsen hesitated, then quickly stepped back a few paces. The next moment, there was a loud boom, and the iron door seemed to be torn off its hinges by some terrifying force. It slammed into the opposite wall and crashed to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Cold sweat appeared on both Tony and Yinsen's foreheads. What on earth was this? A monster. As the dust was swept away by a breeze, a graceful figure emerged. She had a delicate face, short burgundy curls, and wore a gray vest. It was Natasha. Tony, who hadn't seen a woman in months, stared wide-eyed, almost in disbelief. Yinsen, however, managed to keep his composure despite his age. Miss, are you here to kill him or save him? Yinsen asked cautiously. I'm going to go with the latter, Natasha replied, brushing back her short curls with a smile full of charm. Tony immediately perked up and, in his most gentlemanly tone, said, well, looks like being rescued by a beautiful lady is the best thing that's happened to me in months. Natasha gave him a half-smile and replied, if I were here to kill you, I doubt you'd be saying that. Ha, I don't believe someone as beautiful as you would ever be a killer, Tony shrugged, his expression playfully suggesting he wouldn't mind dying in her hands. Natasha shook her head and turned toward the door. After taking a couple of steps, she glanced back slightly and said softly, follow me. Let's go. It seems like there's still fighting outside, Tony said, pointing nervously at the skylight behind him. Don't worry, they're just a bunch of small fry, Natasha replied casually, walking ahead. Tony and Yinsen exchanged quick looks. Aren't we supposed to follow? Yinsen asked. I think so, Tony nodded. Yeah, we should follow. With that brief exchange, Tony and Yinsen quickly trailed behind her. The memory of the metal door being ripped apart was still fresh in their minds, and Tony certainly didn't want to risk having his skull cracked by this mysterious woman. With a mix of excitement and anxiety, they carefully left the cave. As they stepped out, they were greeted by a grim sight: bodies scattered along the winding cave passages, and walls riddled with holes. The faces of the corpses were frozen in expressions of sheer terror and despair. Their bodies were mangled, as if they had been struck by a speeding truck, with dents, broken limbs, and blood everywhere. The scene was gruesome. Did she do that? Tony suddenly felt that he was seeking death with his attitude a few moments ago. Tony was panicking right now. He saw a beautiful woman earlier, and he could have sworn he'd never seen a woman of her level before. He was stunned for a moment, but he didn't expect that this woman was more than just a beauty. She was powerful enough to take out terrorists with a single punch. Now, he was terrified. Tony Stark and his doctor, Yinsen, walked out of the cave, trembling. Outside, the sounds of gunfire and explosions were fading. As they cautiously made their way around the corner, both clutching makeshift weapons, they finally reached the mouth of the cave. Tony crouched down, leaning against the wall as he peeked outside. The blinding sunlight poured in, making him squint and instinctively raise his hands to shield his eyes. It took a moment for his vision to adjust, and when it did, he opened his eyes fully. What he saw made him lean back in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. This was the most unforgettable scene Tony had ever witnessed. It was a bloody nightmare. The area outside the cave was basin-shaped, surrounded by yellow sand and encircled by rock walls. From high above, several 257 machine guns had been positioned, their muzzles now silent. There was only one entrance from the outside. In this confined space, the ground was littered with corpses, blood pooling beneath them. Weapons, ammunition boxes, and tents had been set ablaze, the flames roaring fiercely. Among the bodies stood that graceful, beautiful woman, holding a bald man dressed in the terrorists' signature camouflage uniform in her slender hands. His bald head was smeared with blood, and his body hung limply in her grip. Tony instantly recognized him, the leader of the group that had demanded he build the Jericho missiles. The man's breath was shallow, his head drooped, and he muttered something unintelligible, perhaps a curse. The woman, now standing amidst the carnage, seemed less like a person and more like a terrifying figure of death to Tony. The breeze gently rustled her burgundy curls. She spoke softly, her voice tinged with a lazy sort of menace. I can feel the presence of innocent souls on you. You deserve to die. And with that, she tossed him aside. The bald leader flew like a cannonball, crashing into the distant rock wall, his entire body embedding into it. His limbs twisted grotesquely, leaving a human-shaped indent, while blood flowed steadily. The man twitched once before falling completely silent. Tony and Yinsen gulped at the sight, their faces filled with nervous tension. They were absolutely terrified. Is this woman a monster in human skin? The woman turned slightly, casting a perfect profile toward the two stunned men. Her tone puzzled, she asked, You seem to be thinking something bad. No, not at all. Both men immediately stood upright as if jolted by electricity, frantically waving their hands. Good, she replied. With a blink of her seductive eyes, Natasha continued walking, her slender legs moving gracefully. As she passed several missile launchers loaded with Jericho missiles, she gave them a casual kick, sending them crashing together. She grabbed a timer bomb from an ammunition box, set the timer, and tossed it onto the missile launcher. Seeing this, Tony and Yinsen quickened their pace, following closely behind. As they exited the narrow basin, a vast yellow desert stretched before them. Parked on the sand was a Humvee, and further ahead, a sleek black fighter plane with its door open, metal stairs extending down. Natasha walked straight up into the plane. Tony and Yinsen exchanged grimaces. If given the choice, both would have preferred the Humvee over the plane. However, it was obvious they had no choice, and both feared ending up like the terrorist leader if they disobeyed. The two men cautiously walked down the stairs into the cabin. To Tony's surprise, the interior was nothing like other fighter jets or transport planes. This plane felt more like a small private jet. There were no visible weapons, and the decor was luxurious and warm. Hand-painted animal prints adorned the walls. Natasha sat comfortably in a lounge seat, leaning back lazily, her legs crossed, exuding both elegance and ease. When she saw the two men timidly walking in, she tapped her chin, gesturing for them to sit. Obediently, they sat down in the seats opposite her. From the pilot's seat behind them, Yelena, wearing headphones, turned her head to look at Tony and immediately exclaimed, Wow! Is that the famous Tony Stark? Looks more like a homeless person now. With his usual temper, Tony instinctively wanted to fire back with a witty retort, but one glance at Natasha made him swallow his words. So frustrating, when had he ever been this restrained? He totally forgot he was held by a terrorist group until a few minutes ago. Natasha, shaking her head, gently tapped Yelena's head and scolded her, If you were kidnapped for a few months, you'd look like a homeless girl too. Cut it out tilde tilde, Yelena pouted, rubbing the spot where she'd been tapped, though secretly enjoying the sisterly affection. But she couldn't express her personality. Alright, it's time for us to go. Whoosh, Yelena piloted the plane, and it started smoothly. The support frame and stairs automatically retracted, and the aircraft lifted off vertically. Yelena's flying skills were impressive. There was barely any turbulence during takeoff. Boom, an explosion erupted outside the plane, and a massive mushroom cloud engulfed the cave. The entire basin was flattened, and every trace of their presence was consumed by the explosion's flames. Tony felt a sense of relief and turned his attention to the plane. As one of the most brilliant scientists of the century, he quickly observed that the aircraft was equipped with cutting-edge technology. Whoever had built this plane was highly skilled. Of course, Tony also spotted a few flaws. Just as he was pondering the plane's design, 2 bottles of chilled juice appeared in front of him, snapping him out of his thoughts. He looked up and saw Natasha holding the juice, which she had taken from a small refrigerator next to her seat. She handed one bottle to Tony and another to Yinsen. After months in the sweltering Middle Eastern heat, where the terrorists barely provided them with enough food or care, the sight of a cold drink made their eyes light up. Tony and Yinsen gratefully accepted the juice, not forgetting to say their thanks. Gulp tilde gulp. Tony couldn't wait to unscrew the bottle cap and down half of the juice in one go. The icy coldness traveled from his throat to his stomach, making both him and Yinsen shiver. It was like being caught in a refreshing rainstorm, absolutely wonderful. Tony even thought that, no matter how many gourmet meals he'd enjoyed from 5-star chefs in the past, none could compare to this bottle of chilled juice. The burning heat from their ordeal seemed to melt away. Tony leaned back, relaxing as a look of contentment crossed his face, eyes half closed in bliss. Natasha, watching their reactions, didn't laugh. She had experienced far worse conditions than this. Instead, she raised her eyebrows and focused on the faint blue light emitting from Tony's chest. Her sharp eyes quickly scanned the device and the metal fragments lodged inside Tony's body, held in place by the glowing mechanism. Instantly recognizing what it was, she gave a small nod of admiration. "You really are a genius," Natasha said, impressed. "In those conditions, you managed to build a miniature arc reactor." She believed he was the only person in the world capable of pulling this off. Although Tony was arrogant, full of himself, and often reckless, there was no denying that his brilliance allowed him to back it all up. "No matter how talented you are, there are times when you'll feel utterly hopeless," Tony said bitterly, closing the juice bottle and holding it in his hand. The months spent in the cave had changed him. He realized that being a genius and a billionaire didn't mean much when faced with cruel terrorists. In their eyes, he was just prey. They hadn't needed him to build the Jericho missile, he would have been killed long ago, his body discarded in the desert to dry up like a mummy. The military had failed, and external forces couldn't guarantee safety. He could only rely on himself. Tony also knew that he didn't have superpowers, nor did he possess the incredible strength and speed of someone like Natasha, the woman who seemed almost superhuman. But what he did have was his intellect and a mind capable of making more money than anyone else. He thought back to his time in the cave, where he had to rely solely on himself to build both the big guy and the little device on his chest. Maybe, his mind began to flood with data and diagrams, but now wasn't the time to get lost in his thoughts. What really mattered was understanding why these 2 women had come to rescue him. Tony adjusted his expression, looking at Natasha seriously before asking, "So, I'm very grateful for you coming to save me, and also for this bottle of juice. But tell me, who sent you? My name is Natasha. As for who we are, you don't need to know. But rest assured, we have no ill intentions towards you. Saving you is simply part of a deal." "A deal? That's right. To save you, we need something from Stark Industries, the big guy." "The arc reactor." "Exactly." Natasha nodded. "I know you won't hand over the core technical drawings of that thing, so we need the finished product. The energy from that thing is far more powerful than you realize," Tony said calmly. "It could power all of New York for half a year." Natasha saw through Tony's attempt to gauge her intentions and smiled. "That's precisely why we need it. I need its stable energy supply to support a big project." "I'm curious, what's this big project?" Tony asked. "That's all I can tell you for now. If you really want to know more, you'd have to join us," Natasha replied with a half smile. Tony's expression immediately changed, and he waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it then. How many do you need?" "We need 5 for the first batch, and 1 every year after that." "Wow, that's a lot of money." "The first batch is free," Natasha said firmly. "After that, we'll buy each one annually." Although Natasha maintained a firm attitude, Tony didn't get angry. After all, the woman in front of him was mysterious, but she had saved him from a dire situation. Tony was capable of handling that much. He pondered for a moment, his eyes flickering with thought, but he didn't respond right away. The atmosphere grew quiet. Yinsen, leaning back in his chair, sipped from his juice bottle occasionally, seemingly indifferent to the conversation. However, there was a hint of sadness in his eyes, as though he were lost in thought. After reflecting, Tony looked at Natasha's strikingly beautiful face and spoke softly, "If I provide the arc reactor for free, can I earn your friendship?" Tony's words caught Natasha off guard. She stared at him, surprised. It's unusual for someone like you to say something like that. Natasha already had a basic profile of Tony Stark in her mind. To her, he was easy to read: proud, domineering, flamboyant, high-profile, arrogant, and self-centered, with little regard for others. He was highly suspicious of anyone or anything unfamiliar. While Tony could be generous, he only extended that generosity to those who earned his approval and became true friends. This ordeal in the cave, Natasha guessed, would probably change some aspects of his personality, at least when it came to being more cautious about his safety. Despite having saved him, Natasha knew that her mysterious identity made it impossible for Tony to fully trust her. Even though she had openly stated that the rescue was simply a one-time deal, Tony wasn't likely to believe her completely. She even believed that although Tony might genuinely provide the arc reactor and not reveal her identity to the outside world or the military, he would almost certainly investigate things secretly. However, Tony made a risky decision that surprised her. Instead of keeping his distance, he sought to use this opportunity to forge a friendship with a mysterious organization, one that was far from ordinary. So, what drove Tony to make such a decision? With her sharp intelligence, Natasha quickly analyzed the situation from Tony's perspective. Given the circumstances, she could understand his reasoning. Deep down, he was still feeling unsettled. He had been abruptly kidnapped, and the military escort's movements had been compromised. The Jericho missiles, which were secretly developed for the military, had ended up in the hands of terrorists. Clearly, there was a traitor within Stark Industries, someone high-ranking, perhaps someone Tony didn't want to suspect. Moreover, the extraordinary abilities Natasha displayed proved to him that there were many powerful superhumans in the world, something he hadn't fully grasped until now. Tony realized that even if he returned home, his safety was not guaranteed. Before he could build a security defense network himself, he needed an external party to provide protection. Natasha, along with the organization behind her, seemed like the best option. At the very least, Natasha clearly wanted the arc reactor, and as long as that was the case, she would ensure nothing happened to Tony, the one who held the key to its technology. In this sense, they were natural allies. Of course, there was always the possibility that Natasha had other intentions. Still, Tony believed that as long as she didn't pose a threat to him now, she wouldn't in the near future. He was betting on this, and the odds were in his favor. Tony quickly assessed the situation, demonstrating a level of wisdom that Natasha acknowledged. She also gained deeper insight into his character. "You're very clever," Natasha said after a moment of thought. Then, she changed the subject. "So, what do you need from us?" Tony felt a bit more at ease after hearing those words. He was on the right track with his gamble. His gaze sharpened as he spoke seriously. "When I return, I'm going to announce the closure of the arms division. The Stark Industries will enter a period of turmoil, at least for a short while. During this turmoil, anyone could come after me or my people. Ordinary threats, I'm not worried about. But, you want us to protect you from people like me?" Natasha interrupted with a sly smile, her red lips curling up. "Exactly. I can handle regular business wars and corporate struggles, but when it comes to people like you, I'm not so sure," Tony admitted without hesitation. Normally, he wouldn't be concerned about his safety. As the director of Stark Industries and a billionaire, he had a solid security team, not just his trusted bodyguard Happy. If regular people tried to come after him, they wouldn't succeed. But individuals with unique powers, that was a different story. "How long?" Natasha asked, her eyes glinting. 6 months, Tony suggested. "Too long. Not possible," Natasha rejected immediately. 3 months, then, Tony countered without hesitation. 3 months would be enough for him to develop the technology he needed. By then, he would have the ability to protect himself. But could he really be confident about solving it all within that time? Natasha thought for a moment. 3 months wasn't a long period, and since it was in New York, there shouldn't be any major issues. She nodded and agreed. "All right. We'll keep an eye on you," quietly. "Thank you," Tony replied, smiling. "After I return, Stark Industries will deliver the first arc reactor, but it will take time to assemble." Despite the smile, Tony's curiosity about the woman in front of him and the organization behind her only deepened. How powerful must they be to have such confidence? Not long after, Tony finally returned to New York. Unsurprisingly, his return caused an uproar across the United States. Major media outlets rushed to New York, eager for a scoop on Tony Stark. Everyone was curious about what had happened to the billionaire during his kidnapping and, most importantly, who had rescued him. It wasn't just the news media. Numerous institutions, individuals, and departments with stakes in Stark Industries were closely monitoring the situation. Some were even beginning to make their own moves. But unexpectedly, as soon as Tony arrived back in New York, he held a press conference and made a huge announcement. At the Stark Industries press conference, Tony Stark made a solemn announcement. From now on, Stark Industries will be shutting down its arms division and will no longer be involved in weapons manufacturing. The room erupted in shock. Reporters from every major outlet shot up from their seats, rushing to the front of the room, shouting questions at the top of their lungs. "Mr. Stark, why did you make this decision? Does the board of directors support it? Mr. Stark, will closing the arms division cause irreversible harm to Stark Industries' future? Mr. Stark, now that you've exited the arms market, will Stark Industries pivot to other industries? Was this decision influenced by your kidnapping experience? Mr. Stark. The crowd buzzed with excitement and disbelief, but Tony, dressed in his signature suit and sunglasses, said nothing further. He had already explained his reasons for closing the arms division during the press conference, but he knew the reporters in the world wouldn't easily accept it. Not that it mattered to him. Without another word, he turned and left the stage, followed closely by his good friend Colonel Rhodes, his bodyguard Happy, and his assistant Pepper Potts. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane, bald and muscular, another board member of Stark Industries, remained behind. His face was a mask of forced calm as he struggled to contain his anger. Trying to smooth things over, he faced the reporters and offered them a strained smile while hurriedly answering their questions. Unfortunately, the closure of the arms division was inevitable. As the director of Stark Industries, Tony had the authority to make such a decision. Behind the crowd of reporters, a mysterious woman in a black trench coat, sunglasses, and burgundy curls sat calmly, observing the chaotic scene. She watched the man at the news desk, the so-called father of Stark Industries, with a faint smile on her lips. She murmured softly to herself, in a voice only she could hear, "Is it really you?" Though well hidden, the power struggles of wealthy families are always the same, full of hypocrisy, cunning, and bloodshed. She sighed. How dull. In the Stark Industries office, Obadiah furiously swept everything off his desk: papers, decorations, all of it. He looked like an enraged bull, gripping the desk with his chest heaving, his face twisted in anger, eyes bloodshot. "Tony Stark," he growled, "I've tolerated your recklessness again and again, but you've disappointed me beyond measure. You're just as arrogant as your father. I won't let you two father and son destroy all my hard work." "You should have died back there," he muttered darkly. "I didn't want to get my hands dirty, but you've left me no choice." His voice, dripping with murderous intent, echoed through the office. Obadiah's gaze fell on a photo of him and Tony, the only thing left standing on the desk. His eyes were cold, filled with resentment. "You foolish, arrogant, little piece of shit, you deserve what's coming." Outside a cafe on a New York street, Leon sat in a white shirt and sunglasses, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. On the table in front of him was an unopened cup of coffee, which seemed to be waiting for someone. His tall frame and striking demeanor had already caught the attention of a group of girls sitting nearby. Not far away, under a large billboard, a police car was parked. Two uniformed officers leaned against the car, casually chatting and drinking coffee. Moments later, the typical New York chaos unfolded. Bang, bang, bang. The unmistakable sound of gunfire echoed from a nearby street, followed by terrified screams. Panic spread as people ran in all directions. The two officers immediately tossed their coffee cups into the trash, jumped into their patrol car, switched on the sirens, and sped off toward the source of the commotion. Leon calmly set his phone down, his gaze following the police car. He knew what was happening. A classic bank robbery. Judging by the commotion, it seemed like a group of Hell's Kitchen gang members, probably strung out on drugs and desperate for cash, had once again decided to try their luck. If you ask him how he knew, well, it's simple. Having sharp insight means one glance is enough to see right through a situation, perhaps even through a person. Leon took a moment to admire the daring robbers from his spot, but he didn't budge, as if he were just watching another typical New York street performance. "Help out, please." He had no intention of playing superhero. Besides, it was a bank robbery. The ones losing out were capitalists. He might even cheer them on if they weren't so messy about it. The situation, however, was escalating quickly. The robbers had pulled out heavy firepower, clearly losing control. In response, the police station had deployed a large number of armed officers. Nearby, bullets flew, and several police cars were blown up in the chaos. Yet on Leon's side of the street, people continued sipping their coffee, barely paying attention. It was as if this level of mayhem was just another day in New York City, a city known for having simple folks. Just as Leon was enjoying the spectacle, he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and looked up the street. Sure enough, there was a figure in red and blue tights, swinging from a tall building on spider silk, speeding toward the scene of the crime. As the figure drew closer, the crowd below erupted in excitement. "Look, it's Spider-Boy. It's that damn bug again. Last time he caught a robber, he nearly wrecked my store. It's Spider-Man, Mom, look, he's going to stop the crime. Yo-ho." As if hearing the comments from below, the young Spider-Man swung around the high-rise, letting out an excited roar, much like Tarzan. Finally, Spider-Man leapt from a height of several stories, descending toward the bank robbers below. When it comes to power, if you have money, you rely on technology. If you don't, you rely on mutation. As a prime example of the latter, Spider-Man's strength is simply overwhelming by human standards. His arm strength is in the tens of tons, he can outrun a sports car, and his spider sense gives him near-perfect awareness. The robbers didn't stand a chance. Within moments, they were subdued, tied up in webbing like a display piece. The police watched, visibly displeased, as Spider-Man swung around, talking about being New York's friendly neighborhood hero. His flashy style nearly made a few of the younger officers want to draw their guns. Though Spider-Man's presence reduced the casualty rate and boosted arrests, it also diminished the role of the police. With tensions already high between law enforcement and the public, there were even growing calls in Congress to defund the police. There's no doubt Spider-Man, with all his heroics, was not only undermining the police but also potentially threatening their livelihood, one reason why many officers were deeply unhappy with him. Of course, this had nothing to do with Leon. He merely observed that the little spider had grown much stronger compared to the previous movies. He no longer faced the classic scenes of being knocked down by ordinary criminals. It makes sense. Even though Spider-Man's fighting skills aren't exceptional, his spider sense and powerful physical instincts allow him to react perfectly to any attack. Ordinary people can't hurt Spider-Man, even at close range. Not bad, Peter Parker, Leon mused. He had a good opinion of the young hero. Spider-Man is often regarded as Marvel's last remaining character with real heart, and that reputation isn't unfounded. At least this version of Spider-Man isn't the reckless kid from the future who would one day create 3 parallel universes. But while Spider-Man may be cool now, the future holds significant challenges for him. The biggest threat comes from the Morlun family, a group that specializes in hunting down Spider-Man and absorbing the power of his spider totem. According to an ancient family prophecy, Spider-Man is destined to destroy them, so they began hunting Spider-Men across various dimensions to consume their souls, growing stronger in the process. This family is no pushover either. They once defeated Cosmic Spider-Man, although part of that was due to Cosmic Spider-Man being heavily nerfed by the writers. But these things are far off, and Leon's attention isn't on them right now. To him, they're just walking gene pools. However, Spider-Man has great potential. Since Leon plans to establish his own organization, Spider-Man is certainly within high scope of consideration. As for whether or not he will bring him in, Leon plans to think it over. After the bank robbery drama ended, the nearby streets grew quiet again. Leon picked up his coffee and took a sip. Not far away, a graceful woman in a black trench coat and sunglasses approached. She sat down in the chair opposite him. Her signature burgundy curly hair fluttered gently in the breeze, and although her sunglasses partially obscured her face, they couldn't hide her beauty. The nearby girls, who had gathered up the courage to make friends with Leon, sighed in disappointment. Natasha glanced around, noticing the girls secretly looking over. With a half smile, she said, "It seems my appearance has dashed the hopes of quite a few girls." "They'll forget soon enough," Leon replied, his expression unchanged as he looked at the striking woman in front of him. Natasha wasn't sure if that was truly the nature of girls, but she didn't argue. "Did you fall for that little spider just now?" Natasha asked, not teasing but shifting the conversation. She had clearly noticed the bank robbery earlier. Leon shook his head slightly. "That kid is different from us." As he said this, it was clear he wasn't interested in bringing Spider-Man into their circle, at least not for the time being. His decision was based on Spider-Man's personality and experiences. Leon, Natasha, and Wanda all had one thing in common, a tragic past. Each of them had faced darkness at a young age, experiencing the harsh realities of the world. Because of this, they now lived only for themselves and their chosen family, with Leon at the center. Though they were inherently kind-hearted, even with powers far beyond those of ordinary people, they didn't feel the need to flaunt their abilities recklessly or impose their will on others. They showed compassion when dealing with everyday people. However, when it came to enemies, once someone was marked as a threat, there was no hesitation. Man, woman, young, or old, they would be eliminated. The only thing they truly cared about was each other and their family. They had lost family members before, which made them value their relationships with each other even more than most people. Anyone who threatened to destroy that bond would see their kindness stripped away, revealing a fierce, blood-stained resolve. But Spider-Man was different. He was too kind, so much so that when bonded with the Venom symbiote, the darkest part of him only sought a raise from his boss and the chance to dance in the street. This stark difference in mindset was why Spider-Man wasn't like them. He didn't walk the same path. Because of that, Leon would consider bringing Spider-Man into their circle, but only if the young hero faced a life-threatening crisis. "Impressive kid," Natasha remarked, having noticed it too. She then glanced at the phone on Leon's desk. The screen displayed Tony Stark's press conference. "You saw it?" she asked. "Uh-huh," Leon responded. "You don't seem surprised by his decision." "I'm not," Leon said, shaking his head with a small laugh. When someone's been kidnapped and out of touch with society for months, you can't be shocked by what they do when they come back. "So, did he agree to our deal?" "Yes. He's using all future arc reactors as bargaining chips in exchange for our friendship and for us to secretly protect him for 3 months. "Sounds like something he'd do," Leon mused. "It seems he's very interested in you or us." Leon immediately understood Tony's intentions. "Indeed, that's why I agreed," Natasha said. "Then I'll leave the trouble to you," Leon chuckled. Natasha rolled her eyes, annoyed. "You're really an unscrupulous capitalist. Maybe I should hire a group of robbers to steal from you." Just make sure the robbers you hire are stronger, Leon replied nonchalantly. Natasha glared at him but then frowned and asked, we've made a deal with Tony, but what are you going to do about Wanda and Pietro? Wanda and Pietro had moved on from their darker days in recent years, but that didn't mean they'd given up on the idea of revenge against Tony Stark. When Leon arrived in New York, the twins were already contemplating how to get their revenge. They just hadn't expected Tony to get kidnapped. Now that Leon had made a deal with Tony, Natasha knew the twins wouldn't hesitate to put aside their grudge because of their loyalty to Leon. But she also knew Leon well enough to realize he wouldn't make that choice lightly, especially when his family had been wronged. What will you do? She asked, her curiosity piqued. I won't deny my family their justice. If Wanda and Pietro want revenge, I won't stop them, Leon shrugged. And I believe Wanda will find a way to get what we need when the time comes. It's up to her how she wants to handle it. That's really your style, Natasha said, her red lips curling into a smile. Leon's character was distinct. The way he approached things, especially regarding family, always felt reassuring and never disappointing. Natasha felt the same. She didn't care who Tony was, billionaire, genius scientist. If Wanda wanted revenge, she could break Tony's hands and feet without hesitation and throw him at her feet. That guy must be working on something big in these 3 months, Natasha mused. In 3 months, what could he possibly do to give him the confidence to face any crisis or conspiracy? What do you think? Leon raised an eyebrow. Armor, Natasha replied. In the cave, I saw what he built. It's hard to imagine that, in such conditions, he could construct that massive thing and even shrink the arc reactor. He's truly a genius. Tony might have thought Natasha didn't notice everything while she was rescuing him. But in reality, even before her physical enhancements, Natasha had been a top spy, skilled in visual capture and analysis. Although things in the corner of the cave were covered, the commotion from Natasha violently opening the iron door revealed enough clues. She immediately noticed the partially covered rags and wires connecting it to the arc reactor on Tony's chest, which was powering something much larger. It wasn't hard to guess what that big thing was. Natasha's praise of Tony as a genius on the plane had been a double entendre. Then we'll see what fate has in store for him, Leon said, taking a sip of his coffee. Will it be death or rebirth? Leon was also curious about what Wanda would choose, what path her future destiny would take. He found himself looking forward to it. Natasha narrowed her bright eyes slightly. It was the first time she had seen him like this. It seemed the playboy was more important to him than she had thought. In a small Texas town, the population was sparse, and it lacked the hustle and bustle of a big city. But it had the charm of the Texan countryside: shrubs, forests, and rivers, neatly arranged flower beds, cobblestone paths, and quaint buildings on either side. In the distance, cowboys rode horses and herded cattle on the vast grasslands. Everything seemed calm and peaceful. But if you thought the people here were friendly, you'd be wrong. Anger a local, and you might find a redneck pulling out his long shotgun, aiming it at your crotch with a crazed grin. This is Texas. At least, that's what Wanda and Pietro thought, as they had encountered such things more than once. Of course, it was either a robbery or an attempted one. After all, Wanda had blossomed since she was a little girl, becoming more beautiful and charming. But people often overlook one important thing. Sometimes, the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it becomes. There was no need for Sergei to intervene. Wanda could handle it all on her own. With just one look, she could tamper with someone's will, making them find a quiet place to end their own life. In a small-town restaurant, Wanda, Sergei, and Pietro sat eating. The restaurant's TV was broadcasting the news, but the sight of it soured the twins' appetite. Wanda and Pietro stared at the screen with cold eyes, while even Sergei frowned, remaining silent. Tisk, let's deal with him later, Pietro muttered, cracking his neck, his displeasure clear. Wanda's breathing grew heavier as Tony Stark's face on the screen brought back memories of the tragedy that had struck them when she was 10 years old. Both of them were clearly in a bad mood. Just then, Wanda's phone rang. She pulled it out to answer, and Leon's voice came through the speaker. Wanda. Hey, Leon, Wanda replied softly. You're aware of this, right? Wanda glanced at Pietro and Sergei across from her and said coldly, that guy is back. It was me who asked Natasha to get him out, Leon replied. Leon's words didn't unsettle Wanda. Years of trust had built between them, and she considered Leon family. She listened quietly as H. explained how the Sky Fortress and the arc reactor were part of the deal Tony had made with him. After everything was explained, Leon's gentle voice continued, we all support your decision, Wanda. He paused briefly before adding, oh, and Pietro too. Across from her, Pietro curled his lips, pretending not to hear. Leon tilde, Wanda murmured, her mood lifting despite her earlier frustration about Tony still being alive. What made her even happier was that Leon continued to treat her and Pietro just like always. This was what family meant to her. She took a deep breath and whispered, we can let go, Wanda tilde, Leon interrupted, his voice serious. Although we've never made any formal promises, I will always support you. A mere transaction doesn't mean anything. It's not worth you giving up your revenge. Even compared to your bad mood for a day, it's not worth it, Leon continued. I just want to tell you, if you decide to take revenge, go ahead and do it. I get it, Leon, Wanda replied. Their conversation was brief, but after hanging up, Wanda and Pietro both felt their earlier frustration ease. Wow, Texas food is really good, Sergei remarked, clearly more relaxed now as he shifted the subject. Pietro cut into his steak with a knife and fork, remarking, well, it's a little worse than what we cook. Despite his words, he continued to eat enthusiastically. He couldn't help it, his time spent homeless and subjected to experiments had left him with an unforgettable appreciation for food. Unless something was absolutely inedible, he always made sure to finish his meal. In fact, this was a habit the entire family shared. Okay, we've followed the clues to this place, but his location keeps changing. Could he be avoiding us? Wanda asked, putting down her finished plate and pulling out a tablet from her bag, looking slightly frustrated. The three of them had come to Texas to track down the flaming skeleton guy who rode a ghost-faced Harley. But ever since they left Houston, finding this figure hadn't been easy. Their target seemed to move unpredictably with no clear route. Additionally, most of the time, he left at night, moving so quickly that the three of them couldn't keep up in their car. Who knows, but this guy is seriously cool, he's so badass, Pietro commented, and even Sergei nodded in agreement. After all, it's hard not to be impressed by a guy in black leather armor, leather pants, with a flaming skull, riding a ghost-faced Harley through the night. Wanda rolled her eyes, clearly not sharing the boy's admiration for this strange aesthetic. Seeing Wanda's look, Pietro quickly lowered his head and focused on his food, while Sergei coughed awkwardly and shifted to a more serious tone. Whether he's avoiding us or not, we can't seem to analyze his route, and he moves really fast. He can cover several cities in a single night, Sergei added. This is really a problem. I don't think we'll be able to track him without flying over in my fighter jet, Wanda muttered thoughtfully, her voice lowered as she glanced around the room. But something feels off, she said suddenly. Off. Pietro and Sergei immediately became alert. Given Wanda's unique abilities, especially her enhanced intuition, if she sensed something wrong, there was definitely a reason for concern. Even out of caution, they knew they had to stay vigilant. What is it? Pietro asked. Wanda shook her head. I can't tell. I feel a sense of something being off. It's as if, besides us, there's something else tracking that skeleton guy. Something else? Pietro raised an eyebrow. Yeah, Wanda replied. I don't think it's human. Plus, there seems to be another group involved, but I'm not sure who they are. That sounds interesting. Seems like that guy's caught the attention of a lot of people. Pietro popped the last piece of steak into his mouth, wiped his lips with a napkin, and leaned back in his chair with a look of amusement. Looks like we've got plenty to deal with. So, what's the plan now? Sergei asked, tapping the table lightly with his index finger. The biggest issue is if this guy is just wandering aimlessly. We won't be able to predict his next move, Pietro added, running his hands through his hair in frustration. We don't actually need to rush, Wanda said, her eyes gleaming with a quiet confidence. Since we can't catch him right now, we can just slow down and keep following. When the final scene is ready to play out, that's when we'll make our move. In a remote Texas town, under the night sky, the bright moon illuminated the city. Yet, the entire place seemed cast in a darker tone, giving it an eerie, gloomy atmosphere. The stillness of the night was suddenly shattered by wild laughter echoing through the empty streets. Inside an abandoned factory, a middle-aged man wearing a black leather jacket and pants writhed in agony, clutching his head. His face was twisted in pain, yet uncontrollable laughter escaped his lips. Sparks flickered across his body, corroding his flesh, as his human face shifted intermittently with that of a skull. Finally, with a loud bang, red-hot flames erupted from his head, consuming him entirely. His body transformed into a skeleton, its hollow eyes glowing with a faint, hellish fire. He twisted his neck, glancing at the chain hanging from a steel beam above him, as if spotting the perfect weapon. With a swift motion, he stretched out a skeletal hand, grabbing the chain and pulling it down with a crash. The chain came loose with a violent clatter, and as he swung it over his shoulder, it wrapped around his body, moving as though it had a life of its own. Now armed, the Ghost Rider raised his glowing eyes, staring into the distance. His voice echoed like a sound from the depths of hell. I smell sin. Like a hunter locked onto its prey, the Ghost Rider approached the classic Harley parked nearby. His terrifying skeletal fingers brushed slowly over the motorcycle. As hellfire roared, the bike twisted and transformed, finally morphing into a skull-faced motorcycle that looked as if it had been forged by the devil himself. With a single motion, he mounted the bike. Rumble. The engine roared to life like a wild beast. As the tires skidded against the ground, smoke and sparks filled the air. The wheels began to glow, and then ignite. Bang. A sonic boom reverberated as the Ghost Rider rocketed out of the factory, leaving cracked pavement and a trail of flames in his wake. It was none other than the Ghost Rider. His speed kept increasing as he rode down the road, one hand gripping the handlebars, the other swinging the chain. His maniacal laughter echoed through the city streets. Along the way, parked cars, street lights, and billboards melted like wax as the motorcycle blazed past. Even a stray cat evaporated in the heat, leaving behind only its charred skeleton. The Ghost Rider tore through the city, wreaking havoc with every mile. After an unknown amount of time, he finally slowed down on a dark and deserted street. His ears pricked up, his laughter fading, for the Ghost Rider had found his prey. These prey had strong bodies, like wild beasts, with golden hair cascading down their shoulders. Dressed in thin vests, veins bulged from their muscles, radiating a fierce and violent aura. One of them was a woman with blue skin, her emerald green pupils glowing like a cat's eyes in the dark, giving her an eerie, ghostly appearance. Next to her stood a young boy, his face still immature, dotted with freckles, but filled with a rebellious expression. The leader, wearing a brown helmet, a matching cape, black armor, and boots, stood apart. His wrinkled face didn't make him seem old, instead, it exuded a unique sense of authority and dominance, especially from the sharp look in his eyes. "Hey, that's cool. I like his outfit. Is this who we're looking for?" the young man asked, glancing at the skeleton knight, twisting his neck as if eager for a fight. "He's the hell-born skeleton knight that's been causing rumors across Texas lately," the blue-skinned woman said, frowning slightly. "But is he really a mutant?" "A very interesting boy, Raven. Whether he's a mutant or not, he pleases me," the old man said softly. These four individuals were none other than Magneto, Mystique, Sabretooth, and John, a former student of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, members of the Brotherhood of Mutants. John had an extremely irritable and unstable personality, likely due to the influence of his abilities. He grew dissatisfied when the teachers at Xavier's School discouraged students from abusing their powers. After the Stryker incident, he met Magneto, and after speaking with him, John was captivated by Magneto's domineering attitude and his belief in mutant supremacy. This led John to run away from the school and join Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants. This was also the reason behind his first mission with the Brotherhood, to find and recruit a flaming skeleton to their cause. Needless to say, John, with his rebellious nature, found the flaming skeleton incredibly cool. Magneto, along with the others, stepped forward to speak, but the skeleton knight spoke first. Sitting on his motorcycle, he pointed a skeletal finger at Magneto, and a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of hell rumbled out, "You are guilty. Bloodstained, with innocent souls on your hands, you belong in hell." Boom. Before anyone could react, the skeleton knight tore the flaming chains from his body and snapped them towards Magneto and the others. The chains, burning with hellfire, slithered like venomous serpents toward their target. Magneto's eyes flashed coldly. He was Magneto, master of metal. In an instant, he activated his power, intending to control the chains. But in the next moment, his expression shifted. Magneto realized that he couldn't control them. But the burning chain was already flying toward them. Fortunately, Magneto had been through countless battles. Despite the unexpected situation, he activated his powers in an instant. With a swift motion, he stretched out his hand, and the billboards on both sides of the road suddenly cracked and broke apart. The chain whizzed by, but before it could strike, the fragments of the billboards shot forward, pinning the chain to the ground with precision. Though the hellfire on the chain started to melt the billboards, it managed to delay the skeleton knight from retrieving the chain for a moment. Magneto clenched his fist lightly. Boom. In an instant, the entire stretch of highway seemed to warp. The parked cars, street lamps, and every metal object nearby were immediately broken down into countless fine metal particles. The particles swirled together, forming a deadly cloud. Magneto suddenly spread his fists, turning them into open palms and thrusting them downward. The metal particles transformed into a barrage of spears, roaring like a violent storm as they shot toward the skeleton knight. Boom, boom, boom. Not far away, on the rooftop of a small bungalow bathed in moonlight, three figures stood silently watching the Ghost Rider, trapped by the metal spears on the street below. With her striking red coat and flowing hair, it was none other than the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff. Beside her were Pietro and Sergei, keeping a vigilant watch. "This guy only shows up at night. If we hadn't hacked the surveillance networks of several nearby cities, he'd be impossible to track," Pietro said, crossing his arms, the hem of his coat fluttering in the breeze. Though he made it sound simple, the task had been anything but. Thankfully, Natasha had provided some remote assistance. Without her, they wouldn't have been able to hack into multiple city surveillance systems. The three of them simply lacked the technical expertise to pull off such a feat on their own. Despite how easily it's depicted in movies, hacking a city's surveillance network is no small feat. The United States, famous for its Matrix-level monitoring systems, leads the world in network surveillance. Considerable manpower, resources, and funds have been invested in these systems for strategic purposes. And a network security department had been established to attract the world's top experts and design a specialized firewall. But there was always a way around it, especially when you knew someone like Natasha. Natasha didn't need to be an expert in finding vulnerabilities. Instead of attacking the system directly, she simply bypassed the firewall and found a backdoor, a network loophole. This kind of backdoor wasn't an uncommon feature in the United States, where agencies like the FBI and CIA often resorted to methods that weren't exactly legal or publicized. These backdoors were an unspoken agreement between certain departments, making covert access easier for those in the know. Thanks to this, the three of them were able to locate the skeleton knight fairly quickly. What they didn't anticipate, however, was that Wanda's earlier feeling had been right. Magneto, the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants, was also hunting for the skeleton knight, clearly drawn to him just as they were. By the way, this guy is a skeleton now, how are we supposed to draw blood from him? Pietro asked with a smirk, clearly enjoying his own joke. Wanda rolled her eyes, too tired to entertain his nonsense. Sergei, meanwhile, focused on the scene below. The skeleton knight was trapped by Magneto's spears, pinned to the ground. Sergei frowned. This guy gives me a really bad feeling. He doesn't seem like a creature from Earth. Is he a mutant? No, Wanda's eyes flashed red. From her perspective, she could see that the skeleton knight had two different souls, one human, the other from somewhere else, filled with violence. He's human, but also from hell. Hell? Sergei asked, raising an eyebrow. There's a strange coincidence, Wanda continued, between this person and the time and place Mephisto appeared. Pietro and Sergei exchanged glances, the realization dawning on them. Pietro spoke in a low voice, he's directly connected to Mephisto. Indeed, when they had arrived in Texas 2 days ago, they had a brief encounter with Mephisto, even fighting him. And now, this skeleton knight had appeared in the same area. His timing and fact that he carried a soul from hell were no mere coincidence. It all pointed to Mephisto. Sergei rubbed his chin, thoughtful. Mephisto still isn't giving up on Earth. Is he trying to plant a foothold here? He can't come to Earth directly, Pietro said nonchalantly. We just need to get this guy's blood. Wanda nodded in agreement. They didn't have the luxury to worry about Mephisto's grander schemes, as long as they weren't directly affected. Whatever Mephisto planned wasn't their concern for now. Wait, he's fighting back, Pietro noted, raising an eyebrow. Down below, the skeleton knight, pinned to the ground by Magneto's metal spears, began to stir. Blazing flames erupted from his hollow eyes, and suddenly, the fire spread along his body to the spears. In mere moments, the metal spears began to melt, the speed of the melting beyond what anyone had anticipated. Magneto's expression hardened. Something was off about the flames. Logically, with Magneto's control over the magnetic field, he should have been able to manipulate the metal, even in its molten state. But now, the molten metal was beyond his control. The issue had to be the fire itself, much like his earlier inability to control the chains. A very impressive power. Magneto couldn't help but admire. The flames interfered with his abilities. Whether this figure was a mutant or not, Magneto wanted to recruit him. The skeleton knight would make the perfect enforcer for his brotherhood, a Judgment Knight, to carry out his will. But given how unruly the knight had been, Magneto knew he'd need to show his strength, to overwhelm the rider with sheer power and make him understand the greatness of the one he'd follow. Boom! Without wasting another moment, Magneto acted. Stretching his hands toward the ground, the entire city seemed to shake. The ground quaked violently, as if something monstrous was about to be unleashed. Initially, John, the pyro, was eager to impress. Seeing the skeleton knight play with fire ignited a competitive streak in him. He'd always prided himself on his own abilities and wanted to show off in front of Magneto. But the moment he saw Magneto unleash his terrifying power, the sheer force nearly suffocated him. John had never witnessed anything like this. His face went pale in an instant. Mystique, Magneto's oldest follower, quickly grasped what was happening. She saw the air around Magneto almost warp from the pressure he was generating and immediately understood his intentions. Without hesitation, she stepped back. The Sabretooth, just as perceptive, followed suit. But John, frozen in place, remained rooted to the spot. Mystique chuckled and gave him a gentle reminder, John, I think you should step back. Eric's about to show off for our new recruit. Snapping out of his daze, John swallowed his panic and admiration, retreating to a safer distance. The entire street's magnetic field shifted, expanding outward and even affecting the surrounding city. Magneto began to float, metal debris rising from the ground and swirling into a chaotic storm of particles. His power was immense, and he wielded it without regard for the city's safety, unleashing devastation. The night sky above was soon obscured by the torrent of metal, blocking out the moon and stars. Panic spread through the city below as people screamed and ran in terror. Magneto couldn't care less about the frightened humans. His sole concern was the supremacy of mutants. If necessary, he would destroy the entire city to prove his point. From the sky, his deep voice echoed like that of a god, booming over the chaos below as he stared down at the skeleton knight. Surrender to me, Magneto commanded, and I will lead you to greatness. We should not hide in the shadows of lesser humans, nor skulk in darkness like rats. We can declare our strength to the world. Join us, and this will be the wisest decision you ever make. His words carried all the authority and domination of a god, inspiring reverence in those who followed him. Mystique, Sabretooth, and even the newly recruited Pyro looked up in awe, their eyes reflecting Magneto's grandeur. This was why they followed him. They believed in their inherent superiority, that they were born powerful, destined to rise above humanity. But the skeleton knight was unmoved. He lifted his skull-like head, his hollow eyes burning with hellfire. His voice was low and hoarse as he pointed a skeletal finger at Magneto in the sky. You should go to hell. Magneto's expression turned icy. Arrogance and stupidity, he muttered, raising his right hand and pressing it down slowly. Boom! In an instant, the entire street's gravity shifted. A crushing force slammed into the ground, causing it to cave inward. The skeleton knight and his hellish motorcycle were pressed downward by the immense pressure, forcing him to his knees. He struggled to stay upright, his skeletal hands barely holding him off the ground. The hellfire in his eye sockets flickered, sometimes dimming, sometimes blazing, as he fought against the weight crushing him. His transformation was suppressed by the overwhelming external force, and the flaming skeleton form vanished. Above Magneto, the torrent of metal particles swirled dangerously, ready to engulf the entire block at any moment, fully showcasing the power of one of the most formidable mutants. Watching from a rooftop nearby, Wanda, Pietro, and Sergei couldn't help but be impressed. Holy crap, I can't handle this guy, Pietro muttered, feeling the weight of Magneto's power. His scalp tingled with unease, especially since the ability to manipulate gravity with a mere gesture seemed to directly counter his own speed. Sergei frowned, sensing the difficulty of the situation. He glanced at Wanda. What do you think? Do we stand a chance of stealing him away from Magneto? Wanda's jewel-like eyes reflected Magneto's hovering figure. After a brief moment, she responded, it's hard to say. His power is undeniable. At this level, he's developed his ability to a terrifying degree. Maybe if we combine chaos magic with Pietro's speed, we might have a chance. Then let's do it, Pietro said, determined. Not like we can call the boss for help, anyway. Calm down, Wanda said coolly. Let's talk to him first. She glanced down at the street, where the skeleton knight was no longer able to hold out. The flames in his skull had been extinguished by Magneto's power, and he had reverted to his human form. Magneto, satisfied, descended slowly as the gravity returned to normal. Without the crushing pressure, the man lay on the ground, gasping for air, his face etched with confusion. His name was Jonathan Blaze, also known as Johnny, just an ordinary stunt driver. But a few days ago, he had begun to feel as though a second personality had taken control. At night, he would lose his flesh and blood, transforming into a flaming skeleton knight that roamed the city streets, passing judgment and burning the souls of the guilty. Terrified, Johnny fled the city, attempting to escape to the wilderness. But no matter how far he went, that soul still controlled him, always driving him back. It was torture. Tonight, out of control once again, he found himself transformed, the soul of the skeleton knight sensing the presence of Magneto, the most wanted mutant in America. The good news was that Magneto had the strength to suppress the cursed soul within him. The bad news was that Magneto now stood before him, intent on forcing him to become his subordinate. With a weary sigh, Johnny struggled to his feet, glancing up at the terror-inducing figure of Magneto. If I told you I can't control my body, would you believe me? Magneto nodded. I believe you. After abilities awaken, the stronger they are, the harder they are to control. I can help you master it quickly. The condition is that you let me join you. Good. But do you really think I'm a mutant? This other consciousness, it just came out of nowhere. I think only a mutant could explain your current situation, Magneto said, looking at Johnny with certainty. In his mind, that was the only explanation. After all, how else could an ordinary human suddenly turn into a flaming skeleton? Johnny had no choice. The ocean of metal swirling ominously above threatened to crush him if he didn't agree. Pressed by the situation, he resigned himself to fate, hoping that Magneto could truly help him control this curse. Just as Johnny was about to agree to join the Brotherhood, Magneto's expression froze. Mystique, standing behind him, noticed something too, while Pyro, overreacting, triggered the flame device on his wrist. Pyro's flames exploded into a monstrous fire dragon, hurtling down the street. Boom! The searing fire distorted the air, and its red glow illuminated the night. Johnny, eyes wide, turned to witness a jaw-dropping sight. On a nearby rooftop, 3 figures leapt down from a height of over 10 meters as if it was nothing. But what truly shocked Johnny was that when the fire tornado threatened to engulf them, the girl in the lead, with beautiful, slightly curly dark blonde hair, calmly raised her hand. A surge of red energy enveloped the blazing inferno, and with a gentle clench of her fist, the fire tornado dissolved into harmless sparks. Under the shimmering sparks, the 3 figures walked forward, unfazed. Johnny was speechless, feeling as though his life had taken yet another surreal turn. In just a few days, he had met more people with powers than he could have imagined. Magneto, however, was thrilled. He saw the girl extinguish Pyro's flames and recognized that more mutants had appeared, young ones, too. His heart leapt with excitement. Such talent had to be brought into the Brotherhood. He couldn't let them go. While Magneto plotted, Pyro, on the other hand, was furious. He had always prided himself on being the strongest among mutants his age, and now this girl had easily snuffed out his fire. His temper flared, and he prepared to ignite his flames once again. But before he could act, Wanda, the girl who had extinguished his fire, turned to him. Her eyes flashed with icy coldness, and her voice rang out, sharp and clear, "Do you want to die?" "What did you say?" Pyro barked, though his heart skipped a beat at the murderous intent in her gaze. Anger overtook fear, and he raised his hand. Bang! His movement stopped suddenly, as a sword pressed against his neck, drawing a thin red line. A calm voice came from beside him. Move, and you die. The looming threat of death gripped Pyro, freezing him in place. The once arrogant and unruly wild child now stood frozen, subdued, like a meek lamb under the blade. Nearby, Mystique and Sabretooth reacted immediately. Sabretooth, snarling like a wild beast, lunged at Sergei. But before he could reach him, red energy pillars of chaos magic materialized out of thin air, crossing over each other to form a cage, imprisoning the furious creature. Sabretooth roared angrily and tried to tear open the cage with his claws, but unfortunately, his strength couldn't shake the chaos magic at all. Mystique, who had initially planned to join in, glanced at Wanda, the girl who had stretched out her hand to cast the magic. Their eyes met, and Mystique shrugged, understanding the situation. She stood down without further action. Interesting ability, Mystique muttered. Meanwhile, Johnny Blaze was frozen in fear, shocked by how quickly the battle had ended. Across from him, Magneto was Alred. Applauding, clearly impressed. Whether it was Sergei's speed, which was too fast for the naked eye to follow, or Wanda's flawless energy manipulation, both had earned his admiration. Even though the young man standing beside Wanda hadn't acted, Magneto was certain he wasn't weak. After all, the strong do not associate with the weak. That was a principle Magneto firmly believed in. Despite being momentarily restrained, Magneto wasn't angry. He could tell that the three before him didn't harbor any real malice. Their actions were simply to prevent further fighting. Looking at Wanda with a smile of approval, he said, "It seems today will give me some pleasant dreams." "Are you mutants as well?" Magneto asked. "Not sure," Wanda replied with a slight shake of her head. She and Pietro had often wondered whether they were mutants because of their special abilities. But to Leon and others, it never mattered. Whether they were mutants or not, they were family, and that was what counted. As a result, Wanda and Pietro had never dwelled on the question. As for Wanda's chaos magic, Leon had once explained that it came from a very ancient and powerful being. However, he hadn't revealed who or what that being was, only assuring them that it wasn't a problem. If any issues arose, Leon had promised he would deal with them in due time. Magneto, interpreting Wanda's response in his own way, assumed the three were indeed mutants. His mood brightened further, pleased at the thought of his growing mutant family. With a newfound sense of warmth, he addressed them in a gentle tone, almost like an affectionate uncle. "What are your names?" he asked. "Wanda, Pietro, Sergei." "All right then, Wanda," Magneto began, his tone passionate. "You must have heard what I said earlier. We are born to be united. Together, we will become the new humans and rule this world." He was trying to use his charisma and persuasive words to win over the three juniors with such remarkable abilities. However, Wanda and Pietro exchanged a glance, their expressions slightly awkward. Pietro shrugged and said, "Well, Mr. Eric, we respect your beliefs and won't interfere with them, but we already have a family and are happy with our current lives. So, I don't see a reason to join your brotherhood." Pietro's straightforward response caused Magneto to pause, his high spirits dampened. Had he really failed? He thought to himself. Are young people this hard to sway these days? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Frowning, Magneto looked at the twins and lowered his voice. "Then why did you appear before me? If you're not here to stop me from destroying the city, that seems absurd." "Not at all," Wanda replied without hesitation. She gestured toward Johnny Blaze. "We're only here to collect a bit of this gentleman's blood." Blood? Magneto's and Mystique's expressions changed instantly. Suspicion filled their minds. If Johnny was also a mutant, why did they need his blood? Was it for some sort of experiment? Both Magneto and Mystique had experienced the horrors of cruel experiments conducted on mutants in the past. That history was one of the reasons they had founded the Brotherhood to overthrow the human governments that enabled such atrocities. As these dark thoughts surfaced, Magneto's once pleased expression turned grim. Boom! The metal storm swirling above began to grow more turbulent, reflecting Magneto's darkening mood. The sudden shift caused renewed panic in the city, with citizens screaming in fear. From distant streets, the wailing of sirens echoed as the authorities responded to the chaos. Yet, neither Wanda nor Magneto paid the commotion any mind. Their gazes were locked. Magneto stared at Wanda's delicate face, his voice tense. "Why do you need his blood?" "I don't know," Wanda answered without hesitation, "but he needs it." The flames of Magneto's suspicion and anger flared even higher. He began to believe that Wanda was being manipulated, perhaps by some scheming figure, possibly from the human government, to turn against her own kind. Suppressing his growing rage, Magneto spoke softly, "Can you tell me who he is? Is he with the government? Why does he need the blood? Is it for experiments?" A torrent of questions followed, one after another. Wanda remained calm. She thought for a moment before replying, "He is my family, the foundation of this entire family. I can assure you, Mr. Eric, we mean no harm to mutants." "I want to believe you," Magneto said seriously, "but if I don't get a clear answer, I won't let you take the blood of any mutant. My child, I've seen too many horrors. Every time I think of it, it's a nightmare. And every time I wake from it, I want to send all those damned monsters to hell." Johnny was slightly moved. For all of Magneto's strength and dominance, he clearly had a soft spot for protecting his own. Wanda and Pietro also felt a flicker of empathy. They too had been part of that world once, before Leon had changed their fates at the base. As the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, Wanda spoke softly, "Mr. Eric, I think you still remember the incident with Stryker and his experiments at the base, don't you?" At the mention of Stryker, Magneto stiffened. Then, realization dawned on him. "You were involved in that?" "Yes," Wanda confirmed. "Pietro, Sergei, and I all went through what you described. That's why we hate them as well." As she spoke, Wanda walked toward Johnny, taking a syringe from her waist. When Johnny looked hesitant, she smiled softly before gently injecting it into his arm. Magneto watched with a conflicted expression, frowning, torn between his instincts, but ultimately deciding not to intervene. Join P-Trian if you want. P-Trian Com GreekGreenGlass Chapter 17. After Wanda collected the blood sample, she placed it back in her pocket and looked at Magneto. "Mr. Eric, as a token of appreciation, I can offer you a word of advice," she said. "Oh," Magneto responded, "the other consciousness inside this gentleman doesn't come from this world. It's linked to a very ancient being. You might want to keep an eye on that," Wanda said, nodding slightly toward Sergei in the distance. With that, Sergei lowered his crossed sword and walked over to Wanda. She waved her hand, and in the blink of an eye, their figures blurred and disappeared. Just as mysteriously as they had arrived, they left with equal grace. Magneto and Mystique were left astonished by the display. Mystique turned to Magneto, frowning. "Eric," she began, "it seems our knight has many secrets. Is this truly a consciousness from another world?" Magneto, no fool, understood the implications of Wanda's words. He glanced at Johnny, who looked utterly bewildered. The sound of sirens grew louder. Mystique, glancing around, said, "We need to go, Eric." "Yes," Magneto agreed. He glanced at the disheartened Pyro, and a slight smile tugged at his lips. The commotion had caused major damage to the city, with metal torn from underground structures, leaving a mess that would cost the government heavily. But Magneto had no intention of cleaning up after himself. This conflict with the US government was just one more in their long history of disputes. Meanwhile, Wanda, Sergei, and Pietro returned to New York. By the time they arrived at their manor, it was early morning. After a quick bath, they enjoyed a delicious and healthy breakfast prepared by the manor's chefs. Aside from Wanda, the rest of the family hadn't returned yet, leaving the four younger ones at the table with Leon. During breakfast, the children were especially curious about Wanda's trip to Texas. The mention of Mephisto and Magneto had them all excited, especially 13-year-old Pushkin. He yearned to be part of the action, hearing about Leon's spectacular battle with Mephisto. His youthful imagination ran wild, dreaming of taking on the Demon King himself. But, being so young, Leon had forbidden him from participating in such events, at least not until he turned 16. Clarice, equally fascinated, bombarded Wanda with questions. The two younger girls, Alina and Polina, were less interested in the battles. They preferred playing with the manor's animals, particularly the furry ones, a fondness that developed during their time in the Ural Mountains. Leon was even considering adding more animals to the manor, perhaps some lion and tiger cubs. He'd always had a soft spot for big cats, even in his past life. After the lively breakfast, it was time for the children to go to school. The housekeeper took them, while Pietro and Sergei left in a McLaren sports car, their plans unknown. Leon and Wanda then strolled down to the beach near the manor. The rising sun bathed the golden sand in warm light, and the sea breeze was refreshing. Walking barefoot on the sand, with waves gently lapping at the shore, the two of them felt at peace. The wind tousled their hair and rustled their shirts, creating a perfect moment of tranquility. All along the beach, rows of footprints marked the path where Leon and Wanda walked side by side. At 1.8 meters, Leon only slightly towered over Wanda, who stood at 1.7 meters. Wanda extended her hand, closed it gently, and let the breeze blow against her cheek. Gazing at the blue waves, she sighed, "It's so beautiful." "It really is," Leon chuckled. "This planet always finds a way to make you fall in love with it. When free from life's pressures and distractions, the world's beauty becomes impossible to ignore." Leon believed that the Earth was worth fighting for, even if it meant opposing humanity itself to protect it. He could battle interdimensional demons and stop anyone who threatened to destroy the world. Wanda nodded, then mischievously turned around, quickened her pace, and walked backward while looking at Leon. In her playful voice, she said, "I wish we could stay like this forever." "Maybe we can," Leon replied with a smile. Leon gently rubbed Wanda's hair, as he'd always done. Her delicate face flushed pink, and she smiled sweetly. But a hint of worry crossed her expression as she asked, "Leon, do you think hell appearing will have a big impact on Earth?" "Who knows?" Leon shrugged. "But don't worry. If Mephisto ever makes a move on Earth, I'll deal with him." "Hee, so confident, huh? He's the devil, after all." "Devil or not, I'm much stronger than you think. Don't underestimate me." "I've never underestimated you," Wanda teased, sticking out her tongue. With the sea breeze blowing, She asked again, Leon, did you have us travel the world collecting blood from undead species just to train us? You already figured that out, didn't you? Leon shot her a playful look that made Wanda laugh, knowing she couldn't hide anything from him. They understood each other too well. It's hard to believe you used the genes of those undead species to create a super soldier serum to enhance us. You've worked hard. Actually, it's you who's been doing the hard work, Leon admitted. Wanda and the others had collected the blood themselves. If Leon had given the order, Skyblade could have handled everything, leaving him with little to do. Wanda sensed that Leon was hiding something, but she was smart enough not to pry. Instead, she changed the subject. As they stood at the water's edge, letting the waves lap at their ankles, she said casually, I'm planning to go find that guy with Pietro. Today? Yep, as soon as Pietro gets back. Just make sure you're home for dinner, Leon said, offering his usual light warning. Wanda's eyes curved into crescent moons as she smiled. I want to have steamed garlic lobster. I'm craving it. Wanda loved seafood, especially lobster. I'll have Dirk prepare it, and you can eat as much as you want. Great, I'll go see Natasha first. Meanwhile, in the underground lab of the seaside villa in New York, Tony Stark sat in an expensive, custom-made chair. The lab, filled with vibrant decor and precision instruments, was a display of Stark's characteristic flair. Leaning back, Tony rubbed his temples, exhaustion written all over his face. Sir, you have been awake for 48 hours straight. It has been detected that you are extremely fatigued. It's time for you to rest, came a gentle voice in Tony's ear. Tony, staring at the technical drawings he'd been working on all night, responded absent-mindedly, thanks for the concern, Jarvis. Maybe I'll sleep in 10 hours. That must be quite a dream. Sir, Miss Pepper has sent a message. She hopes you will sleep properly. What's she up to? Tony asked. Miss Pepper is negotiating with the military on behalf of you and Mr. Stain. Ha, Pepper's really starting to act like a president. Maybe I should promote her to CEO. Tony flipped through the holographic projections in front of him, nodding casually. I think Miss Pepper would be very pleased. Jarvis, place the order according to the technical drawings. We're about to start a big project. Okay, sir. Tony stretched, feeling the weight of exhaustion creep in. He unsteadily stood up, opened the tempered glass door, and walked upstairs. Heading to the bar, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, just about to take a sip when Jarvis's voice interrupted him again. Sir, Ms. Natasha is here to visit. Well, isn't that a pleasant surprise, Tony remarked, eyebrows raised. Holding his whiskey and dressed only in a thin gray sweater, he walked toward the living room. As the door opened automatically, Natasha entered, clad in a black trench coat, accompanied by two unfamiliar individuals. Tony's curiosity piqued as Natasha approached, but her stoic demeanor made him cautious. He was intrigued by the two strangers but unsure of what Natasha's intentions were. Still, he greeted her with open arms, trying to appear cheerful. Hey, Ms. Natasha, nice to see you. Don't get too excited, Tony, Natasha replied, her face remaining cold and indifferent. Her tone made Tony frown, sensing something was wrong. Keeping his composure, he joked, I hope you're not here to ruin my mood with bad news, Natasha. I'm sorry, Tony, but I'm not the one here to see you today. Natasha's attitude remained emotionless, causing Tony's heart to sink. He glanced at her and then at the two strangers beside her, growing more serious. So, who's here to see me? Tony Stark, Pietro said coldly, his eyes filled with unmasked murderous intent. Click. As soon as Pietro's intent became clear, the villa's walls and ceiling began shifting. Panels retracted, revealing an array of weapons aimed directly at the trio. Jarvis's voice followed. Hostile action detected. Level 1 alert activated. Please cease all resistance, or you will be neutralized immediately. According to, boom. Before Jarvis could finish, Wanda's eyes glowed red as she raised her hand, forming a fist. Instantly, chaotic red energy surged throughout the villa. The walls, ceiling, and even the weapons were torn apart and twisted by the force. The entire villa trembled, and glassware on the tables and bar shattered, yet Tony remained unharmed, standing amidst the wreckage. Sir, Jarvis began but was cut off by Tony. Jarvis, cancel the level 1 alert and defense mode. Understood, sir. Level 1 alert and defense mode deactivated. Jarvis's response took 2 full seconds, which was unusually slow for his AI. Tony realized the delay was caused by the conflict between the on-site image analysis and his command. Ignoring the technical hiccup, Tony downed his whiskey in one gulp, then walked slowly to the nearby shelf. Calmly, he asked, I thought even if we weren't friends, we were at least partners. Can you tell me why you're doing this? Or did someone offer you a better deal than I did? Tony stood there, puzzled, trying to understand the reason behind their hostility. It was easy for Tony to turn off his alert and defense systems. After all, he knew that the defense system he had built into the villa could handle ordinary people, or even a special operations force, without leaving him vulnerable. But now, he was facing superhumans. The red energy released by the girl, which had instantly destroyed all the defensive weapons in the hall, was enough proof of the huge gap between them. If they really wanted to kill him, Nothing he did now would make a difference. It was better to face the situation calmly. Even if he was going to die, he'd at least know why. What Tony didn't realize, though, was that Jarvis had a built-in rule prioritizing his life above all else. So, without Tony knowing, Jarvis had already sent out distress signals. Natasha, Wanda, and Pietro noticed Tony's calmness in the face of danger, but that wouldn't stop Wanda and Pietro from seeking revenge. Wanda stepped forward, her delicate, sweet face now filled with rage. She gritted her teeth and spoke to Tony. "Tell me, do you remember a country called Sokovia?" Sokovia. Tony frowned, repeating the name. It was a small country in Eastern Europe. Poor and backward. Pietro and I were just ordinary people there. We were poor, but we had a warm home. Until the war broke out when we were 10 years old. She paused, her anger intensifying. Red energy swirled around her, and her golden hair began to float as if blown by an unseen wind. A terrifying aura filled the villa, making Tony feel as though he were carrying a massive weight on his back. His chest tightened, and breathing became difficult. But Tony kept listening. Pietro stepped forward to stand by Wanda, his eyes full of hatred as he stared at the man responsible for destroying their family. Wanda continued, her voice trembling with anger. "The explosion destroyed our home. The building collapsed. Our parents died that day. Pietro and I survived, but just as we were about to escape, a missile hit less than a meter away from us." Tony remained silent, listening to Wanda's every word. "We were trapped. We couldn't leave the collapsed apartment. All we could do was stare at the missile, unsure when it would explode. We watched it for 2 days." Her voice dropped, but her rage was palpable. "And on that missile, we saw the name, Stark Industries." Wanda's eyes bore into Tony's, her voice sharp and cutting like steel blades. "Tell me, Tony Stark, do you think you deserve to live?" Her words hung in the air, slicing through the room as if Tony could be torn apart at any moment. The Maximoff twins' hatred and anger were laid bare. Tony stood still, grappling with the weight of her accusation. His mind raced, recalling moments that had once seemed insignificant. He remembered the female reporter who had confronted him, and the Jericho missile that had landed him in a terrorist's cave. What could he say? How could he justify himself? Since his father founded Stark Industries, the company had developed countless weapons and supplied arms to the US military. How many wars had those weapons fueled? How many civilians had been killed? He had never truly considered it. Because he had never seen the consequences with his own eyes. Tony had always lived in his own world, the world of the upper class, of banquets and casinos, where he basked in admiration and attention, surrounded by women and accolades. He had enjoyed the life of a genius, insulated from the horrors of the outside world. He had never seen the suffering of the poor, or the families torn apart by war. His world had always been narrow. It wasn't until he was kidnapped that he realized how deeply Stark Industries' weapons had scarred the world. Only then did he begin to understand the devastation his company had caused. After he returned, Tony made the decision to shut down the arms department. But even then, he hadn't truly grasped the pain of those scorched by the flames of war. Not until now, standing before these two children, staring into their hateful eyes as they recounted their harrowing experience from when they were just 10 years old. It was hard for Tony to fathom that 2 children, so young, had been huddled in the corner of the ruins, staring at a missile just a meter away for 2 days, consumed by helplessness. The panic, fear, and despair they must have felt seemed unbearable. Tony's heart ached. He stood in silence, gazing at the two before him. Slowly, he closed his eyes, his weary face turning calm. He offered no excuses. When he opened his eyes again, he took heavy, guilt-ridden steps toward Wanda and Pietro. "I'm sorry," Tony said, his voice calm but filled with regret. "I know that nothing I do can ever make up for what you've been through, or for all the lives lost because of war. For all the broken families. I imagine I'll be going to hell when I die." His tone was self-deprecating, devoid of the bravado he used to carry. "Jarvis, sir, after my death, I want you to execute a will through Pepper. She's already been appointed president and CEO of Stark Industries. All my shares will be transferred to her. 10% of the profits each year will go to her. The rest should be used to establish a charitable foundation." Tony paused before continuing. "And I want all my assets and funds to be dedicated to helping children and people around the world suffer from war, illness, and homelessness. Sir. Jarvis, write it up." "Yes, sir. May you rest in peace." Jarvis's voice echoed throughout the villa, leaving Wanda and Pietro visibly surprised as they looked at the man in front of them. Tony, though seemingly at peace, had a weight to his words that caught them off guard. In the past, Tony might have worn a mischievous grin, teasing the two. But now, his demeanor was calm as he addressed them. "I hope my death can help lift the shadow that's been hanging over you. I'd hate to laugh at you from hell." He paused, then added, "And Jarvis will inform the authorities that my death was voluntary. You won't face any consequences. People will gloat about my death and that will be it." On the streets of New York City, a black SUV sped recklessly through traffic, ignoring several red lights without a care. The traffic police quickly noticed and began pursuing the vehicle, immediately calling for backup. Driving like that in New York, during morning rush hour, with a speed limit of 45 kilometers per hour. You're insane, one officer muttered as they raced to catch up. The driver had already run red lights and caused multiple accidents, showing off incredible driving skills, but the arrogance infuriated the officers. I'm going to make you regret this. Despite their best efforts, the police couldn't keep up with the black Chevrolet SUV, which expertly weaved through the congested CIT streets. Inside the SUV, the driver was none other than Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, heading straight for the seaside villa, barking orders as he drove. Hill, send in the Quinjets and have snipers on standby. 5 Quinjets are already in the air and will arrive in 3 minutes. Snipers are on standby. The Rapid Response Special Forces, led by Rumlow, have also arrived. Hill's calm voice came through Fury's earpiece. Fury didn't respond but issued another command. Get rid of the pursuers behind me. Understood. After giving the order, Fury slammed on the accelerator, speeding like a black bolt of lightning, carelessly ignoring the red lights and traffic. Behind him, screeching brakes and the sound of crashing cars filled the air, but Fury paid no mind. His focus was on the projected route displayed on his windshield. Someone's actually managed to break into the villa, and the perimeter security system didn't react. This is bad, Fury muttered, frowning. Tony Stark was originally just a contingency plan in Fury's larger strategy and afterthought, really. He hadn't paid too much attention to Stark, certainly not as much as the Hulk, who was being hunted by the military. But that changed when S.H.I.E.L.D. followed the faint tire tracks of a military convoy into the desert, where they discovered the remains of a canyon buried by an enormous explosion, 330 meters deep. Everything inside was destroyed. S.H.I.E.L.D. had invested significant resources to dig out what remained of the site. They found corpses blown to pieces, offering few clues as to how Tony had escaped. But what they unearthed in that cave was a startling discovery: a massive, crude steel armor. Though damaged, it had survived the explosion, and after repairs by S.H.I.E.L.D.'s scientists, the full suit of armor was restored. To Fury's surprise, the suit, despite its rough design, was highly functional. Experts confirmed that it had been powered by an energy source, which immediately made Fury think of Tony's arc reactor. Surveillance footage showed that Tony had been holed up in his villa, ordering parts from major corporations, suggesting that he was working on something even more advanced. If Tony had built such a suit under extreme conditions in a cave, Fury had no doubt that his second set of armor would be even more sophisticated and deadly. This newfound knowledge made Stark's value skyrocket, not to mention the intel he held about the mysterious woman only Tony and Colonel Rhodes knew about. Nothing could happen to Tony. Fury couldn't let that happen. I hope I'm not too late, Howard. You'd better hope your son doesn't die on my watch, Fury muttered. Meanwhile, inside the seaside villa, a strange silence filled the room. Wanda and Pietro stared at Tony, who stood before them calmly, accepting his fate. Their emotions were conflicted. Tony was their enemy, yet they couldn't help but admire the courage he was displaying at this moment. Natasha stood behind Tony, her arms crossed, watching quietly. Her red lips curled slightly as she already had a sense of where the situation was headed. Wanda, Pietro hesitated, glancing at his sister. Wanda didn't look back, her gaze fixed on Tony. Her eyes flashed red, and in an instant, she vanished and reappeared before him like a ghost. She pressed her index finger against the arc reactor on Tony's chest. If I apply just a little pressure, you'll die. Wow, that's not a great way to go. If the reactor is punctured, it'll cause a radiation leak, affecting the environment around us. Jarvis, send an evacuation message, Tony said, remaining calm despite knowing the painful death awaiting him. But Wanda interrupted. No need. Tony looked at her with confusion. What? Everything you said is true. My abilities allow me to sense your emotions. You're not like some of the others, Tony. Wanda's voice softened, though her eyes still burned with anger. I didn't originally plan to kill you like this. I was going to control your mind, make you a puppet. You'd be trapped in a world I created like hell. The souls of those killed by Stark's weapons would tear at your consciousness until I died. Wanda's voice dripped with intensity, but her tone was calculated. From your memories, I saw that Stark Industries' primary partner is the US military, right? Tony nodded. Yes. Stark Industries, founded by his father during World War II, had thrived on war profits. It was a leader in arms manufacturing, and the US military had always been its biggest client. Due to legal agreements, the company couldn't sell advanced weapons to other countries without facing suppression from the US government. Wanda's anger slowly subsided, her face becoming calmer. If you hadn't shut down the arms division, you would certainly be dead by now. But I saw your memories. I see that faint trace of conscience. Thank you for that, Mr. Stark. With that, she turned and walked toward the villa's exit. Pietro, hands behind his head, followed her with a resigned expression, glancing back at his sister's retreating figure. He had no choice but to follow. Tony stood there in stunned silence, watching the twins leave. He turned to Natasha, who had been silently observing the entire situation. So, what was that? Your performance was flawless. I'm impressed. I've come to see you in a new light, Mr. Stark. Natasha winked playfully at Tony before turning to leave. As her figure disappeared through the door, her slightly husky voice echoed back. Don't forget our deal. I'm looking forward to our next meeting. Her voice lingered, seductive and mysterious, but instead of feeling relieved, Tony was left with a deep sense of confusion and fear. When faced with death, he had felt calm accepting. But now, finding himself alive, a flood of emotions overwhelmed him. I'm not looking forward to that next meeting at all. His legs trembling from the ordeal, Tony wobbled over to the sofa and collapsed onto it, breathing heavily. It's been a rough day, Jarvis. I'm glad you didn't die, sir. Yeah, me too, Tony muttered, fatigue washing over him. He had been awake for 2 days, and the intensity of the situation finally caught up with him. Leaning back on the sofa, he slowly closed his eyes and drifted into sleep. Meanwhile, several Quinjet fighters hovered silently above the villa. Due to the villa's secluded location, the Quinjets remained stationary, their anti-gravity engines allowing them to hover perfectly in place. The hatch of one of the Quinjets opened, and an elite sniper lay prone, aiming his rifle at the villa's living room. Through his scope, he saw only Tony, slumped on the sofa, alive but clearly exhausted. The room around him was a wreck, weapons on the ceiling, floor, and walls had been twisted and destroyed by an unseen force. The sniper's eyes widened in shock. Had the target been killed? He checked again, noticing Tony's chest slowly rising and falling. He was alive. The sniper quickly covered his earpiece. Director, what's the situation? Came the reply. The intruder in the villa is nowhere to be found. The target is still alive, but appears to be in poor condition, possibly unconscious on the sofa. Zeep outside the seaside villa, a black Chevrolet screeched to a halt. With a loud bang, the engine shut off as Nick Fury stepped out of the vehicle. Almost simultaneously, the Rapid Response Special Forces, led by Agent Rumlow of S.H.I.E.L.D., arrived fully armed, securing the area around the villa. Rumlow, wearing a shield, Kevlar combat uniform and sporting a bit of stubble, approached Fury. Ready to move in, sir? He asked. Proceed immediately, but be cautious, Fury responded, his expression serious. Rumlow nodded, raising his right fist to signal the team. Advance in formation, watch all sides, he ordered quietly. More than 30 heavily armed agents, led by Rumlow, moved in a coordinated pattern toward the villa, with Fury following behind. The villa's perimeter security had already been neutralized by the time the special forces arrived, making the advance seamless. Artificial intelligence, Jarvis, recognized the identities of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and did not trigger any alarms. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents had the proper credentials, and the defense systems had been completely dismantled by whatever force had attacked earlier. Once inside, the team secured the building, making sure there were no lingering threats. Meanwhile, Fury strode across the room to where Tony lay on the sofa, deeply asleep from exhaustion. Fury bent down and, without hesitation, slapped Tony's face hard. The forceful slap stirred Tony from his sleep. Groggily, he opened his eyes and squinted up at the dark face and bald head looming over him. Jarvis, where'd the egghead come from? Tony muttered, half-conscious. The agents nearby struggled to suppress their laughter, though their professional demeanor kept them mostly in check. Fury, expressionless, gave Tony another firm slap, this time out of pure retaliation. The crisp smack echoed through the room, snapping Tony fully awake. Annoyed, Tony swatted away Fury's hand, rubbed his reddening cheek, and glared up at him. So, who the hell are you? I'm here to save you, Fury replied dryly. Save me? By slapping me in the face. Tony rubbed his sore cheek again, clearly unimpressed. His expression warned Fury that if there wasn't a good explanation, things might get ugly. At that moment, Rumlow approached. Sir, we've completed the sweep. No one else is here, looks like they cleared out. Fury nodded, and Rumlow stepped back, giving Fury room to continue the conversation with Tony. So, Fury said, turning back to Tony, his voice low and serious, shall we talk? Tony stared at him for a moment, feeling the weight of Fury's one-eyed gaze. After a brief pause, Tony pushed himself off the sofa, wandered over to the bar, and poured himself a drink. He glanced around at the agents securing the perimeter outside before taking a sip of whiskey, letting the alcohol jolt his tired nerves. Leaning against the bar, Tony crossed his arms and gave Fury a skeptical look. So, what's your deal? FBI, CIA, nice guess, Fury said with a hint of sarcasm. I'm the director of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. Tony raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I've heard that name before. Didn't I tell someone that your agency's name was way too long and convoluted? We've shortened it since then, Fury replied dryly. But let's get to the point, Tony. What are you hiding? Fury's piercing gaze locked onto Tony, not letting him evade the question. Hide something? What exactly do you think I'm hiding? Tony sneered, taking a sip of his drink before continuing dismissively. The day I was attacked, a shady man showed up with a group of others, claiming they were there to save me. He straightened up, looking directly at Fury. So, what are you hiding? You intercepted Jarvis's distress signal and, Tony gestured toward the floating aircraft outside the villa. That kind of tech, it can't be built by any ordinary organization. Jarvie, identified your face and pegged you as FBI. What's your game here? To get close to me. Spy on me. Or maybe you're here to protect me. Fury stared at Tony, watching as he drank the whiskey slowly, trying to glean information from his expression. Tony's personality was too distinctive, usually impossible to mask. But right now, Fury found it hard to read him. Tony's bloodshot eyes seemed to be mocking something, yet there was an odd calm behind them, far too calm for someone like him. Even when he's being sarcastic, he's never this composed, Fury thought. You're deliberately hiding the whereabouts of the people you just met, Fury asserted. Tony's dismissive expression didn't falter. Fury paused, then continued with a note of contempt, you're smart, Tony. I'll give you that, and I can tell you, I'm not interested in you as a person. I'm interested in your mind. Much as I hate to admit it, like Howard, you're one of the few geniuses in the world. But right now, what concerns me more is what you've been through. Tony frowned slightly at Fury's words, which only prompted Fury to keep going. Our agents risk their lives to keep the world stable, while you, Fury's tone grew sharper, you're out there screwing women on $1,000 beds. Trust me, we will track down those people you met. I don't care why you're concealing their whereabouts, but they could be a destabilizing force in the world. Fury pointed 2 fingers at his own eyes, then pointed them back at Tony. The message was clear, I'm watching you. Tony, however, simply looked at him with an expression that screamed mockery. Seeing that he wouldn't get any more out of Tony, Fury turned and left the villa. Rumlow approached him as Fury made his way to his car. Sir, we questioned the security team. They claim no one was spotted entering, and the surveillance shows nothing out of the ordinary. Interesting, Fury muttered and scoffed. So the people who showed up today were all ghosts. This is definitely odd, Rumlow agreed. It reminds me of some other strange cases recently, except this time, it's not our agents. Fury mulled over the situation for a moment before giving Rumlow his instructions and returning to his car. He started the engine and drove off. In typical S.H.I.E.L.D. fashion, all agents were evacuated in record time, leaving Tony's seaside villa in silence once more. Inside the villa, Tony wandered to the balcony, gazing at the golden reflection of the sun on the distant sea. Jarvis's voice broke the quiet. Sir, based on facial recognition and data analysis, the search results show that on March 30, 1999, a war broke out in Sokovia. The city was engulfed in flames, with over 32,000 casualties. Records show a family who match the description. I believe them to be the parents, the Maximoff couple, of the individuals who threatened you. The Maximoff couple were killed, and their 10-year-old twins, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, were rescued 2 days later. The twins were placed in an orphanage but escaped 6 months later. Since then, their whereabouts have been untraceable. As Jarvis relayed this information, Tony could almost hear the echoes of a war-torn land screams and wails amidst the ruins, the ground littered with corpses. He could picture the terrified eyes of children left in despair. His right hand clenched into a fist. The girl's voice replayed in his mind. We relied on each other to survive. We were trapped in a collapsed building, staring at a missile that could go off at any moment. For 2 days, we just watched it. And the name on that missile? Stark Industries. Tell me, Tony Stark, do you think you deserve to die? Each word cut like a knife, digging deep into Tony's conscience. The world of adults is driven by interests, especially for capitalists who care only about their profits and status. Why would they care about the lives of civilians? In truth, Stark Industries only provided the weapons, they didn't start the war. The tragedy of Wanda and Pietro's lives wasn't Tony's doing, nor was he directly responsible for the events in Sokovia. Yet, Tony was overcome with guilt. Unlike other capitalists, he had now a conscience. He might be arrogant and flamboyant, but he still had empathy, and that empathy made him willing to face the consequences of his action. Whatever his intention may have been, all those people did die. That was a fact that he couldn't change. He would use all his wealth to establish charities, making his final contribution before facing his inevitable death. Lost in thought, Tony stood on the balcony, the sea breeze ruffling his hair, unsure what to do next. Meanwhile, at a riverside balcony in New York's Central Park, Natasha leaned on a railing, staring at the woman beside her. So, is this really the only reason you let that playboy go? Wanda, now dressed in a casual shirt and a cap, gazed down at the river and responded softly, I figured out a lot a long time ago. The real enemy was never him. Though, I admit that if he hadn't kept his cool till the end, I would have killed him. Natasha looked at Wanda's face, her red lips curving into a smile. I'm finally relieved, Wanda. Although Wanda and Pietro's painful experiences had been gradually softened by their new family, including people like Leon, it didn't mean their trauma had been completely erased. The hatred buried deep within their hearts still left a thorn lodged in their souls. However, after they faced Tony, both of them seemed to have finally smoothened their souls from all of its thorns. Natasha understood very well that whether Tony lived or died, that thorn would have been removed regardless. That's why she had come to see Tony differently. The playboy image he had projected no longer fit him. He had broken her preconceived notions of capitalists and arms dealers, the ruthless warmongers she had known. As Wanda signaled, if Tony had begged for mercy or shown regret, she would have turned him into a puppet without hesitation, wiping OU. his consciousness with just a few words. But it didn't come to that. Facing the early morning sun, Wanda stood up straight and stretched. A wave of relaxation washed over her, and the recent happenings seemed to have transformed her spirit in a magical way. From her perspective, the world appeared more vivid and alive. The ones responsible for the Sokovia airstrikes and the chaos that followed were a group of terrorists attempting to seize power. Those terrorists had been wiped out by UN peacekeeping forces long ago. And the missile, the one that haunted her and Pietro for 2 days, was the reason she had seen Tony as her sole enemy. Now that everything had been resolved, she felt completely at ease. She was ready to embrace her future with Leon and her new family. Wanda still had people she cared about, and from now on, she wouldn't live for revenge. In the distance, the sound of sirens could be heard, and there was some commotion in the streets. Something seemed to be happening. Suddenly, all three of them sensed a powerful presence moving across the rooftops of nearby buildings at an extraordinary speed. "Whoa, seems like an interesting guy," Pietro remarked in surprise. Wanda nodded, looking toward the source of the energy. "It appears to be someone enhanced," she said softly. "That little guy, I met him with Leon before," Natasha mused, twirling a strand of red hair around her finger. "He's definitely enhanced, and Leon seems to admire him a lot. He's a good kid." "Sister Natasha, you don't seem that old, yet here you are calling someone a kid," Wanda said with a touch of exasperation. Lately, Natasha had been acting as though she were older, talking like an elder. "Oh, Wanda's all grown up now, here to teach her big sister," Natasha teased, stepping up to Wanda, hugging her, and planting a kiss on her cheek. Wanda enjoyed the embrace but still rolled her eyes. Natasha always took advantage of her affectionately, using the excuse that Wanda had a nice scent. Reluctantly, Wanda endured Natasha's teasing, then turned the conversation to Pietro. "By the way, Pietro, what was Sergei up to? You were muttering about something earlier." "Oh, Sergei heard rumors that a vampire faction in New York had summoned some kind of blood god. He wants to take me to check it out," Pietro replied. The blood god of the vampire clan sounded formidable, and someone like Pietro, who was always up for excitement, naturally wanted to get involved. "That sounds dull. Can't you stay here?" "Nope, I'm meeting up with Sergei," Pietro said with a grin before waving to the two women and dashing off. As Pietro's figure disappeared, Wanda pulled away from Natasha's embrace. "We should head back too. Leon said he's preparing a grand feast today." "You greedy girl," Natasha teased, pinching Wanda's delicate cheek. "But I'm looking forward to it too." At SHIELD's Triskelion headquarters, Nick Fury sat in his office, deep in thought as he reviewed the data and images on his computer screen. He was thinking about the events that took place in the recent years. From the raid on Stryker's base a few years ago to a string of bizarre and untraceable events over the years, everything seemed to be connected. Most recently, there had been the massacre of vampires at New York's Century Building, the mysterious woman who broke into Colonel Rhodes' barracks to steal a Hummer, Tony Stark's sudden rescue from a terrorist camp, and the unexplained attack on his oceanfront villa. All these seemingly unrelated incidents felt linked by some invisible thread, but Fury couldn't grasp what it was. Even with SHIELD's vast resources, there was no clear answer. It felt like he was chasing a ghost, feeling its presence but never being able to track it down. Fury had a hunch that the people who executed the raid on Stryker's base, swiftly and with precision, were connected to the group that massacred the vampires at Century Tower. The tactics were unmistakably similar. But there was no solid evidence, no fingerprints, no footprints, no hair samples. Nothing. It was as though these people didn't exist. Even the surveillance footage from nearby streets showed no signs of tampering, yet the people were still missing. Alien technology, maybe. Either S.H.I.E.L.D. experts were facing technology far superior to their own, or something else was at play. Fury wasn't ruling it out. The only lead he had was Tony, but Tony was keeping his mouth shut. And prying information out of someone like him was futile. Fury knew he might have better luck investigating it himself. What troubled Fury the most was that this mysterious organization operated freely in New York, across the US, and possibly beyond, without anyone detecting them. Their purpose remained a mystery, but Fury feared it would destabilize the world. He clicked the mouse, and a stunning image of Natasha Romanoff appeared on the screen. "Natasha Romanoff, are you part of this organization?" Fury's one eye narrowed, full of suspicion and depth. After the battle, Leon relaxed in the hot springs aboard Sky Blade. Yes, the massive space fortress that traveled the universe had hot springs. The Angels, with their almost endless vitality, were a race that not only fought demons and evil but also sought love and joy. They excelled in balancing war and leisure, knowing how to enjoy life better than any other beings in the cosmos. Sky Blade, though designed for warfare, had a city built on it to serve as a temporary home for the Angels when they left Merlot Heaven for the wider universe. They often traveled to the nearby galaxies. In their downtime, they soaked in hot springs, sipped wine on rooftops, and savored peace. As the captain of Sky Blade, Leon naturally had access to all these luxuries. In fact, it was his favorite thing to do. Sky Blade was like a heavenly place after all. He stripped off his clothes, immersed himself in the warm waters, and leaned against the rock wall, enjoying the sight of the surrounding jungle. Birds chirped on nearby branches, occasionally rubbing their heads together, as the bright sky bathed everything in light. The surrounding was peaceful. One could spend their whole life here and never be bored. The Sky Blade simulated natural environment with great precision. Leon then decided to do something productive. Connected to Sky Blade's system, Leon's mind was bombarded with data streams. The black guy noticed something, he muttered. Pretty sharp. Sky Blade monitored Earth constantly, filtering events through its vast database. Everything was categorized, from Sergei's recent meeting with the Dampier Blade to their plan to kill the Blood God, to the ongoing skirmishes between vampires and werewolves in London. Of course, the highest priority was anything related to Leon, or his allies. And now, Sky Blade had picked up something concerning Leon. Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., had started to notice Leon's, well more specifically, his family's activities. Nick Fury was one of the few individuals on Earth who had a broad understanding of the big picture. He was known for his near-obsessive control and manipulative tactics, earning him the distrust of many, even the Avengers, whom he helped assemble. But despite his flaws, Fury's intelligence was undeniable. With minimal clues, the corpses at Stryker's base, Natasha's covert infiltration of Colonel Rhodes' barracks, and the theft of a military Humvee, Fury had begun to piece together a connection to Leon. Leon couldn't help but be impressed by Fury's deduction skills. Fury was a master detective. There was no doubt about that. But at his current level of power, Leon no longer had to take painstaking measures to conceal his movements like he did during his early days in the Ural Mountains. In fact, he didn't want to hide. Fury's knack for stirring up trouble was useful, as it drew major players, heroes and villains alike from Inter-Earth. It would be a great opportunity for Leon to obtain genetic samples to expand Sky Blade's database. While Leon paid some attention to Fury's efforts, he didn't take them too seriously. It wasn't that he underestimated Fury, but even if the S.H.I.E.L.D. director realized there was an unknown force causing trouble on a global scale, Sky Blade would ensure Fury never found Leon and his family. The most Fury could hope for was to uncover something about Natasha, given her past as the Black Widow. She had left more than enough clues during her time as a covert operative. Yet even without Sky Blade's assistance, Natasha had become adept at hiding her presence. Her mastery of hockey allowed her to not only make herself invisible but also alter the perceptions of those around her. But it would be hard, maybe even impossible, for Fury to glean information about the family through Natasha's movement. At that moment, Keisha's voice interrupted Leon's thoughts. Captain Leon, Sky Blade has detected a new dimension and discovered a Skyfather-level lifeform imprisoned there. Whoosh! A holographic projection appeared before Leon, displaying a world consumed by flames. The extreme heat had turned the landscape into molten lava, and no signs of life were visible. In a scorched canyon, a tall, skeletal figure sat on a flaming throne, eyes closed in slumber. A massive sword, glowing with molten heat, leaned beside the throne. The figure's body was composed of jagged rocks, with red light glowing from within. Two massive horns jutted from its head. Though the being appeared weak, its presence was undeniably powerful. Fire Demon, Searcher, Keisha's voice explained. One of the oldest fire elemental demons, ruler of Muspelheim. He was defeated by Odin, king of the Asgardian gods, and is categorized as Skyfather level at his peak. His weapon, the Sword of Twilight, is composed of an unknown elemental metal with magical properties, allowing him to manipulate elemental power and break through dimensions. Currently, he is in a weakened state. Leon leaned against the rock wall and smirked. Searcher, the bringer of Ragnarok. Though Searcher was weakened now, his power was undeniable. He had long been a thorn in Asgard's side, even giving Odin trouble. One of the oldest creatures in the Nine Realms, Searcher had harbored a burning hatred for Asgard for millennia. At Ragnarok, he would wield the Sword of Twilight to destroy Asgard, fulfilling his destiny. In the end, both Searcher and Asgard would perish together. More of a force of nature than a villain, Searcher's fate was tied to Asgard's survival. His only purpose was to bring about its destruction. Leon's eyes gleamed as he stared at the sleeping fire giant. Though Searcher's mind was singularly focused, his raw power made him valuable. With a sly grin, Leon began to plot how he might use Searcher's strength to his advantage. New York, in an unremarkable auto repair shop. A muscular black man sat on a metal chair, his dark skin glistening with sweat. His hands and feet were tied, and an iron rod was clenched between his teeth. His face contorted in pain, and it looked like he might bite the rod in half. Sweat poured from him as he groaned in agony. Nearby, an old man with white hair stood at a metal workbench, inspecting weapons, ammunition, and equipment. He occasionally glanced over at the struggling man, unfazed by the sight. It was a scene he'd grown used to. After what seemed like an eternity, the pain subsided. The man's chest heaved as he took deep breaths, but his expression showed relief. The old man set down the shotgun he was inspecting, walked over, and began to untie the man. "How do you feel?" the old man asked. "Same as always," Blade replied through gritted teeth. Once freed, Blade stood up slowly, his expression indifferent. He walked to a nearby chair, grabbed his black leather trench coat, and slipped it on. Then, he put on his signature sunglasses, masking his emotions further. You seem to be in a hurry, Blade, the old man, Whistler, observed. I found an ancient text in the Book of Death, Blade said grimly. It mentioned, the blood god comes, and I've got a bad feeling about it. Blade slung his sword across his back and returned to the workbench. Whistler nodded. From the information I've gathered, a lot of vampires in New York are planning something big, Whistler said. But I don't know what exactly they're up to. It's probably fallout from Century Tower. Those bastards have already started to make their move, Blade responded sharply. I need to act fast. You can't take them on directly, Whistler cautioned. They're hidden deep, and we don't know enough about their operation yet. And besides, you alone aren't enough. Blade didn't argue. As someone who had known him since he was young, Whistler understood Blade's strength well. A half-vampire with exceptional abilities, Blade had the strength, speed, and reflexes that matched those of high-level vampires. He trained himself since childhood to hunt and kill his own kind. And unlike other vampires, Blade could walk in the daylight, earning him the title of Daywalker. But even with all that power, Blade knew Whistler was right. This wasn't a fight he could take on alone. No matter how powerful Blade is, he knows he can't take on an entire vampire faction alone. He nodded in acknowledgement, glancing towards the factory door. So, I called for backup, Blade said. Backup? Whistler raised an eyebrow. Just then, a series of beeps echoed through the shop in alarm. Whistler had set, signaling someone's approach. His face tightened in reaction, but before he could move, he noticed two figures standing in the sunlight outside the factory. The light obscured their faces, and Whistler instinctively reached for the weapon under his arm. But Blade remained calm, stepping forward to greet them. Seeing Blade's reaction, Whistler relaxed slightly and followed close behind. As the figures approached, Whistler could finally make out their features. They were both tall, strikingly handsome, and carried themselves with undeniable confidence. The taller of the two had a presence that matched Blade's, clad in a stylish coat and shirt. Based on Whistler's decades of vampire hunting experience, he could tell these two were far from ordinary. The way they moved, the look in their eyes, everything about them screamed power. Standing before Whistler, they felt like two volcanoes ready to erupt at any moment, capable of devastating anything in their path. Eric Brooks, Blade introduced himself. Pietro Maximoff, said the first visitor. Sergei, the second one added. Abraham Whistler, Whistler finally responded. The newcomers were none other than Pietro and Sergei. Pietro's gaze drifted around the shop, taking in the workbench cluttered with computers, weapons, and scattered tools. He glanced at Whistler, and his first impression of the old man and Blade was one of poverty, not in terms of resources but in terms of their rough, haphazard setup. It didn't mean they were without weapons or equipment, it just looked disorganized. Pietro also sensed a strange mix of cold and hot energy from Blade, which intrigued him. Sergei locked eyes with Blade and commented, "You're looking a little tired." Blade replied nonchalantly. "I need your help." "The blood god?" Sergei asked. "Yes. I slaughtered a bunch of vampires and found the Book of Death, which details their history. I couldn't decipher the ancient vampire text, but from what I gathered from a few pure bloods, they're planning to resurrect the blood god." "Do you want to strike first?" Sergei asked with keen interest. "I don't know what this blood god is, but it must be something important for the vampires to get so aggressive," Blade responded without hesitation. As someone who despised vampires, it didn't matter what they were planning so long as they failed, it would be enough for him. "I like your thinking," Sergei said, approvingly. Then, turning to Pietro, he added, "You in? Want to have some fun?" "Why not? It's been boring lately," Pietro shrugged. "Fun? Boring?" The short exchange made Whistler and Blade exchange glances. Blade's eye twitched. These two sounded overly confident. Were they really this nonchalant about vampires? Whistler narrowed his eyes, trying to gauge the origins of these newcomers. He suspected they were no ordinary men. But Blade wasn't concerned. For him, as long as Sergei and Pietro could help kill vampires, their true identities didn't matter. He trusted Sergei's power. Sergei had taken out the vampires in Century Tower single-handedly, something Blade knew he couldn't have done so quickly on his own. "We'll start today," Blade said, always decisive. "I've got an informant. Maybe he can tell us where their lair is." "All right," Sergei nodded. "Do you need our help?" "Got a car?" Blade asked in response. "Of course." "Then fill it up. We're in for a fast and furious night." On the bustling streets of New York at night, the entire commercial district was lit up, showcasing the elegance of the city that never sleeps. Crowds surged, filling the streets with life. In the midst of this lively scene, Leon and Wanda were out with Alina, Paulina, and Clarice, taking them on a shopping trip. Each of the girls had an ice cream in hand, happily licking away as they wandered. The three little girls were clearly enjoying themselves. They chatted excitedly, their heads close together, debating whether to buy new clothes or head to the movies. Wanda and Leon followed behind, like doting parents, watching over them. Wanda, being a girl herself, had a natural flair for shopping. In the past, there hadn't been much opportunity for it, with most of her time focused on training and seeking revenge. But now, with her heart's burdens lifted, she found herself fully embracing this long-forgotten skill. As for Leon, he didn't mind the shopping at all. Compared to the intense training and battles he was used to, this was easy. Plus, his perspective on life had shifted, and now he saw shopping as another way to enjoy the little pleasures. He was incredibly patient, carrying bags of clothes that Wanda had bought for herself, him, and the three little ones. Seeing how happy they all were, Leon couldn't help but smile softly. "Leon, Wanda, let's go watch a movie," the three girls exclaimed, having reached an agreement. They had been searching on their phones and turned around excitedly to share the news. "Have you decided what to watch?" Leon asked. "Yep, we're going to see Godzilla." Clarice held up her phone to show them the movie tickets. The screening was in just 10 minutes. Leon glanced at Wanda, who smiled sweetly. He patted Clarice on the head and asked, "Did you already get the tickets?" "Yep, 5 tickets. Then let's go," Wanda said, indulging the younger ones. "Yay!" The three girls cheered, filled with excitement. The little girls beamed with happiness. The movie theater wasn't far, so the 5 of them walked together, laughing and enjoying the evening. As they strolled, bats suddenly appeared in the sky above New York City, all flying in the same direction. In the moonlight, the sight was eerie, though the people around them didn't seem to notice. However, Leon, Wanda, and the three little ones did. They stopped and looked up at the sky. Using their heightened senses, Leon and Wanda could clearly feel the cold, evil aura emanating from each bat. Leon, the three little girls, unaware of what was happening, looked up at him with concern. Leon and Wanda exchanged a glance. Wanda chuckled softly, "It's nothing. Let's go watch the movie." "Okay." Satisfied with that answer, the girls didn't make a fuss as long as their movie plans weren't disrupted. Before heading to the theater, Leon quickly contacted the housekeeper, who drove to the curb. He loaded all their shopping bags into the car and sent them off to the manor, arranging for the driver to pick them up after the movie. The girls, excited beyond words, ran hand in hand, laughing as they went. Leon and Wanda followed at a leisurely pace behind them. "Those bats, and the vampires. Looks like they're planning something big tonight," Wanda whispered to Leon as they walked side by side. They were both dressed in matching outfits with animal prints, just like the little girls, which showed off their fit figures. Leon nodded. "There's going to be a bloody grand party tonight. Sergei and Pietro are going to have a good time. Will the hosts make them that happy?" "Maybe, maybe not." Leon smirked, understanding her underlying concern. "Are you worried about them?" Wanda didn't hide her feelings. "I'll check on them after the movie. Hopefully, I won't be too late." She trusted Sergei and Pietro's strength, but the creatures they were dealing with, undead beings tied to ancient legends, made her uneasy. Leon chuckled. "Go ahead, but if they do screw up, make sure to take a picture. We can embarrass them later." Wanda grinned mischievously. "Deal." Meanwhile, over in Brooklyn, New York, a culturally, socially, and racially diverse area with a rich artistic and architectural heritage, things were far less lively. On the west side of Brooklyn stood a towering high-rise. At night, the streets around it were shrouded in darkness, the sky filled with heavy clouds, giving the entire area an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. A figure on a motorcycle sped down the street, heading straight for the building. Without any hesitation, they smashed through the front entrance, sending glass shattering across the floor. Boom, bang, bang, bang. Gunfire erupted, and the lobby was instantly filled with the sound of bullets ripping through the air. The decorative lights and rock formations inside were torn to pieces as bullets flew, filling the space with shards of glass and debris. The motorcycle, however, weaved through the hail of bullets, dodging the heavily armed vampire warriors who blocked the way. Then, a towering vampire warrior smirked and lunged forward, delivering a punch that sent the motorcycle crashing into a distant wall. But the rider had already vanished before the impact. The vampire warriors, guns at the ready, aimed toward the broken glass where the rider had disappeared, the atmosphere thick with tension. A chilling air hung over the room as they moved cautiously. Suddenly, another window shattered about 10 meters away. A figure burst through, wielding 2 fully automatic submachine guns, both hands on the triggers. The roar of gunfire echoed through the lobby, and flashes of light blazed from the gun barrels. Several vampire warriors were caught off guard, unable to dodge in time. Bullets ripped through their bodies, sparks flying as they let out agonized screams before crumbling into ashes. The remaining vampires roared in fury, turning their guns on the attacker. But the figure moved like a phantom, darting through their lines. Even for these elite pure-blood warriors, dodging bullets wasn't difficult, but the relentless suppressive fire pinned the attacker behind a nearby column. The battle was far from over. Faced with an entire squad of pure-blood clan warriors, the attacker quickly found themselves at a disadvantage. But they weren't alone. Boom! A dazzling red firelight erupted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the building. The intense heat made the vampire warriors inside uneasy. Their heads snapped toward the source of the glow, their faces illuminated by the fiery red light. Suddenly, the glass on the entire first floor shattered. A blazing flame transformed into a dragon, raging through the air with divine ferocity. Even the enhanced reflexes of the pure-blood warriors weren't fast enough to respond. All they could do was watch in horror as the fiery serpent wound through the air, scorching everything in its path. The heat, the pain, it was unbearable. Scream. echoed through the hall before the warriors were consumed in a cloud of sparks, leaving nothing but ash behind. The fiery dragon left a trail of devastation, beautiful yet deadly. In mere moments, the entire first floor was swept clean. All that remained were piles of ash and discarded weapons. Blade, who had been hiding behind a column, stepped out as the fire dragon dissipated. Amid the fading embers, Sergei's tall figure emerged, holding a crossed sword. "Well done," Blade said flatly, though his face betrayed his astonishment. He finally understood how Sergei had wiped out the vampires in the Century building so quickly. This method of fighting it was unlike anything Blade had ever seen. Luckily, Sergei was on their side. Whoosh, a breeze swept by, and suddenly a figure appeared before them like a ghost. It was Pietro. "How's it looking upstairs?" Blade asked, walking over. Pietro shook his head. "Nothing. You've killed all the remaining fighters in the building." Blade frowned, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Did they know we were coming?" "Probably not," Sergei replied, shaking his head. "I think something must have made them leave suddenly." Behind Blade's sunglasses, his eyes shifted as he processed the subtext. "Tonight's the night they summon the blood god," he muttered. "That's the only explanation," Sergei agreed. "If they're going to summon the blood god, what do you think they need?" "An altar and offerings," Pietro replied confidently. "Now it's getting interesting," Sergei said, rubbing his hair. He wasn't too concerned about not finding anyone. He almost wished more enemies had been left alive to test their strength. "Damn it," Blade cursed, his anger flaring. He didn't know exactly what the blood god was, but if it was recorded in the vampire's ancient book of death and the pure blood clan valued it so highly, then it was bound to be something dangerous. Pietro, however, seemed indifferent. He shrugged, thinking that if they couldn't stop the ritual, they could always handle the blood god afterward. He even joked about bringing Wanda along to help. His attitude was more casual, as if he was just looking to join the spectacle, curious about what this legendary blood god might be like. He figured it'd be a good story to tell the little ones back home, while also dispelling their fantasies of elegant, romantic vampires. Sergei's motivations were more serious. His main objective was the blood god's blood. He could wait for the summoning, but first, they needed to find where the ceremony was taking place. He frowned, deep in thought. If they've moved to another location for the summoning, Sergei began, why didn't they take the guards from this building with them? And why were so many left behind? Every one of these vampire warriors is pure-blooded and heavily armed, Blade added, now realizing something was off. He glanced at Sergei, who nodded in agreement. Exactly. So the altar must be in this building. Not on the upper floors, Pietro said immediately. With his speed, he had already checked the entire building and found nothing resembling an altar. If not above, Sergei crouched down, placing a hand on the smooth marble floor. He closed his eyes, much to Blade's confusion. Wang. From Sergei's perspective, the world around him shifted to shades of gray and white. Like infrasound waves, the light pulsed through the floor, spreading downward. He could sense a vast space deep beneath the surface, though something was blocking his powers from fully detecting it. He opened his eyes and stood, looking at Blade and Pietro. About 100 meters below. There's some kind of force blocking my sight. Blade didn't fully understand what Sergei had seen, but he grasped the meaning. The altar was hidden deep underground. Blade's sharp eyes scanned the area from beneath his sunglasses. Spotting an elevator nearby, he raised his chin and said, maybe they went down through the elevator. The trio approached the elevator, noticing that in addition to the upper floors, there was a button specifically for going down. Pietro hummed but remained unfazed. Before they summon the blood god, the system should be locked down. Unless authorized, the elevator won't work. Let's keep it simple. Sergei turned to Blade with a grin. You ready? Blade gave a cold, nonverbal acknowledgement. Sergei chuckled, then, with a swift motion, slashed at the thick floor of the elevado. With his cross sword, sparks flew, and the floor was cut clean through. Bang! The three of them, along with the metal plate, plummeted towards the deep underground like meteorites. A 100-meter drop meant little to superhumans like them, and they descended rapidly. As the end of their fall approached, Blade drew the long sword from his back, driving it into the rock wall beside him. G. The blade screeched against the rock, sending sparks flying and leaving a long mark as his fall slowed. Meanwhile, Sergei and Pietro continued their freefall, crashing into the metal floor below with a thunderous bang, leaving two large dents where they landed. Join Patreon if you want. Patreon.com GreekGreenGlass Chapter 18. A second later, Blade touched down, his sunglasses reflecting the sunken floor beneath his companions. Though he maintained his cold demeanor, he couldn't help but silently marvel at how monstrous the two were. Fortunately, though he moved his lips he didn't speak, still maintaining his cold appearance. In front of them loomed a thick metal door, but it posed no real obstacle for them. Sergei's sword, made of adamantium alloy and enhanced with angelic technology from Sky Blade, was sharp enough to slice through anything. Even Wolverine's claws wouldn't stand a chance. With a flash of silver, the heavy door was reduced to pieces. Boom, boom. The metal blocks hit the ground with a loud crash, alerting the group of vampire warriors nearby. The three walked out calmly as if they were taking a stroll in their own backyard, taking in the sight of the vast underground space that stretched before them. The underground space stretched impressively, about 20 to 30 meters in height and several square meters in diameter. Its structure was unique and retro, with sharp, angular designs. Stone steps spiraled around 12 towering stone pillars, each one intricately carved with ancient symbols and text. The pillars were massive, and the room's design gave off a haunting, ceremonial atmosphere. In the center of the room, a large platform stood, etched with complex patterns. Blood flowed through these carvings, bubbling like boiling water. The source of the blood came from the 12 stone pillars, where blood-red crosses hung from each. On each cross was a pure-blooded vampire, their pale bodies frail and weak. Their wrists had been slashed, and blood dripped down onto the platform, slowly following the carved lines to the pool below. Hundreds of vampire warriors knelt in all directions, their faces reverent, as if awaiting the arrival of the great blood god. When Sergei, Pietro, and Blade entered the chamber, hundreds of bloodthirsty eyes turned toward them. Any ordinary person would have been paralyzed with fear at the sight. But Sergei and Pietro looked intrigued, while Blade remained expressionless, his long sword in hand, brimming with killing intent. The desire to fight could be felt in the air. Hundreds of vampires. To them, that only made things more interesting. Yet, despite their intrusion, none of the vampires rose. They continued kneeling, murmuring something in an ancient, incomprehensible language. Even with their enhanced hearing, neither Sergei nor Pietro could make out the words. But through Sergei's observation ability, he could sense a subtle yet dense fluctuation filling the underground chamber. This is an ancient vampire clan ritual, Blade stated coldly, using their magical language to summon the blood god. Without hesitation, Blade charged forward to massacre the vampires. However, Sergei and Pietro focused on the altar's blood pool. In unison, they both said, "We're too late. The ritual is complete." Boom. The moment the words left their mouths, time seemed to freeze in the underground space. Blade, mid-sprint, was suddenly immobilized. An ancient cry, echoing from the depths of history, filled the chamber. The blood pool erupted like a volcano, sending torrent of blood into the air. A terrifying shockwave followed, sweeping through the entire space. All the vampires, including Blade, were flung backward like cannonballs, slamming into the walls with a resounding thud. Only Sergei and Pietro remained standing, rooted to the spot like two immovable pillars. Their bodies bent slightly under the pressure, one hand raised in defense. Their hair and clothes whipped wildly in the intense gusts of the shockwave. Meanwhile, the others remained embedded in the walls, unable to move, pinned by the overwhelming force of the blood god's awakening. The shockwave persisted for over 10 seconds before gradually subsiding. The sound of bodies hitting the ground echoed as vampires and Blade crashed down. However, being vampires, the fall caused no real damage. They immediately stood up, their eyes fixed on the blood pool. What they saw next caused a surge of excitement. A vampire was floating in the air, encased in a ball of blood formed from the blood pool itself. Every vampire's face lit up with fanatic devotion. The blood god has come. The great blood god has arrived. The world will belong to our bloodline. Blade's mouth opened slightly, revealing his sharp fangs, now looking a bit feral. He could feel the overwhelming pressure radiating from the blood sphere, a powerful force that represented the ultimate superiority of the blood god over all vampires. The purity of the blood god's essence imposed an undeniable hierarchy. The lower bloodlines could never defy the highest, and the blood god was undeniably at the top of this hierarchy. His arrival meant that the vampire clan now had a supreme deity. As a half-vampire, Blade was affected too. Though he wouldn't lose the will to fight like the other vampires, his combat effectiveness would undoubtedly be compromised. This was a serious problem, and Blade gritted his teeth in frustration. Things were about to get troublesome. Now, his only hope rested on the two mysterious figures beside him, Sergei and Pietro. Blade glanced at them, and as expected, they remained completely unfazed by the blood god's arrival. Instead of fear, they showed curiosity, as if they were observing some rare phenomenon. That confidence, absolute and unshakable, radiated from both of them. As Blade had guessed, the overwhelming aura radiating from the blood sphere had no effect on Sergei or Pietro. To them, it was no more than a gentle breeze. Their unflinching resolve had been forged in countless battles, honed under the brutal training of their leader, Leon. The pressure the blood god exuded was nothing compared to what they had already endured. "How do you feel?" Blade asked. "A bit strong, but that's about it," Pietro replied with a shrug, twisting his neck as if getting ready for a warm-up. He was confident in his speed. If things got too intense, he could always flee. After all, he doubted the blood god could catch him. And if that failed, he'd simply drag Leon over to deal with the deity. Boom. Sergei, now unable to suppress his desire to fight, stomped his foot into the ground, causing it to crack and split beneath him. Red flames erupted in all directions, engulfing him in a blazing inferno. Without hesitation, he launched himself toward the blood sphere, like a fiery comet aiming to obliterate the floating blood god. Boom! A giant tiger made of blazing flames roared, ready to rip apart the mass of blood in front of it. The heat evaporated much of the blood, but just as the attack was about to land, a white-gloved hand emerged, grabbing the tip of Sergei's cross sword. In an instant, the fiery tiger shattered into countless fireballs, scattering across the sky. The falling fireballs incinerated many vampires who had been too terrified to move, turning them to ash. The remaining flames scorched the ground, walls, and stone pillars, blackening everything they touched. Blade's pupils shrank behind his sunglasses as he witnessed the scene. He felt a surge of shock. Sergei's strength was clearly something far beyond what he had imagined. Even with only a glimpse of Sergei's true power, Blade realized that he was no match. What struck him most was that the cross sword, sharp enough to slice through the thick metal door of a vault, had been stopped by a single hand. Blade's simple understanding of the blood god now gave way to a growing sense of dread. Even Pietro was surprised. As the flames dissipated, the blood mass began to shrink and slowly formed into a humanoid figure. Before them stood a strikingly beautiful man, pale-skinned with long black hair flowing down his back, dark red eyes, and dressed in a black tuxedo. He exuded an elegant, almost gentlemanly demeanor. Pietro couldn't help but think that if the three young ones back home saw this, they'd be giddy with excitement. The blood god looked cool, albeit a bit ridiculous. Just as Pietro was about to make a sarcastic comment, the blood god spoke, his voice soft yet commanding. "I like your blood. I can make you mine." But before he could finish, Sergei interrupted with a disdainful tone. "Who told you to hold my sword like that? You wanna look cool, is that it?" The blood god was taken aback. Quote. He quickly understood Sergei's meaning, as the cross sword he had gripped suddenly began to glow a deep, blood-red hue, becoming as hot as molten lava. In an instant, the intense heat burned the blood god's entire hand to ashes. Before he could even react, his vision was filled with a blinding flash of the sword's edge, and the next thing he knew, the world around him seemed to fracture. The sword slashed through the air, and in a dazzling display of power, the blood god was cut into hundreds of pieces, the scene looking as though reality itself had been sliced apart. Having accomplished this, Sergei quickly took out a syringe and expertly injected it into a blood clot, instantly filling the vial with the crimson fluid. As he withdrew the syringe, he noticed something astonishing. The countless blood clots, previously scattered after dismemberment, began flowing back at an incredible speed, rapidly reforming into the blood god. The speed of the regeneration was nothing short of remarkable. Sergei and Pietro exchanged glances, both equally stunned by the sight. The blood god's newly formed scarlet eyes locked onto Sergei, who was descending toward the now dry blood pool. His face grew cold with fury. Although he had the ability to regenerate, the process had been slowed, hampered by a strange force. That delay was a critical weakness. Realizing his current vulnerability, the blood god didn't hesitate. Cold and ruthless, he spread his arms and began chanting an ancient vampire incantation. Instantly, every pure-blooded vampire in the room felt an overwhelming sensation of doom. Their bodies froze, no longer under their control, as the crushing feeling of death washed over them. Eyes widening in despair, each vampire suddenly exploded into a cloud of blood. It was as if blood-red fireworks were blooming in every direction. The scattered blood gathered into a vortex, swirling toward the blood god at a terrifying speed, empowering him with every drop. Sergei and Pietro reacted instantly, attacking with seamless coordination. Pietro activated his high-speed movement, dashing toward the blood god faster than the eye could follow. The blood god barely had time to register Pietro's approach before the speedster's fist, now infused with the dark sheen of armament hockey, connected with his beautiful, pale face. The force of the punch, easily 200 to 300 tons, obliterated the blood god's head on impact, sending his body flying backward like a cannonball. Boom, boom, boom. Several stone pillars were shattered as the blood god's body careened into them, eventually smashing into the outer wall of the massive underground chamber. The impact created a giant crater, with cracks spreading out wildly as dust, smoke, and rubble filled the air. Meanwhile, Sergei had already activated his strongest ability. His eyes gleamed with a cold light as the cross sword in his hands darkened, imbued with the same armament hockey. Gripping the sword with both hands, Sergei unleashed a sweeping strike that sent a terrifying column of red flames spiraling upward like a fire tornado. The fiery vortex sucked in everything: air, rubble, even blood, and evaporated it instantly. Blade, who had been caught off guard, nearly got pulled into the vortex himself. He quickly stabbed his sword into the ground for support, but even then, he skidded across the floor as the immense force tried to drag him in. Through his sunglasses, Blade watched the red flame tornado with awe. The sight was more spectacular than anything he had ever seen, and yet his heart was filled with shock. It was that powerful, so powerful that even someone like Blade couldn't help but feel admiration. Could such power really come from a human? Or were Sergei and Pietro something else entirely? Mutants, perhaps. It was unbelievable. Boom. The fire tornado lasted only a short while before dissipating. The falling sparks in the air, combined with Sergei standing on the altar of the dry blood pool, made him look like someone straight out of myth, like a great hero. Sergei slowly stood up, glancing briefly at Blade before turning his gaze in the direction of the blood god. At that moment, Pietro descended from midair, landing with ease. Despite having been at the center of the fiery vortex, he was completely unharmed. Still, Pietro voiced his irritation to Sergei. "Hey, you nearly burned the clothes Natasha bought for me." He gestured to his jacket. This is the most popular new jacket this year. Sergei responded with a hint of sarcasm, can I buy you a drink when we get back? Just don't let Wanda find out, Pietro muttered, clearly resigned. She'd definitely give us a beating. Sergei rolled his eyes in mock disdain. This guy is Wanda's brother, yet he acts like he has no dignity at all. Then again, Sergei wasn't much better when it came to Wanda. No matter how much she scolded him, he could only shrug it off, knowing full well he wouldn't dare talk back to her. Your blasphemy annoys me. As the two talked, a gloomy voice floated over. Sergei and Pietro looked up to see the smoke and dust clearing at the ruins of the collapsed wall. In the massive depression, the blood god stood tall. Stepping over the rubble, half of his shattered head had already healed, while the other half remained gruesomely exposed, with blood and tissue squirming as it rapidly regenerated, a sight enough to make anyone sick. But Sergei and Pietro only frowned slightly. Despite the grotesque display, they weren't children sheltered from the horrors of the world. They'd faced countless bloody battles. They had endured inhuman pain and torture since childhood. This level of gore meant little to them. Pietro raised an eyebrow at the blood god. That self-healing is impressive. Even after losing your head, you bounce right back. The blood god's voice dripped with arrogance. Your strength is surprising, but it's a pity. As he spoke, his head finished regenerating. His dark red eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Though arrogant, he wasn't a fool. The brief skirmish revealed that these two humans were as strong as monsters. Fighting them head-on might mean losing, especially in his current weakened state. He had hoped to sacrifice his followers for strength, but Sergei and Pietro reacted too quickly, evaporating the blood of hundreds of vampires. An inexplicable fluctuation spread through the space, triggering an immediate alarm for Sergei and Pietro. Pietro's expression darkened as he moved to strike, but he suddenly felt weakness creeping in. His blood seemed to rebel, wanting to escape his body. Not just him, Sergei and Blade were affected too. What is this? Sergei frowned as his blood boiled uncontrollably. With his strength and deep knowledge of body control, he could keep it in check. But he could still feel the blood pushing against his veins like sharp thorns. Blade's condition was far worse. Blood particles seeped through his skin, drifting toward the blood god in a grotesque display. His extreme weakness forced him to kneel, using his sword to stay upright. He tried to rise, but the pain from his rupturing blood vessels and skin left him helpless. This is blood magic. I will drain your blood and return to power. The blood god spread his arms, his dark laughter echoing as a massive blood-red magic pattern formed across the ground. But despite the imminent danger, neither Sergei nor Pietro showed any signs of panic. Especially Sergei. He twisted his neck, his face expressionless and his will like steel, ignoring the intense pain as his blood strained against his veins. Clutching the crossed sword, he raised it slowly. His hands gripped the hilt as he positioned the sword diagonally above his shoulders, his stance exuding near perfection. A searing, fiery energy burst forth from him. He was like a volcano on the verge of eruption, ready to unleash his power. Pietro, recognizing Sergei's posture, knew exactly what was coming. Sergei was about to enter his overload state. This technique rapidly absorbed oxygen and burned blood, creating an explosive surge of power. Sergei had developed this secret ability himself, and even their boss, Leon, had been impressed by it. But the overload state came with a cost. A massive amount of blood would evaporate, amplifying Sergei's strength for a short time. Win or lose, once he exited the overload, he'd be left severely weakened. If it weren't for his exceptional physical condition and his heart's ability to pump blood rapidly, he might have died the first time he tried it. Sergei's tremendous energy temporarily disrupted the blood god's blood magic. The overwhelming pressure emanating from Sergei's body bore down on everything, making both the blood god and Blade feel sluggish, as if their bodies were trapped in quicksand. So this is his real power. Blade, still on his knees, finally showed emotion. Behind his sunglasses, his eyes locked onto Sergei, who stood atop the dry blood pool altar, blazing like an inferno. Flame wreathed his body, and even the ground beneath him turned black as if scorched. Blade had known Sergei was powerful, but witnessing it now left him in awe. Sergei was like a volcano erupting, radiating heat so intense that even thousands of square meters away, Blade felt as though his own body was melting. He was pinned down by the sheer force of it and could hardly move. The blood god, however, was feeling the full brunt of Sergei's power. Panic set in. His skin had already begun to melt, and only his self-healing abilities kept him from turning into a puddle of blood. This can't be. The blood god roared in disbelief. How can a mere human possess such power? You are nothing but creatures meant to take care of my desire for blood. You all are slaves. Desperate, the blood god performed an intricate hand gesture and chanted ancient blood magic, invoking forbidden spells. As he spoke, the entire underground chamber seemed to be engulfed in a terrifying red haze. The world felt inverted, chaotic, with all light drained from it. Everything was dim and colorless except for Sergei. In this darkened space, he was the only source of light. Bright and burning, like a star growing hotter and hotter. Bullshit, turn to ashes. Sergei's eyes glowed crimson as black lightning crackled from his sword, veins bulging on his forehead. With a final, powerful motion, he swung his sword forward. Boom! The space lit up as if it were day. A terrifying, red flame surged, transforming into a roaring fire dragon that charged at the blood god. Under the shocked gaze of Blade and the disbelieving, desperate eyes of the blood god, the fiery dragon completely engulfed him. Boom! The entire underground chamber was swept by flames. Under the gorgeous stars, on the bustling streets of New York City, a swift figure swung gracefully between the high-rise buildings. Soon, the figure reached the source of his unease, a building. With a sharp tug on his web, Peter Parker propelled himself to the top floor of a building across the street. His spider mask lifted, revealing a frown on his face. Standing at the edge of the rooftop, Peter could feel the unsettling vibrations below. What's going on with this building? He muttered, eyes narrowing as he scanned the scene. His enhanced vision allowed him to see the chaotic mess in the ground floor lobby. Broken glass littered the area, alongside piles of unknown ash and scattered weapons. His spider sense blared incessantly, making his head throb with alarm. He wanted to investigate, but his instincts screamed at him to stay put. The ground trembled more violently, as if something beneath the building was about to break free. As Peter hesitated, he suddenly gasped, "Oh no!" Boom! Peter's eyes widened as a massive explosion rocked the building. The first floor erupted in a terrifying wave of red flames, like a volcanic eruption, consuming everything in sight. The explosion shattered every window, sending glass shards raining down from the sky. The sheer force and heat of the blast terrified Peter. He knew that if he had gone in, he would have been reduced to ash. Gas explosion, or something more, Peter thought, bewildered. One thing's for sure, the gas pipeline must have been ignited. Suddenly, Peter's spider sense flared again. His eyes darted to three figures emerging from the inferno at incredible speed. Despite his reflexes, he could only make out blurry shapes. Those figures were none other than Sergei, Pietro, and Blade. But Sergei and Blade were in rough shape. Sergei was in a weakened state after an overloaded attack, and Blade had barely escaped the blood god's magic, nearly getting incinerated by Sergei's explosive move. Fortunately, Pietro used his high-speed movement ability to drag the two of them down the stairs. Even so, the intense heat was unforgiving to Blade's half-vampire physiology, leaving burn marks on his dark skin. Supporting the two half-conscious men, Pietro felt helpless. The blood god isn't that hard to deal with, Pietro thought, but, as Wanda said, magic is completely unreasonable. The blood god's super self-healing ability makes him tough, but it's the blood magic that's the real problem. Controlling someone else's blood, that's just unfair. He knew things wouldn't spiral out of control, though. Even if Sergei hadn't handled it, Pietro was confident they'd find a way. Everyone had their trump cards. Forget it, let's head back. At least the cars parked far away losing a ride would have been a huge loss, Pietro muttered, lugging the TW toward their parking spot. But before leaving, he glanced at the top of the building across the street. That single glance sent a jolt of panic through the little spider perched on the rooftop. Damn it, he spotted me. Peter thought, startled. He did. The soft, sweet female voice caught Peter off guard. He spun around quickly, only to see a beautiful girl standing behind him. She wore a gray sweatshirt and jeans, her beauty and striking presence making an immediate impression on Peter. When Peter saw the girl looking at him with her beautiful, curious eyes, he quickly stretched out his hand to greet her. Hey, hello, I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Really, my neighbors are usually rich, and you don't look like that, she teased, a playful smile on her face. Peter wasn't offended. Instead, he replied tentatively, hey, do you know those guys down there? I do. One is my twin brother, the other's family, and the cool guy. No clue, but I think he's Blade. Blade, cool. Peter suddenly felt his own nickname paled in comparison. So, do you know what's going on in that building? He asked. Pretty much. There's a summoning ritual happening underneath. It's being done by a certain blood tribe. Pietro, Sergei, and Blade should be handling it, the girl said, walking up beside Peter. She glanced down at the wrecked first floor of the building, shaking her head. Shish. Could sense Sergei's weakened state and knew what he had gone through. Blood tribe, blood god, is that what I'm thinking? Peter asked, his eyes wide. Sounds about right. Damn, are there blood-sucking creatures in New York? That's terrifying. I hope they're not interested in Spider-Man blood, Peter said, feeling his worldview shift. He'd always thought vampires were just a thing on TV, but now, knowing they might be roaming his city, it made his skin crawl. The thought of a blood god made it even worse. He imagined a massive, ferocious bat with blood-red eyes and sharp fangs. Trust me, your blood would be very appealing to them, she said, half-jokingly. Peter groaned. Don't say that, now I'm definitely having nightmares. He covered his head with his hands, looking like he was about to break down, which made the girl laugh sweetly. Well, it was nice to meet you, my friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Looking forward to our next encounter, she said, waving as she turned to leave. Peter watched in awe as she casually leapt off the rooftop. Standing alone, Peter crossed his arms, feeling a chill under the moonlight. He realized this situation was beyond his control, so he hurriedly swung away into the night. Damn it, what are these people up to? Late at night, the extremely busy director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, arrived at the Vampire Clan's building. The area had already been cordoned off by SHIELD agents, and even the New York police had been dismissed. What had really caught Fury's attention was the energy fluctuation detected at SHIELD's base. A strong one. It was unlike anything that they had ever seen. It wasn't hard to tell that someone was clearly causing trouble in New York again. When the mission report came in, Fury couldn't sit still. He rushed to the scene, only to find the first floor completely scorched, with all the clues swallowed up by the flames. He cursed under his breath. But when he followed the agents down 100 meters below ground, the sight made his eyelid twitch. It looked like a volcanic layer. The entire underground space, marked as 117, had been melted by extreme heat. Broken stone pillars, collapsed walls, and strange, indecipherable symbols carved into the blood-stained altar remained. Fury's eyes were drawn to the platform in the center, and he quickly figured out what it was. His suspicions were confirmed when an agent from the tech department came over with a tablet after scanning the area. According to the database, these text imprints match ancient patterns used by the vampire clan, the agent said. So, what was done here? Fury asked, frowning. It seems to have been an altar used to summon some kind of great being. Fury rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. This building was clearly the core of the vampire clan's operations, their base camp. Something went wrong during the summoning, leading to a fight with another group. Judging by the scene, all the vampires and whatever they summoned had been wiped out. For the first time, Fury thought about the mysterious organization he had been tracking, the one that always eluded him. So, what about the surveillance? Fury asked without much expectation. As he suspected, the agent replied without hesitation, the footage from today's surveillance was deleted. We tried to recover it, but had no luck. Whoever was behind it had covered their tracks perfectly, leaving no clues. Fury nodded, acknowledged the agent, and returned to the building's first floor. He lit a cigarette, exhaled a puff of smoke, and gazed up at the moon, which was half obscured by dark clouds. His mind wandered as he stared at the dim crescent, imagining shadowy figures in black sweatshirts and hoods, their faces hidden, powerful and unfathomable. Ever since Fury became aware of this mysterious force, he'd used SHIELD's resources to investigate unsolved cases that had piled up over the years. Every time he dug deeper, it was like trying to follow a thread hidden in thick fog. No matter how hard he tried to unravel it, the end always eluded him. The world was vast, and even with SHIELD's immense power, they couldn't control everything. And tracking down this force, one that could easily tamper with surveillance and manipulate military satellites, was even more challenging. One clue kept nagging at him: Natasha Romanoff. Specifically, a Russian city Barton had traveled to. Initial analysis from SHIELD suggested the base of this mysterious group might be in Russia. Agents were sent, but the returned empty-handed. It was as if this organization was nothing more than a mirage, a phantom, elusive and untouchable. Fury didn't know their numbers, their leader, their race, or their purpose. The only thing SHIELD knew was that this group had once helped the Mutant Academy, obliterated Stryker's base in a blitz, and supported a group of mutants. Could they be mutants themselves? Now, they had appeared in New York and Texas. Every group, every organization had a purpose, something that could be traced. But this group defied logic. Their actions were erratic, lacking any clear pattern or motive. And that terrified Fury. He had even reached out to Professor Charles for help, only to be flatly refused, despite offering the Mutant Academy favorable terms. For Charles to react that way, it meant he had reservations. Perhaps this was a power even he feared. The one slight comfort for Fury was that, so far, this mysterious group hadn't caused any overt damage to the world's order. Whenever they appeared, it was usually linked to events beyond ordinary comprehension. As Fury reflected on the events in the building that night, a vague realization came to him. It was as if the pieces were finally aligning, bringing him closer to understanding those elusive figures he had been tracking. His one good eye glinted with determination, just as Agent Hill's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Tony's got a situation," she said. "I'm listening," Fury replied. Obadiah, one of the Stark Industries directors, made a move. 30 minutes ago, he left his villa and went to Hell's Kitchen to meet with Kingpin at his building. Also, Obadiah's been secretly cultivating an armed force. His troops have entered New York. Kingpin. Fury raised an eyebrow. "I see. Keep a close eye on things, and send Coulson to bolster our presence. His mission isn't just to watch Tony Stark." "Understood." The communication cut off, and Fury took another drag of his cigarette. He wasn't surprised by Obadiah's actions. Tony's decision to shut down Stark Industries' weapons division had caused massive turmoil within the company. Stock prices had been plummeting, and it was no shock that Obadiah, desperate to seize control of the Stark Industries, would make such moves. What did surprise Fury was that a billionaire from the upper echelons of society would stoop so low as to meet with a criminal like Kingpin. Apparently, a heavily armed elite squad wasn't enough to settle his nerves. He needed outside help. Fury knew better than to underestimate Kingpin's power. As one of New York's most influential underworld leaders, he was always on SHIELD's radar. His resources and influence could be a real threat, even to someone like Tony Stark. But this new development gave Fury hope. If Kingpin was involved, Tony might face serious trouble, and in that chaos, Fury could find a chance to uncover the tip of the iceberg, the link to the mysterious force he'd been chasing. Sergei and Pietro returned to the manor, only to face Wanda's inevitable criticism. Seeing Sergei sprawled on the sofa, looking utterly defeated, Wanda's anger flared. "You two idiots. You both said you will not be underestimating the magic side of the world, yet here you are, having suffered a loss." In Wanda's eyes, they had indeed lost. Despite defeating the blood god, Sergei and Pietro had left themselves in a vulnerable state, which was unacceptable by the standards of their family. Leon never cared for honor in battle. His goal was to win without taking any unnecessary risks. What Sergei and Pietro had done ran completely counter to that philosophy, and they deserved to be chastised for it. Pietro casually grabbed 2 glasses of juice from the fridge, handed one to Wanda, and drank the other himself. He made no effort to offer Sergei a drink. Sergei, already enduring Wanda's verbal barrage, looked incredulous. "What about me?" he shouted at Pietro. Pietro simply shrugged with a "take it yourself" expression, clearly enjoying the moment. He wasn't feeling guilty, as he considered himself in the clear, having just been along for the ride. Wanda, however, wasn't about to let him off so easily. She turned her attention to Pietro. "And what about you? What were you doing, huh?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Pietro took a confident sip of his juice. "I saved them." Wanda wasn't impressed. "That's no excuse to cover up your mistake. When that witch was casting blood magic, you had plenty of time to use your high-speed movement and interrupt her. But instead, you just stood there and watched. This is not what Leon taught you." Pietro was momentarily lost for words. Wanda pressed on, not holding back. "I can't believe how reckless you both were. We must give it our all in any battle, and our safety must always come first." Sergei and Pietro were now reduced to silence, unable to argue back after Wanda's fiery reprimand. Pushkin and Alina sat quietly to the side, seemingly focused on the TV, but in reality, they were holding their little ones and eavesdropping on the conversation. In the end, Wanda handed down her harsh sentence for Sergei and Pietro's disobedience. "You'll both undergo 3 months of training. Leon will personally oversee it. It'll be pure hell waiting for you, so congratulations. Try not to die," she declared. "What?" both Pietro and Sergei blurted out. Sergei, who had been lounging lazily, suddenly sat up, his face stricken as if he'd been sentenced to hell. The punishment was too severe. Training under Leon was nothing short of brutal. He was known for beating them senseless with iron fists, then forcing them to drink nutrient solutions to recover, only to do it all over again the next day. 3 months of that, and they'd be lucky to survive without shedding their skin. But Wanda had already shifted into a cold, resolute mode, completely ignoring their pitiful looks. It was clear she had no intention of changing her mind. Defeated, both of them slumped back onto the sofa, looking as if all their dreams had been crushed. They seemed okay on the surface, but inside, they were already dead. Wanda's lips curved into a slight smile. Just then, footsteps were heard outside the door as Leon and Natasha entered. The kids cheered and rushed to greet them. "Leon, Natasha, all right, it's time for our little princesses to head to bed," Leon announced. "Ah, do we have to? Can't we stay up a little longer?" one of them pleaded. "Trust me, it's non-negotiable," Natasha responded with a smile. "Okay." The 3 little ones sighed but obediently walked hand in hand toward their room upstairs. Pushkin followed, being the good boy he was, under Natasha's watchful eye. Leon settled onto the sofa, glancing knowingly at Sergei and Pietro. Looks like you two are out of favor." The pair of them, who felt utterly defeated, looked like they were about to cry. Pietro, clinging to a shred of hope, asked. Wanda said 3 months. "Yes, that's right," Leon confirmed, crushing any last vestige of hope. Pietro gave up entirely, shutting his eyes and sinking into the sofa, resigned to his fate. Their expressions were so comically despairing that Leon, Wanda, and Natasha couldn't help but laugh. Then Leon dropped the real bombshell. "Well, it's not just you two. Everyone's entering a training period for 3 months to half a year." The laughter died down as reality set in. Once everyone was back together, the real challenge would begin. "Well, I don't know why, but I feel much better now," Pietro said weakly as he opened his eyes. Sergei, puzzled, asked, "Why so sudden?" Leon smiled softly. "Because I want to teach you something new." "Something new?" Sergei asked. "Yes," Leon continued. "Your observation hockey and armament hockey have been cultivated to a considerable level, but you're still just short of reaching the high level. None of you have awakened Conqueror's hockey yet. I plan to use these 3 months to stimulate that awakening." "Didn't you say that only 1 in 8 million people can awaken Conqueror's hockey?" Sergei asked, still confused. Leon nodded. "That's true. I don't fully know how to awaken Conqueror's hockey myself. Except for me, no one, whether it be you, Pietro, or anyone else, has successfully awakened it. People often think it means they don't have the conditions for it." He paused, then added, "Conqueror's hockey is innate. It can't be acquired or inherited from previous generations, it's determined by fate." Taking a sip of the juice Natasha had poured for him, Leon smiled confidently at the curious faces around him. But I've found a way to help you awaken it. Although they didn't fully understand why Leon was so confident, both Sergei and Wanda were excited. After all, Conqueror's Haki is incredibly powerful, and not everyone has the potential to handle it. Take tonight, for example, Leon explained. If Sergei and Pietro had Conqueror's Haki when facing the Blood God, he wouldn't have had a chance to release his blood magic. Conqueror's Haki shocks the spirit and soul directly. It can't be resisted by normal means. Leon's confidence came from one simple reason. He had Sky Blade. With its calculation matrix mode, he completely analyzed the core of his Conqueror's Haki. It can be said that Sky Blade's analysis has simplified the process of awakening Conqueror's Haki. Originally an innate aptitude, Sky Blade uses the advanced technology of the angelic civilization to awaken it in a scientific way. Not only that, Leon provided the necessary data and integrated the Navy 6 styles from the Marines to enhance Sky Blade's capabilities in creating new skills. This is why Leon decided to gather everyone for 3 months of intense training. With Sky Blade, a celestial computer, many complex things have become much simpler. Sky Blade has even analyzed magic and mirror spells that the Supreme Sorcerer once used. This means it can simplify many of Leon's ideas, absorb other systems, and create new techniques for Leon and his group to use. Signing up for the Sky Blade battleship turned out to be an invaluable investment for Leon. Although the others may not fully understand its power, they know that these 3 months of training will significantly boost their strength. Pietro and Sergei, who were initially hesitant, now felt eager to begin. Wanda's mention of the training was taken lightly at first, but in reality, both Pietro and Sergei had a deep obsession with gaining strength after enduring dark times. They wouldn't miss any opportunity to grow stronger. In their family, competition is a natural byproduct of their shared journey. Despite their differences in personality, they've all risen from ordinary individuals to powerful beings. While Leon has played a role as a catalyst, they would not have persevered without their own inner strength and determination. The training they undergo is grueling, both physically and mentally, and most people wouldn't be able to endure it. But having survived it, they've developed a shared spirit of perseverance that drives them to compete and grow stronger together. They don't want to be weaker than their comrades, and they strive to be reliable partners on the battlefield, ensuring that no one has to sacrifice due to their weakness. Pietro, eager to start, asked enthusiastically, "When will Sumarokov and Gennady be finished?" "It's almost time. They're different from you, they haven't found any clues yet. They'll gather tomorrow or the day after, but we still need to wait for Natasha to finish." "Isn't Natasha going to take another 3 months?" Pietro asked, sounding a little disappointed. Waiting 3 more months seemed like an eternity. Natasha's red lips curled into a sly, heart-stirring smile. She said softly, "The agreement was for me to resist the extraordinary within 3 months. But who says we can't shorten that time?" Pietro and Sergei both shuddered at Natasha's tone, despite her gentle expression. After all the time they'd spent together, they knew too well what her different expressions and tones meant. How would she shorten the time? Of course, it meant a great purge. New York was about to go through a terrible period of turmoil, and Pietro and Sergei could only pray for whoever was unlucky enough to get in the way. "Go to bed." Without hesitation, Pietro and Sergei bolted, not wanting to get caught up in any extra work. Natasha's half-smiling expression as she watched them flee told Leon that these two wouldn't be getting off easily in the future. When the two had escaped, Natasha shifted her focus to Leon and Wanda. Her bright, captivating eyes locked onto Leon's, emotions subtly flickering behind them. Leon sighed in defeat. "Sister, you're too good at this," he muttered, unable to resist her charms. He immediately gave in, adopting a playful stance. "Fine, I'm up for a bit of exercise. Then I'll join in too. Let's make a big deal out of it," Natasha replied with a smirk. "Who's our first target?" Leon asked. "Kingpin," Natasha said, drawing out the name. Hell's Kitchen, the darkest and most crime-ridden corner of New York, was where their target resided. Gangs, addicts, and criminals crowded the dirty, smelly streets. Here, every minute someone could die, while others came to unleash their darkest desires. Yet, amidst this chaos stood a gleaming building, the Chrysler Building, a symbol of luxury and power. While the streets of Hell's Kitchen were filled with filth and violence, this tall, shining structure remained untouched. This contrast between the grime and the luxury was the defining feature of Hell's Kitchen. And despite the chaos around it, no one dared to challenge the building owner's reign over the area. His building stood untouchable, and so did his empire. For now, and the building belongs to Kingpin, the world-class crime boss and underground emperor of New York's underworld. If the New York Police Department and the government are the rulers of the day, then Kingpin reigns over the night. But tonight, the underworld emperor was meeting with a figure of considerable status. In Kingpin's grand and spacious office, the floor was covered in rich red carpet, and expensive artwork hung from the ceiling. The crystal chandelier illuminated the room, making it seem even more extravagant. The walls were lined with paintings, wine racks, and other luxurious decorations, a display of ultimate opulence. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows was Kingpin himself, a 2-meter-tall, bald, and heavily built man dressed in a pristine white suit. A ring glittered on his large, thick fingers as he sat in a chair, surveying the room. Across from him sat another large man, this one in a black suit, Obadiah Stane. Both men were accompanied by their respective bodyguards, standing not far away, silently watching each other with expressions of cold caution. While both men were similar in appearance, bald and heavy-set, their statuses were worlds apart. Kingpin might be incredibly wealthy, but his identity was still tied to crime. In contrast, Obadiah Stane was an upper-class American billionaire, a position far above that of any gangster. Normally, a man of Obadiah's status wouldn't be caught interacting with someone like Kingpin. But now, he had something urgent to discuss, which was why he found himself sitting across the table from the notorious crime lord. On the glass table between them was a bottle of rare, expensive wine that Obadiah had brought as a gesture of goodwill. With a fake smile, he opened the bottle and poured a glass for both Kingpin and himself. The adult world is always driven by interests, and Obadiah understands this better than most. From the beginning, his view of Kingpin hasn't changed. No matter how wealthy or well-decorated he may be, Kingpin will never belong on the same stage as the true elite. This arrogance is deeply ingrained in Obadiah. Yet, there are moments when Obadiah reigns in this arrogance, presenting himself with warmth and equality. But once Kingpin's usefulness fades, that arrogance will resurface. Right now, Obadiah is still in the stage of restraint, recognizing that Kingpin still holds value. Kingpin is no fool, he knows this dynamic well. What sets him apart from Obadiah is his ability to play along and even tolerate the act. He knows that Obadiah doesn't want him to truly join the ranks of th. elite, but the opportunities and interests linked to Obadiah are worth enduring the pretense. And so, the two hypocritical men began their dance of negotiation and testing. Mr. Obadiah, as a major shareholder of a world-class military-industrial group, it's an honor to meet such a distinguished figure, Kingpin said. Even big figures need friends. I'm sure we'll become good friends, Obadiah replied. They clinked glasses. After taking a polite sip, Kingpin, with just the right amount of surprise, said, "The richness of this whiskey is truly incredible." Whiskey, British Isla, limited edition valued at $6 million, Obadiah remarked nonchalantly, flexing his connections. Kingpin understood the underlying message. Smiling, he added, "If I get to drink this, I believe I'll sleep well tonight." With a snap of Kingpin's fingers, a man who resembled a butler appeared, carrying an elegant tray. Kingpin picked up a gold foil cigar from the tray and handed it to Obadiah. Obadiah took it, a fleeting trace of disdain crossing his eyes before he smiled. Gurkha cigars, each priced at $1.36 million. Hand-rolled from the finest Himalayan tobacco, wrapped in gold foil, and adorned with a 5-carat diamond label, then infused with Remy Martin's Louis XIII Black Pearl. During production, all the craftsmen are required to work isolated from the world to avoid distractions, ensuring flawless quality, Fisk said with a touch of pride. Obadiah, appearing mildly impressed, waited patiently as the attendant lit the cigar's tobacco stems for him. Normally, cigars require the cap to be cut off, but this one was a luxury exception, skipping that step entirely. Once the tobacco stems were properly burnt, Obadiah blew gently on it, then took a slow drag, exhaling with satisfaction. "Perfect," he murmured, clearly enjoying the experience. Fisk laughed heartily. He followed the same ritual, though his demeanor was far less refined than Obadiah's upper-class presentation. With his scarf and round hat, Fisk embodied the image of a gangster boss, one whose power was built in the shadows. The two men puffed on their cigars in silence, though both knew exactly what was going on beneath the surface. This exchange, outwardly friendly, was a strategic game. Obadiah had initially gained the upper hand, steering the conversation with authority. But Fisk, never one to back down, subtly played his own move, rebalancing their power dynamic. It was a careful dance of dominance. After this brief but tense standoff, the two seemed to reach a silent understanding. They had sized each other up, and it was clear that neither was a fool. With that assessment made, Obadiah decided to cut to the chase. Removing the cigar from his mouth, he blew out a plume of smoke and flicked the ash off, speaking calmly, "Mr. Fisk, you know my position, and I know yours. I think we share some common ground. I'm just not sure if you're interested in Stark Industries weapons." Fisk didn't rush to respond, instead offering a hypocritical line, "What did you say?" "I'm a legitimate businessman." Obadiah wasn't swayed by the pretense and simply waited in silence for Fisk's real response. After a moment, Fisk leaned forward slightly. His gaze sharp. "I want to earn your friendship, Mr. Obadiah." "Friendship?" Obadiah leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Who wouldn't want to be your friend, Mr. Obadiah?" Fisk flattered him, before pivoting to a seemingly unrelated topic. "You might also be aware that the mayor of New York will be leaving office in 4 years. Obadiah's eyes narrowed slightly at the statement. "Are you planning to run for mayor of New York City?" he asked, taken aback by Fisk's boldness. The idea stirred something in Obadiah. The notion of a crime lord like Fisk running for office, even in a country as unpredictable as the United States, was almost too outrageous to believe. But when you think about it, it's almost not impossible. Why? Because aside from his identity as the Mafia Emperor, Kingpin is publicly known as a billionaire and philanthropist. Every year, Kingpin donates large sums to charity, making frequent appearances on the news and TV. Many New Yorkers know him as a great humanitarian. If he runs for office, his philanthropic image will definitely be heavily promoted. Generally speaking, there are two processes for electing a mayor. One is a popular election, and the other is an appointment by the municipal committee. A popularly elected mayor holds significant power, with executive authority to appoint or remove the city cabinet and the power to veto legislation. On the other hand, an appointed mayor, often referred to as a city manager, is accountable to the committee and lacks those same executive powers, including veto authority. If Kingpin were to be elected mayor, his political power might be limited. However, if he were to combine his legitimate authority with his underground influence, he could effectively control both the legal and criminal elements of the city. When Kingpin mentioned this plan, it was clear he needed the support of someone at Obadiah's level and the backing of the powerful interests behind him. The fact that Kingpin openly shared this idea meant he wasn't afraid of it being leaked. At that moment, Obadiah realized he had severely underestimated the man sitting in front of him. Faced with Obadiah's scrutiny, Kingpin calmly puffed on his cigar. The two locked eyes for a moment before Obadiah broke into a broad smile. I believe there will be many people supporting you when the time comes. You have done a lot of charity work, and your efforts will surely be rewarded. This statement carried a double meaning. A grin spread across Kingpin's plump face. I believe that too. With the first round of their test complete, Kingpin made his intentions clear, and Obadiah gave his answer. The conversation moved to the next phase. I imagine the playboy's recklessness has caused Mr. Stain some trouble. Is there anything I can do for you? I want him dead, but I need a certain skill he possesses first. Obadiah paused, holding his cigar, his tone unfiltered, laced with cold intent. Kingpin was unsurprised and gave a slight nod. What do you need from me? I know Mr. Fisk has an extraordinary team, and I could use their assistance, Obadiah said with a smile. Kingpin nodded again. It took considerable effort to bring them together. Of course, I never disappoint my friends. Obadiah emphasized the word, friends, and Kingpin's lips curled into a slight smile. He extended his hand. Without hesitation, Obadiah shook it. The handshake symbolized the beginning of their fragile alliance, though both understood it was tenuous at best. Can I meet them? I'm curious about such people. Of course. Kingpin never disappointed his partners. He motioned to a subordinate in the distance, who immediately nodded and spoke into his communicator. Moments later, there was a knock at the office door. The guard at the door opened it, revealing a group of figures, each with distinct shapes and sizes, men and women, some tall, some short. Among them were 2 women and 3 men. One of the men was massive, clad in heavy metal armor with a helmet shaped like a rhino's horn, his presence imposing. Bullseye, Lady Bullseye, Typhoid Mary, Sandman, Rhino, Kingpin introduced briefly. Bullseye and Lady Bullseye were both lethal assassins, but far beyond ordinary in strength. Bullseye had a natural throwing ability, capable of turning anything in his hand into a deadly projectile. He could slit a person's throat with a playing card, impale a skull with spit tooth, or kill a target from 100 meters away using a toothpick. Lady Bullseye, with her smoke-creating skills, was a master fighter, weapon specialist, with superhuman agility and expertise in stealth. Typhoid Mary had abilities far beyond the physical, creating psychic shields, launching devastating energy blasts, flying, and possessing strong telepathy. She could implant suggestions and fantasies into minds, a crazy but beautiful woman with multiple personalities. Sandman, as his name implied, could turn his body into sand, manipulating the surrounding environment to trigger natural disaster-level events like sandstorms. The Rhino had immense strength, durability, and impact power, reinforced by his specially designed Rhino armor, making him a destructive force on the battlefield. Kingpin summarized the abilities of his powerful subordinates quickly, without revealing too much. But even the surface-level details were enough to please Obadiah. He raised his glass, clinking it with Kingpin's, satisfaction clear on his face. After taking a sip, he laughed deeply. I like them. If they can handle this for me, I believe the future is ours. Kingpin was about to agree when a sudden voice interrupted him. What a delightful evening. Sorry to interrupt your little meeting. The slightly raspy yet charming voice cut through the room, causing everyone's expressions to change immediately. Bodyguards from both sides drew their guns and rushed to the edges of the room, surrounding Obadiah and Kingpin. Some even positioned themselves by the windows, ensuring no one could snipe from afar. The professionalism of the bodyguards was evident. Obadiah and Kingpin didn't panic. They exchanged frowns, clearly understanding that this wasn't an ambush from one another. Typhoid Mary and the others turned their focus to the door. On the other side, the sound of crisp footsteps grew louder and clearer. As the bodyguards trained their weapons on the door, there was a polite knock. Knock, knock, knock. And then a soft click. The door opened, and 2 figures stepped inside. A man stood in the doorway, dressed casually but with style. He wore an orange t-shirt paired with black sports shorts, a black, gray, and white plaid shirt jacket, and white sneakers. His slightly curly burgundy hair framed his figure perfectly, highlighting his refined and striking appearance. The man next to him was equally impressive, with a handsome, sharp face and tousled black hair. He had on a white undershirt beneath a gray, lightweight jacket, blue jeans, and dark brown shoes, exuding a carefree yet polished charm. Together, their striking looks and presence demanded attention, but what stood out even more was the place where they had appeared. Kingpin and Obadiah sat in chairs near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by bodyguards. Through the gaps in the crowd, they could see the fallen bodies of Kingpin's men behind the man and woman at the door. Kingpin's expression darkened. His office was on the top floor of the building, and his men were stationed throughout the entire structure. The fact that these two had made it here without raising alarms meant they had been dealt with quietly. These two were no ordinary intruders. Are they here for me? Or for Obadiah? Kingpin's mind raced. Obadiah, too, was sizing up the situation. He briefly glanced at Kingpin but chose to remain silent, letting the moment unfold. Typhoid Mary, however, had a different reaction. A twisted, ferocious grin spread across her face. She was captivated by the two newcomers. So perfect. I like you, she purred, her voice dripping with sadistic glee. I want to carve beautiful, bloody marks into your skin. The beauty of your torn flesh would almost make me orgasm. Typhoid Mary practically moaned, her eyes wild with excitement. Typhoid Mary had a striking, almost unnerving presence. Standing at 1.78 meters tall, she had a fit, voluptuous figure with pale skin and a rosy complexion. She wore black jeans secured by a brown belt, though her left leg's jean was torn open up to the thigh, revealing torn fishnet stockings underneath. Her upper body was clad in a white crop top that revealed just enough to draw attention, and over it, she wore a black leather jacket. A circular black tattoo on her exposed abdomen added a touch of edgy style to her appearance. But what stood out most was her long, blood-red hair, cascading like a river of fire. Her beauty was disturbing, almost morbid, and her fanatical gaze only heightened her dangerous allure. She seemed like a living embodiment of a succubus, someone capable of devouring anyone who crossed her path. Faced with a woman as volatile as Typhoid Mary, most would feel terror creeping into their bones. But the two newcomers, Natasha and Leon, showed no emotion. Leon, in particular, glanced at the crazed woman with disinterest, as though her deadly charm meant nothing to him. His sharp instincts kicked in instantly, analyzing her every detail. He could tell from a glance that Typhoid Mary had formidable abilities. Likely the strongest combatant among Kingpin's crew, and her skill set was remarkably well-rounded. At the same time, information from Sky Blade on her came as well. Her backstory, he realized, was one of tragedy, typical of an anti-hero with a violent and ruthless streak. Only someone like Kingpin could manage to keep her under control. With a team like this, even Little Spider would struggle to deal with them. As Typhoid Mary gazed at Leon with a twisted smile, her expression screamed, "I'm going to tear your heart out and savor it." But Leon ignored her completely, focusing his attention on Kingpin and Obadiah. This infuriated her. Her blood-red lips twisted into a cruel grin, and with a swift motion, she drew two razor-sharp knives from her back, ready to strike. But before she could move, Leon's figure vanished from where he stood, causing everyone in the room to tense up, their pupils shrinking in shock. In the next moment, before anyone could react, a golden cross star suddenly appeared in front of Typhoid Mary. She was mid-charge, but an overwhelming sense of danger washed over her, freezing her in place. A wave of fear paralyzed her entire body. The other bodyguards panicked, aiming their guns at Leon, but none dared pull the trigger. Meanwhile, beads of cold sweat formed on Typhoid Mary's forehead. Why can't I move?" she screamed internally. Her wild and lawless nature wanted to break free, to resist, but her body was completely unresponsive. It was as if her mind had become disconnected from her instincts. Leon, tall and imposing, looked down at her with a playful smirk. As she stared back in disbelief, he reached out, gently grasping her chin. He lifted it slightly and leaned in, his voice low and almost soothing as he said, "Be still, Mary." Her eyes met his, reflecting his handsome face in those deep, gem-like eyes. There was something unsettling in his gaze, a flicker of blood red that exuded an overpowering, commanding presence. Under its intensity, Typhoid Mary felt her very soul tremble, as though it might shatter under the pressure of this unseen force. She could sense a storm of raw power, like red lightning, swirling within him. To her shock, the violent ripples of this spirit stirred something within her. In the presence of this overwhelming aura, the fierce, sadistic Bloody Mary known for her cruelty felt something she never had before. A blush crept across her face, and she shyly averted her gaze. Everyone in the room was stunned. Typhoid Mary, Bloody Mary, the woman with multiple personalities, who was always bloodthirsty and violent, was now embarrassed. This was a woman so unhinged that only Kingpin had ever been able to control her. And now, a stranger had somehow managed to subdue her with just a look and a few words. Leon smirked, amused by her reaction, while Natasha, standing behind him, rolled her eyes in mild irritation. She didn't exactly like what she was seeing but knew it was just part of the game. Still, it's annoying, she thought. Kingpin, however, could no longer sit idly by. Rising from his chair, his immense frame gave off the aura of a tank rolling into battle. His face was hard and expressionless as he pushed past his bodyguards and took a heavy step forward, his voice low and menacing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his eyes dark with suspicion. Leon released Typhoid Mary's chin, standing tall as he met Kingpin's gaze. Behind him, Typhoid Mary stood dazed. Without missing a beat, Leon responded, his voice calm but thunderous in its impact. "For the next 3 months, you, your men, and anyone in New York with extraordinary abilities are to stay away from Tony Stark. If so much as a single hair on his head is harmed, every last one of you will die." The room fell deathly silent. Everyone stared at Leon in disbelief, their minds struggling to comprehend the audacity of his words. He had just threatened Kingpin, the ruler of New York's underworld, the man feared by all. It was as if they were witnessing a madman speak, someone completely insane enough to challenge the emperor of the underworld, Wilson Fisk. Doesn't he know what Kingpin means? Obadiah sat in his chair, his brow furrowed in confusion. Is this man really connected to Tony Stark? A cold glint flashed in his eyes. He subtly signaled his subordinates with a thumbs up, and one of them calmly nodded, his right hand slipping into his pocket as if readying something. For now, Obadiah decided to wait and see how Kingpin would react. Kingpin's men knew his temperament, and he did not disappoint. He let out a low, angry laugh. "How interesting. All these years, and you're the first person bold enough to say something like that to me." His voice dropped with malice. "I was just going to kill you, but now, you'll experience the most brutal torture and punishment the world has ever seen, just for those words." As soon as the words left his mouth, Bloody Mary, who had moments before been shy, suddenly wore a sick, twisted grin. She pulled out her twin blades from her waist, and with a wild, graceful motion, slashed them through the air, aiming for Leon's shoulders. At the same time, Sandman, Rhino, Bullseye, and Lady Bullseye sprang into action, attacking Leon and Natasha, who stood near th. door. But before anyone could fully comprehend what was happening, a foot, glowing with a golden light, was already connecting with Bloody Mary's face. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. Boom! Under the horrified and shocked gazes of everyone, there was a deafening roar as Typhoid Mary was ruthlessly kicked away. Dragging a golden trail of light behind her, she crashed into several bodyguards before slamming into the wall, which crumbled under the impact, sending smoke and dust into the air. The expensive crystal chandeliers above swayed violently, and the lights flickered. Bullseye, Lady Bullseye, and Rhino, who had been ready to attack, stopped dead in their tracks, frozen in shock. All eyes turned toward Leon, who slowly lowered his slender right leg, the atmosphere instantly turning heavy and silent. Even Obadiah, who had remained calm throughout, finally reacted, standing up slowly as cold sweat formed on his forehead. What just happened? Kingpin had boasted about how powerful his team was, especially Mary, yet she had been taken out with a single kick. And no one else had even moved. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Obadiah gave a frantic glance at his bodyguard, silently ordering him to retract whatever command he had given earlier. The bodyguard, snapping out of his stupor, broke into a cold sweat as he trembled, frantically fumbling with his hands in his pockets to cancel the hidden order, his fingers moving so fast they nearly broke. That was too fast. If his men had acted, it would have been a massacre. Leon's swift and devastating kick had silenced the entire room. Despite the tension, Kingpin maintained his composure, though his arrogance had faded. His tone, now more cautious, lacked the same confidence. "Who are you?" Kingpin asked, eyes still sharp but uncertain. Leon, calm as ever, replied, "This doesn't concern you." "What's your answer?" Kingpin hesitated, his gaze full of both ferocity and doubt. He couldn't fully gauge the strength of the man before him, but the power behind that kick was undeniably terrifying. Mary had attacked from such a close range, and yet Leon had kicked her away effortlessly. Whether she was alive or dead was unclear. Even for a combat master like Kingpin, whose physical abilities and reflexes had reached the peak of human potential, he couldn't follow the speed of that kick. What he had seen, however, was the golden light that radiated from Leon's strike, an ability that was far from ordinary. If Kingpin agreed to Leon's terms, it would put all his dealings with Obadiah and his future plans in jeopardy. Worse, his reputation in the underworld would take a massive hit. His name Kingpin was synonymous with power and status, but if he backed down from two unknown individuals today, his dominance would falter. Rival gang leaders would undoubtedly seize the opportunity to unite against him. Weighing the consequences, Kingpin's hesitation evaporated. He had made his decision. Leon, with his heightened awareness and insight, could sense Kingpin's shifting emotions. He sighed internally, knowing what was coming. So predictable, he thought. His skill at bluffing still hadn't reached perfection. "Kill them," Kingpin bellowed, shrugging off his coat. At his command, Bloody Mary, buried in the debris, suddenly surged back to her feet, breaking through the cloud of dust and smoke. A wave of intense spiritual power erupted from her, distorting the air around her. The blood trickling down her forehead gave her a twisted, feral look. She extended her hand, using her ability to create a force field. Leon and Natasha were instantly enveloped by it, their bodies feeling as if they were carrying the weight of a mountain. At the same time, Kingpin's men opened fire, their guns roaring as bullets tore through the air. Bang! 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 Not only that, but Sandman's arm morphed into a giant sand hammer, swinging down toward Leon with crushing force. Rhino lowered his head and charged at Leon with all his might, while Bullseye and Lady Bullseye darted toward Natasha, daggers gleaming in their hands. In seconds, a deadly web of attacks closed in on the two of them. One wrong move, and they'd be torn to pieces. But Leon didn't flinch. He stood there, unmoving, watching the chaos unfold with an almost divine detachment, his expression one of contempt, as if he were a god looking down on the foolishness of mortals. His indifference only ignited a stronger flame in Bloody Mary's twisted heart. She had fallen in love with this man, but her love was violent, drenched in blood. She wanted to possess him, to bind him to her through cruelty and force. Unfortunately for her, Leon had no intention of giving her that chance. Just as the attacks were about to land, Leon's eyes sharpened. In an instant, like a dormant volcano erupting, a surge of terrifying, raw energy exploded outward from him. Boom. For a moment, it felt like the entire space had frozen. Bullseye, Lady Bullseye, the massive sand hammer poised above Leon, Rhino, and the hail of bullets all seemed suspended in time. But in the next instant, an unimaginable terror exploded outward, an overwhelming force like a colossal wave, sweeping through the room, destroying everything in its path. Those closest to Leon screamed as they were flung violently by the sheer force of his dominating aura. The floor-to-ceiling windows shattered, sending glass cascading down from the top of the building. Bodyguards were hurled outside, plummeting to the ground. Others were slammed into walls, crushed against wooden frames, or thrown onto desks. The entire building's exterior windows shattered, and the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling broke apart, raining shards of glass. The once bright office was now dim, filled with swirling debris and shattered glass. The room looked as though it had been ravaged by a flood, chaos and destruction everywhere. The building itself trembled under the force of the impact, cracks forming along the walls, load-bearing beams, and office floor, threatening to collapse at any moment. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, most unconscious from the force of Leon's spiritual onslaught. Only Bloody Mary and Sandman managed to cling to a shred of consciousness, though barely. Kingpin was the only one still standing, albeit struggling under the weight of Leon's terrifying aura. His mental will and immense physical strength allowed him to resist the full impact, though it was clear Leon had consciously spared him from the worst. Obadiah, on the other hand, was less fortunate. Being too close to the shattered window, he would have followed the bodyguards out of the building had it not been for a few unlucky men who cushioned his fall. Even then, he found himself hanging by the edge of the office floor, clinging desperately to the ledge. His desire to survive fueled his strength as he gripped the edge, his dizzy mind forcing him to pull himself up. He lay there, panting heavily, barely hanging on. Talk, talk, talk. In the dimly lit office, the crisp sound of footsteps echoed. Moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, casting faint reflections on the ground. Kingpin, kneeling on one knee, was drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. He looked up slightly, seeing brown shoes and blue jean-clad legs standing before him. His heart filled with shock, as if he were trapped in a surreal nightmare. Never in his wildest thoughts did he imagine that someone so young, practically a child compared to himself, could possess such an overwhelming and monstrous presence. It wasn't just physical strength or mental prowess. Kingpin could feel the sheer, unfiltered essence of power radiating from this young man, a god-like spirit exuding authority, unlike anything he had ever encountered. Kingpin, the man who had faced countless adversities, whose will was forged in iron, felt it crumble under the immense pressure of this godlike energy. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing before something far beyond human. The realization hit him: the person standing in front of him was a monster. No wonder Leon was so confident, looking down on him like he was nothing. Kingpin raised his head further, meeting Leon's gaze. To him, Leon's face, calm and unwavering, was like the gaze of death itself. There was a stillness in his eyes, of pure, almost peaceful serenity. But it was this calmness that stung Kingpin the most, because it was the calm of someone who didn't see him as an equal, or even a person. To Leon, Kingpin was just an ant, something insignificant that could be crushed at any moment, with no more thought than squashing a bug. Kingpin knew he had survived the ordeal not just because of his physical endurance and iron will, but because Leon needed something from him. Leon's calm voice broke the silence. "Can you fulfill my request?" Kingpin gritted his teeth, the humiliation still fresh. "You're only asking that those with extraordinary abilities don't take action for 3 months." Kingpin repeated, his voice wavering with a mix of disbelief and bitterness. "It is only a simple request." "Then, I agree." There was no hesitation. Kingpin had no choice but to accept defeat. The situation was an absolute disaster. No one in the underworld knew better than him that failure left no room for demands. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Fisk. I hope our next meeting won't be under such circumstances," Leon said politely. With that, Leon turned and walked toward the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, Natasha following closely behind. They passed Obadiah, who lay trembling on the floor, too terrified to move. Neither of them even glanced at him before they leapt out of the building, descending from the great height with ease. The office, now a war zone of shattered glass and debris, fell silent once more, with with only the heavy breaths of Kingpin, Obadiah, and the others filling the air. Bloody Mary and Sandman, their strength spent, finally relaxed from their strained states and collapsed, unconscious. But despite her pale face, Bloody Mary bore a twisted, almost satisfied expression. Kingpin, the mastermind of New York's criminal underworld, should have had the mental fortitude to recover from this. His ability to adapt had always been second to none, but this time, his confidence felt shattered. There was a gap between him and Leon, an insurmountable difference in power that left him questioning everything. Looking around at the destruction, the cracked walls, and the crumbling building, Kingpin realized something terrifying. Leon had nearly brought the entire structure down by sheer force of will. Yet, from the man's casual demeanor, there hadn't been the slightest hint of strain or exhaustion. It was clear that Leon's true strength far surpassed what he had just shown. What could he do now? Revenge? The idea was laughable. Kingpin didn't even know who Leon was, what his background was, or what gave him such unimaginable power. Plots and schemes. Kingpin had endured countless trials, even moments of despair, such as when his wife and children were killed, leaving him feeling powerless. But this was different. This felt worse. For the first time in years, true helplessness and despair weighed down on him. His eyes turned hollow as the minutes passed in silence. Finally, he shook off the sense of futility, forcing himself back to reality. What incredible power, he muttered, the awe in his voice almost reverent. Slowly, the emptiness in his eyes faded, replaced by the familiar fierce, domineering glare. Kingpin stood with difficulty, ignoring his unconscious men. His gaze shifted to Obadiah, who was still lying near the edge of the broken window. Mr. Stain, Kingpin began coldly, it seems our deal will need to change. Obadiah stared back at Kingpin, realizing that now they stood in the same positions where Leon and Kingpin had started moments before. Under the moonlight, a billionaire, a board member of Stark Industries, and the emperor of the underworld stood silently, hands clasped together. The quiet meeting stretched on for an hour, with no one knowing what was discussed. Obadiah eventually departed, leaving Kingpin standing alone at the edge of the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the departing luxury car. He murmured to himself, I will find you. I'll make you regret looking at me like that. With those words, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the chaos that had overtaken his domain. The aftermath of the Kingpin building incident couldn't be kept hidden from those who were paying attention. Many gang leaders had long been eyeing Kingpin's position, and within a short time, the news had spread to them. While they had always coveted his power, these influential crime bosses, each with their own deep connections, had to acknowledge Kingpin's dominance. His iron grip extended not only over New York but also to many other parts of the world. Yet, despite his power, he had been humiliated in his own stronghold, the Kingpin building. The irony made them laugh, but their amusement was mixed with fear of the mysterious duo responsible for the event. How strong must they be to force Kingpin, of all people, into submission? According to the reports from those close to the incident, a terrifying force had shaken the entire building. The impact caused deep cracks in the structure, and even the ground around it was affected. The building now stood on the brink of collapse. In response to the speculation, the next day, Kingpin issued a declaration to the entire New York underworld. He announced that for the next 3 months, anyone with extraordinary abilities was forbidden from taking any action, whether it be robbery, gunfights, or anything else. He made it clear that anyone who disobeyed would face his bloody vengeance at any cost. Join Patreon if you want for additional chapters. Patreon.com, GreekGreenGlass. Chapter 19 up to Chapter 127, Kingpin's declaration undeniably sent shockwaves through New York's major underworld factions. Confusion reigned. No one could understand why he had made such an unusual move. What was clear, however, was the seriousness of his decree. Many gangs decided to lie low, wary of taking any action. True to his word, Kingpin's forces cast a wide net, brutally retaliating whenever extraordinary events were involved. Within just 2 days, over a dozen murders had been committed, each scene marked by Kingpin's bloody insignia. In several cases, the victims had been beaten to death, a clear sign that Kingpin had taken matters into his own hands. Realizing he wasn't bluffing, the city's major crime syndicates quickly fell in line. As long as they avoided dealing with anything extraordinary, they could continue business as usual. This sudden change in the criminal landscape alarmed S.H.I.E.L.D., especially its director, who was nearly stunned by the developments. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of New York, a luxury car escorted by several black SUVs pulled up to a villa on the West Coast. The guards recognized the familiar insignia on the car's front, and the metal gates opened automatically. The car drove down the path toward the villa's garage. As the rear door of the luxury vehicle opened, Kingpin, dressed in a crisp suit and clutching his cane, stepped out with his usual stoic expression. He entered the villa, but the moment he crossed the threshold into the living room, he and his bodyguards instantly sensed something was amiss. Sitting on the sofa in the luxurious but supposedly empty living room was someone who should not have been there. Click. More than a dozen bodyguards swiftly reacted, drawing their guns and aiming at the intruder's back. One bodyguard raised his fist, preparing to advance, but Kingpin's eyes flashed as he extended a hand, halting the action. In the stunned silence, Kingpin calmly ordered, "You all, leave." Yes. There was no further explanation for Kingpin's words. The others didn't dare ask questions and quickly left the villa. Kingpin strode over to the sofa across from the man sitting there, his presence commanding as always. He looked at the man in front of him, dressed in a black trench coat with a single eye staring back. "Do you know what I hate?" Kingpin growled. "When people act mysterious with me." "I'm well aware," the one-eyed man replied calmly. "I made sure to prepare for our meeting, Mr. Fisk." Kingpin's eyes narrowed with ferocity. "What department are you from?" "FBI, CIA." The man leaned back slightly. "I think my authority is far greater than the ones you mentioned." "I'm with SHIELD." "SHIELD," Kingpin muttered, his expression changing subtly. "From what I've heard, it's a highly secretive organization, operating within the US government, with immense power and global influence. You're responsible for handling extraordinary events. Congressman Smoot and the party behind him are well acquainted with you, Mr. Fisk," the man added. Kingpin's expression grew darker. This stranger had just named some of his most critical connections. If Kingpin didn't understand the threat now, he wouldn't be who he was. The bald man didn't waste time on pleasantries. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring Kingpin down with his one good eye. "Believe me," the man said, "I couldn't care less about your criminal activities. What interests me are the two people who nearly brought down your building." Kingpin smirked. "That's quite interesting. So, what can you tell me about them?" The man didn't answer directly, but Kingpin could sense his caution. "Are you planning revenge?" "Who knows," Kingpin replied, neither confirming nor denying it. The bald man didn't seem to care about Kingpin's motives. In fact, Kingpin's presence helped maintain a certain balance in New York. If he were to fall, the power struggle between the other gangs would undoubtedly ignite chaos. Kingpin, in his own way, was still useful to him. "If you ever decide to go after them and want revenge, contact me first. I'll take control of your assets. I don't want New York to descend into chaos." Kingpin wasn't intimidated by the statement. He simply shook his head and raised a finger. "No. For me, understanding my enemies is what matters most. Just because I want to know about them doesn't mean I'll risk everything in pursuit of revenge." In truth, Kingpin intended to study his opponents. If he discovered their power was within the range of what he could overcome even at a steep cost, he would have no hesitation in pursuing revenge. But if it exceeded his limits, he wouldn't go looking for a death sentence. The bald man understood as well. "As part of our deal, I can tell you that before this, many vampires in New York were slaughtered." Kingpin's grip tightened on his walking stick at the news. He was powerful and knew much about the hidden world, beyond just the public knowledge of mutants. He was aware of many legendary creatures, undead beings like vampires and werewolves. He knew about the vampires in New York, though their business interests never overlapped with his. As a result, he'd never had direct dealings with them. However, he was aware of their strength. Vampires, by nature, were faster, stronger, and had sharper reflexes than humans. They were also skilled in combat. The vampires were undeniably powerful, and even Kingpin avoided provoking them. Yet, these beings had been wiped out by the two individuals in question. From the way the bald man spoke, it was clear this wasn't just about two people. It suggested an entire organization or force behind them. Taking a deep breath, Kingpin couldn't shake the memory of those calm, unforgettable eyes. Without overthinking, he made a decision. "What do you want to know?" "I want you to describe those two individuals in detail." The man was young, maybe 17 or 18, with black hair and sharp features, Kingpin faithfully recalled based on his memory. Once he had finished his description, the bald man stood up. "Thank you for your assistance." With that, he left the villa without hesitation. Kingpin's eyes flickered. Under the shifting light, his face was cast half in shadow, half in light. It can be said that misfortunes never come singly, and for Kingpin, the troubles were far from over. During the day, Hell's Kitchen appeared no different from any other New York neighborhood. People bustled about, going to work, shopping, and running errands. Under a large billboard stood Bloody Mary, tall and striking, dressed in a black jacket with scarlet red hair flowing over her shoulders. Her dark, edgy appearance, combined with her morbidly delicate beauty, made her an eye-catching figure. To those unfamiliar with her, she might seem intriguing. But those who knew her quickly turned pale and avoided her. When Bloody Mary lost control, the results were always disastrous. Her face was unusually rosy, and her intense, beautiful eyes held a strange affection as if she were waiting for someone. A few moments later, a luxury car approached and stopped beside her. The door opened to reveal Kingpin, dressed in his usual suit, sitting inside. Gripping his cane with both hands, he turned his head and spoke in a deep voice. "Mary, I'm very surprised by your decision. I never thought you'd be the first to leave me." Indeed, Kingpin was shocked and angry that his most loyal lieutenant had asked to leave him. Bloody Mary, who had always been a trusted and powerful ally, was now walking away. Her abilities were formidable, and she was perhaps even more trusted than Bullseye. Losing her would be a major blow to Kingpin. "I'm going to find him," Bloody Mary said bluntly, making her intentions clear. Her loyalty to Kingpin had vanished, and she now regarded him as a stranger, her impatience evident. Kingpin knew exactly who she was referring to. He also saw the deeper reason behind her shift in attitude. Among her many personalities, the most violent and cruel, Bloody, was in control, followed by her other adventurous, violent side, Typhoid Mary. These personas allowed her to fully utilize her dangerous abilities. The other, more peaceful or cowardly personalities lacked the power to bring out her full potential. This shift in Bloody Mary's loyalty was due in part to Kingpin's influence. For a long time, he had skillfully maintained control over her most dominant personalities Bloody and Typhoid, using his courage, ruthless nature, and sheer force to earn their devotion. These two personalities had been captivated by his brutality and power. But that night, everything changed. The appearance of the mysterious man shattered Bloody's allegiance to Kingpin. She had always admired strength, domination, and ferocity, traits Kingpin embodied. However, after seeing the man, she knew he surpassed Kingpin in all these aspects. Naturally, her loyalty shifted, and now she was determined to seek out the one who truly had the aura of a king. Kingpin, aware that there was no way to alter her thinking, stared at her with murderous intent in his eyes. "Mary, you know what happens to those who betray me," he warned coldly. "I do," she responded, her voice filled with disdain. "But you're no longer fit to be my boss. That night, in front of that man, you were nothing but a pathetic loser. Get out of my way, Kingpin. Don't stop me from finding him, or I'll tear your heart out." Her expression turned as fierce and violent as her words. "You're asking for death," Kingpin roared. Days of bottled-up humiliation finally erupted. With a thunderous boom, he lunged out of the car, his ring-covered hand moving at an almost imperceptible speed, aiming for Bloody Mary's head. She laughed maniacally. "Kingpin, I told you you're just a loser. You're no longer worthy of my loyalty." As she spread her arms, a terrifying force surged from her, altering the gravity around them. Kingpin's movement, including the hand reaching out to grab her, abruptly stopped midair. Bang! Behind them, the luxury car crumpled under the sudden gravitational pressure, as did nearby street signs and trash cans. The driver, caught in the onslaught, suffered the worst fate. His head was crushed, and his internal organs were pulverized as blood seeped from the shattered remains of the driver's seat onto the street. Bloody Mary inhaled the scent of blood, a cruel smile curling on her lips. Though Kingpin stood before her, veins bulging in his forehead with fury, she knew continuing the fight was pointless. Her gravitational power alone wasn't enough to kill him. Facing Kingpin's silent, enraged stare, she mockingly placed her index finger to her lips and blew him a kiss. "Goodbye, Mr. Fisk," she teased, her voice dripping with malice. With that, she turned and strutted toward a nearby alley, her steps seductive, her figure fading into the darkness. As she left, the gravitational field around them dissipated. Though Kingpin's face remained expressionless, his heaving chest betrayed his anger. He glanced back at the crushed car, then slowly pulled out his phone. By this point, anyone nearby had already fled, terrified by the brief but intense exchange. In Hell's Kitchen, anyone lacking discernment would have died long ago. Kingpin ignored the chaos around him. After making a quick phone call, he simply whispered, "Come pick me up." Once he hung up, he stood there, speaking quietly to himself, "Mary, you can't afford the price of betraying me." While New York's underworld was in turmoil, the one responsible for all of it, Leon, had already left the city along with his entire family. Flying a Blackbird jet, they had traveled to a remote part of the Pacific Ocean, where an ancient group of islands lay untouched by modern civilization. The main island, vast and lush with pristine vegetation, was surrounded by smaller islets. This would be their training ground for the next 3 months. Leon had instructed Keisha to use advanced spatial isolation technology to conceal the island group within a radius of several kilometers. To the outside world, it appeared as if the islands didn't even exist. Any ships that approached within 70 to 80 kilometers of the area would be subtly redirected by the spatial barrier, none the wiser. Leon, Wanda, Pietro, Sergei, and the others arrived on the island, their excitement great. Everyone was brimming with energy as they set out to build a large 3-story villa near the coast. Thanks to their enhanced physical abilities, they could chop down trees with a single strike. Having built wooden villas in the Ural Mountains before, they had the experience and skill to construct the house quickly. In just one day, they completed a spacious 3-story villa, spanning over 1,000 square meters. However, this villa was more a nostalgic project than a necessity. They had no intention of staying on the island for an extended period. It was not a closed-off retreat for rigorous training but a place to rest when they grew tired from their daily practice. Every night, Clarice would teleport them back to the manor, so the simple wooden villa sufficed as a temporary base. That evening, they celebrated with a grand bonfire feast on the beach. The scent of various grilled foods filled the air, mingling with the salty sea breeze. Leon and the others sat by the fire, drinking juice and beer, talking and laughing as they shared stories of their adventures around the world, hunting strange and undead creatures. The younger members of the group listened in awe, completely captivated by the tales. Especially when Gennady shared his experience from London, dealing with vampires and werewolves, everyone listened closely. Most werewolves are brutish, violent creatures, but their physical strength and terrifying recovery speed surpass that of vampires. Werewolves and vampires have a deep-rooted rivalry, though the vampires seem to be more intelligent. Gennady discovered that they may have some connections with the British government or military. An elite team has been formed, whose combat skills are exceptionally well coordinated. They've developed silver and ultraviolet bullets, which are highly effective against werewolves. However, werewolves have also managed to get their hands on similar weapons, making them just as deadly to vampires. Gennady stayed in the shadows, observing, taking advantage of the chaos. During his time there, he learned that both vampires and werewolves have ancient ancestors, apparently very powerful figures. He had planned to investigate further but was called back before he could delve deeper. Still, it's not an issue, Sergei has already obtained the vampire blood they needed. Gennady suspects that there will be significant changes in the dynamics between vampires and werewolves in the future and intends to look into it after the 3 months of training are complete. He remains highly interested in these two ancient beings. After a long night, the next day arrived. Following breakfast, training officially began. The group stood on the beach, girls in vests and shorts, boys shirtless. Everyone wore serious expressions, even the youngest among them, though this drew some laughter. Now we begin. In the first stage, I'll teach you 6 combat techniques, Leon announced, wearing only shorts. These 6 techniques will maximize your control over your body. He continued, the 6 techniques are Iron Body, Shave, Paper Art, Moonwalk, Tempest Kick, and Finger Pistol. Iron Body tightens the muscles and controls blood flow, making the body as hard as iron for defense. However, with your mastery of armament hockey, Iron Body's real value is in learning to control your muscles and blood. Whoosh! Leon stood still as his perfectly toned muscles suddenly tightened. The group watched closely, their enhanced mental and physical abilities, a result of the super soldier serum, helping them grasp the technique quickly. Like Steve Rogers, they could absorb and remember complex strategies with a single glance, and with years of training, their muscle conditioning had reached remarkable levels. Learning Iron Body wasn't a difficult task for them. Next came Shave. Shave involves kicking the ground dozens of times in an instant to generate a strong rebound force, allowing for high-speed movement. Whoosh! Leon's figure blurred as he vanished from his spot and reappeared a short distance away, repeating this process rapidly. He moved so fast that afterimages trailed behind him as he dashed across the beach. Sergei, Gennady, and the others watched with their eyes gleaming. Learning the shave technique could finally close the speed gap with that pest, Pietro. Pietro often used his high-speed movement to taunt and toy with them during battles, which irritated them to no end. Pietro, meanwhile, shrugged and sighed. This technique was useless to him. Leon continued, next, there's Paper Art, which involves relaxing your muscles and sensing the changes in the air around you. It allows you to move like paper, avoiding the enemy's attacks with fluid grace. He demonstrated the next technique, Moonwalk. It uses explosive kicking power to make you appear as if you're vanishing. You can move midair with subtle, controlled kicks. Then came the Tempest Kick. This technique lets you attack by creating a high-speed vacuum with your kick, generating powerful strikes. He shifted to Finger Gun. With this move, you tighten your finger muscles, or use armament hockey, to make your fingers so strong they can penetrate a human body like a bullet. After demonstrating each of the 6 techniques, Leon concluded, these 6 moves will significantly enhance your combat effectiveness. But there's another secret behind them, the Life Return technique. The group listened intently as Leon introduced this new ability, a powerful skill he had derived from studying the human body's structure with the Sky Blade. Life Return was an advanced technique in the One Piece world, but here, it had become something even greater. This skill allows you to control various body functions, including your organs and hair. For example, you can quickly swallow food, digest it, and restore energy and vitality in a short time. You can also accelerate hair growth and use it in combat. He continued, beyond that, mastering Life Return can help you control your hockey and other abilities. The potential is huge. However, they also had downside. Devouring food to restore stamina comes at the cost of some vitality. But with the computing power of Sky Blade number 7, he could eliminate that drawback, using energy consumption instead. The group was stunned by the extent of Leon's abilities, including Natasha, Sergei, and the others. They hadn't expected such a vast arsenal of skills at his disposal. Still, it presented a golden opportunity to strengthen their powers. Without further delay, everyone eagerly began learning the 6 techniques in Life Return, while Leon provided guidance, helping them master these abilities step by step. With a solid foundation, Leon, in cooperation with Sky Blade, continued to monitor and guide the group throughout the training process. Their learning speed was astonishing. Soon, it wasn't unusual to see Natasha using Moon Step to fly around the beach, her slender legs kicking in midair. As she moved, a long blue energy slash would descend from the sky, carving a trench hundreds of meters long in the calm sea. Meanwhile, Sergei and the others seemed to appear and disappear in rapid succession, their movements creating afterimages. To an outsider, it would have looked like ghostly figures darting around in broad daylight. A month passed since this intense training began. During this time, everyone had reached a high level of mastery over the 6 techniques, and they had also become proficient in the life return technique. Now, it was time for the second stage of their training, one that Leon would personally oversee. Flying slashes. On the familiar beach, Leon stood in front of the group, speaking confidently like a seasoned swordsman. Your strength is impressive, but you're missing a long-range attack unless you can cultivate armament hockey to a high level. Until then, flying slashes can fill that gap. He gestured to the group. Watch closely. Holding an exquisite, luxurious cross sword in his right hand, Leon turned towards the sea. As he raised the sword high, a terrifying, sharp aura radiated from him, distorting the air around him. The intensity of his presence caused Sergei and the others to instinctively step back. In the next moment, Leon's gaze sharpened like a blade. With one powerful motion, he swung the cross sword towards the sea. Boom! Before Sergei and the others could comprehend what had happened, a massive golden slash, hundreds of meters wide, was unleashed. The devastating force cut through the sea, splitting it in two for as far as the eye could see. The seabed was visible in the gap, along with some unfortunate sea creatures that had been severed by the slash. For a moment, the sea stood divided. Then, with a loud rush of water, the ocean began to fill the void, and soon, it returned to its natural state. Fought! Sergei and the others murmured in awe, utterly dumbfounded by the sheer power they had just witnessed. Pietro was so shocked that he nearly blurted out a curse, but before he could finish, Wanda and Natasha shot him a glare, causing him to swallow the last word. However, that didn't stop everyone's eyes from lighting up with excitement and awe. It was unbelievably cool and terrifyingly strong at the same time. Even from such a long distance, without being directly in the slash's path, everyone felt a chill. The mere thought of that sharp, devastating attack was enough to make them imagine anything in its way being sliced cleanly in half. This was the flying slash from One Piece. However, the version deduced by Sky Blade's calculations was different. In One Piece, the ability to cut iron comes from feeling the breath of an object. But with Sky Blade, they could bypass this process entirely, using the most scientific and powerful methods to achieve the same effect. The principle involved drawing an arc-shaped vacuum wave in the air with the blade, which was then pushed forward by atmospheric pressure. This technique had strict requirements on the sword's hardness, the proper force exertion, and the precision of wrist movement. Additionally, the flying slash's power could be further amplified by wrapping the weapon in armament hockey. Sky Blade, with its immense computing power, made it all seem effortless. In fact, the technique for generating the required force was similar to the Tempest Kick, but applied to the hands and the sword. With enough skill, even a finger, chopstick, or wooden stick could be used to perform a flying slash. The sheer coolness and power of this technique left everyone eager to master it. Before long, they were all fully absorbed in learning how to execute the flying slash. Meanwhile, Tony Stark, stepping away from his lab for a rare break, was about to meet a guest. At Stark Industries, Tony sat in his office, casually dressed in a short-sleeved shirt. After shaking hands with the woman who had just entered, he gestured for her to take a seat. The woman, showing no hesitation, sat down in the chair opposite Tony's desk. Tony's first impression was that she seemed strangely familiar. Then, it hit him, wasn't she the pilot who had taken Natasha away before? He mused inwardly, could it be that every woman in that organization is this stunning? Maybe I should join, he thought jokingly, though he quickly dismissed the idea. He didn't dare say it aloud, mainly because he feared H. might get beaten. Who knew if this woman's combat skills were as terrifying as Natasha's? So, Natasha sent you to pick up the arc reactor, huh? How should I address you? Tony asked, trying to sound casual. You can call me Yelena, she replied coolly. It was, of course, Yelena. Her attitude was professional and businesslike. She showed no signs of being impressed by Tony's billionaire status, which didn't surprise him. He simply nodded, gesturing towards the documents he had laid out on the table. The 2 arc reactor cores and parts are already loaded on the truck. They're in warehouse number 1 of Stark Industries. You can take them whenever you're ready, Tony explained. There's also an installation flowchart to guide you through the assembly. Yelena's expression didn't change, and she nodded curtly, clearly treating this as a straightforward transaction. Thank you, then goodbye. Yelena said, picked up the document, and was about to stand up and leave. But Tony stood up and stopped her. Hey, Ms. Yelena, that's not what our deal said at the beginning. What are you trying to say? Yelena asked coldly, turning to face him. I thought we were supposed to be friends, right? But as a friend, Natasha hasn't shown up even once this whole month. Tony shrugged, expressing his confusion. I mean, what's going on here? Am I just being left hanging? Their agreement was clear. Within 3 months, Natasha had promised he wouldn't be targeted by any extraordinary threats. No one had shown up. How could they protect him if they weren't around? Or were they just that good at staying hidden? She doesn't need to show up, Yelena replied coldly. The deal is still in place. We can guarantee that no idiot will bother you for the next 2 months. How's that supposed to work? If you have the right connections and ask around, you'll understand exactly what that means, Yelena said. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked out. Yelena left the luxurious, spacious office, and as she opened the door, she bumped into Pepper Potts coming in. Yelena gave a polite nod and walked past her without a word. Pepper glanced at Yelena, hesitating to speak, then entered the office. She glared at Tony Stark, who seemed deep in thought, and snapped, "Mr. Stark, if you could, please refrain from letting your lady friends waltz into the Stark Industries office. You know, with the stock market plummeting, most of the board members are already dissatisfied with you." Pepper wouldn't admit she felt a bit jealous. She just couldn't stand Tony Stark's decadence. However, she suddenly noticed that instead of the usual carefree, teasing Tony, his expression was serious, and he seemed lost in thought. "Tony," she called, waving her hand as she approached his desk, trying to get his attention. Her voice brought Tony out of his deep contemplation. When he saw Pepper standing there, he instinctively smiled and said, "Wow. Believe me, today is your most beautiful day, my dear Miss Potts." "Thank you, Mr. Stark. Thank you so much for the compliment," Pepper replied with mock anger, although she was relieved to hear his familiar tone. She wanted to say that if he didn't know how to give compliments, he shouldn't bother trying. "You're welcome. So, my dear Ms. Potts, what brings you here?" Tony asked. "I need you to sign the papers I'm carrying." "Wow, looks like there's a dozen of them," Tony said, making a face full of rejection. Pepper shook her head. "It's not a dozen, Tony. It's dozens, and this is only a part of them." With that, she placed the hefty stack of documents on his desk. Tony glanced at the pile, and his expression turned serious. He circled the desk and walked up to Pepper, placing his hands on her shoulders. Looking into her eyes with a mock-serious tone, he said, "My dear Miss Potts, you're already the executive assistant. I hereby authorize you to handle these documents. Which means, these files are now your problem." Before Pepper could respond, Tony bolted for the door. Her face was frozen in disbelief as she watched him leave. Just before the door closed, she shouted, "Oh my God, Tony Stark. You can't just run away." Tony wore sunglasses and quickly left Stark Industries with his bodyguard, Happy. They headed downstairs to two sports cars parked in a nearby space. Just as Tony was about to get in, middle-aged man in a suit with a gentle expression walked over, also wearing sunglasses. When Tony saw him, something clicked. He paused, letting go of the car door handle and turning to face the man. The man removed his sunglasses and extended his hand. "Mr. Stark, do you remember me? Coulson, from S.H.I.E.L.D. "Of course, I remember your flowing long hair," Tony replied, shaking his hand with a perfunctory grin. Tony had only vaguely remembered Coulson's introduction from when he first returned to New York, a quick briefing followed by a meeting with Nick Fury. It clicked later that Coulson was also part of S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson, a little self-conscious, touched his balding head but remained unfazed. He knew well enough about Tony's sharp tongue and sarcastic nature. But Tony's next question caught him off guard. "Agent Coulson, has anything big happened in New York this month that might concern me?" Coulson's eyes narrowed. "Did that woman you met mention something? I'm guessing she didn't give you the full picture." Clearly, S.H.I.E.L.D. had been monitoring Tony and the Stark Industries closely. The meeting with Yelena had not gone unnoticed. Tony smirked. "So you're keeping an eye on me? Intriguing. Sounds like they're giving you headaches. Surveillance, I take it." Coulson remained calm. "They're too mysterious and too dangerous. We've been trying to trace their origins, but sadly, Mr. Stark, without your cooperation, our hands are tied." "Well, what did your investigation turn up?" Tony pressed. At that moment, a voice crackled in Coulson's earpiece. "Coulson, we lost her in a surveillance blind spot on 35th Street in Manhattan. The subject is skilled in anti-tracking, likely has backup, and the speed at which both she and the vehicle disappeared was unusual." "Understood," Coulson replied, then shrugged at Tony. "We lost the trail." Tony scoffed. "Ha, honestly, I hope you do find them. I'd love to know who they really are." Even Jarvis, with all his advanced facial recognition and search methods, couldn't track Yelena or Natasha. Tony's curiosity was piqued. For a group to operate under the constant surveillance of modern society and leave no trace, it could only mean one thing: they had access to cutting-edge artificial intelligence well beyond anything currently known. To completely suppress modern network information technology and block the world's networks, allowing that group of people to vanish from the digital world now that was intriguing. As a genius, Tony was naturally curious. But clearly, S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't meeting his expectations, and that didn't surprise him. He was still waiting for the other party to reveal the full truth to him. A month ago, two individuals infiltrated the headquarters of the largest crime boss in New York and utterly destroyed him and several of his subordinates, all of whom had extraordinary abilities, Coulson said. Their only goal was to ensure that no superhuman would come after you, Mr. Stark. Coulson paused and added, "By the way, based on the information we received, Mr. Stain happened to be in a meeting with that crime boss at the time." In the underground laboratory of a villa perched high on a cliff overlooking the ocean in New York, Tony Stark leaned back in his chair, his head slightly tilted as he tried to relax. On the workbench nearby, partially assembled metal components hinted at the creation of exoskeleton armor. In front of him, a brand new armor design was displayed on a holographic projection screen. This was the armor Tony had envisioned ever since his escape from the cave where he had been held captive. With the miniaturized arc reactor, Jarvis' artificial intelligence system, and his nearly maxed-out technical skills, he had turned what once seemed impossible into a reality. This armor would become his ultimate safeguard. After being kidnapped, Tony had felt utterly powerless. His status as a billionaire and a genius scientist had meant nothing in the face of armed terrorists. A single bullet could have erased everything he owned in an instant. It was during that time he realized that he could only rely on himself. Flesh and blood alone couldn't stop a bullet, but the hardest armor could. Thus, the MK armor was born. But even with this new creation, Tony wondered, would it truly keep him safe? Or was it just a source of fleeting comfort? His mind drifted back to a memory from the cave, the vision of a beautiful woman with short, burgundy hair that had shattered his understanding of reality. He would never forget the scene: blazing flames licking the walls of the cave, bodies lying in despair, eyes wide with disbelief. Among them stood the woman, holding the terrorist leader by the neck, tossing him like a ragdoll against a distant wall. The man's body burst like a bubble, blood splattering everywhere. Could the MK armor he developed ever protect him from that kind of power? Tony had his doubts. Coulson's recent words, coupled with the vast information Jarvis had collected by hacking into New York City's networks, only deepened his confusion. Yelena's cryptic message echoed in his mind. It wasn't just talk. Two individuals had single-handedly intimidated world-class crime lords, including the most powerful in New York, with devastating force. Tony felt an oppressive weight settle on him, a pressure brought by power and mystery far beyond human limits. For the first time, Tony Stark, always confident, always proud, began to question himself. He didn't know whether the knowledge and creativity he possessed, the crystallization of endless inspiration and advanced technology, could bridge the vast gap, as wide as mountains, rivers, and oceans, between him and what he was facing now. Tony's expression darkened. He hated this feeling, the insecurity, the self-doubt, everything. Time passed, and Tony remained slumped in his chair, eyes vacant, almost like a lifeless corpse. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sitting there. Then, by chance, his eyes fell on an object in the corner of the room, something he had forgotten about. It was an unfinished star-shaped shield leaning against the wall. The shield was based on one of his father Howard's earliest designs. Tony recalled words his father had once said to him as a child, words he had long forgotten and never cared much about at the time. "Tony, you are the son of Howard Stark, the greatest scientist of this century. You are also my greatest work. I believe that in a more prosperous and advanced world, you will create stories far greater and more legendary than mine. Hey, Tony, put down those damn comic books. It's always Carl Anderson books you're reading. Son, crying is not how the Stark family deals with problems. We may be proud and arrogant, but we never doubt ourselves, never give up, and never cry. In this world, no one can bring the Starks down. If your beliefs remain strong, once the race begins, whether you're on a curve or a straight road, you must surpass it. You must stay determined and grit your teeth." The voice, once blurry in his memory, came rushing back into his heart, and Tony's dull eyes began to brighten. "Dad, maybe you were right," Tony murmured to himself, then stood up from his chair, stretched his muscles, and walked over to the workbench. "Jarvis, we're not done yet, so don't fall asleep on me. Nice to have you back, sir. ZZZT, ZZZT." The sound of a laser cutting metal echoed through the underground lab. Tony's voice broke the silence occasionally. "Hey, don't hold it against me, I'll donate you sooner or later." "I'm sorry, am I blocking you?" Meanwhile, at the SHIELD headquarters, in the large hall with floor-to-ceiling windows, Agent Hill approached Nick Fury, who was holding a cup of coffee and staring out at the city below. "Sir, according to the results from our 1-month facial recognition search, we've come up empty. We checked a total of 383 city surveillance networks and found fewer than 30 people whose facial match exceeded 35%. However, our agents investigated all their backgrounds and histories, and ultimately eliminated them all." Fury took a sip of his coffee, his expression unchanged, as if he had expected this outcome all along. "What do you think, Hill?" "They're like ghosts," Hill replied helplessly. She had been with S.H.I.E.L.D. for over 10 years. As Fury's right hand and a senior agent, she had seen and investigated more than 100 bizarre and seemingly impossible cases. Yet, thanks to SHIELD's advanced technology, she had always managed to find some clue. But this time, she couldn't even begin to describe this group. All she could say was that they were ghosts. Their numbers were unknown, their information was unknown, their powers were unknown, and their movements were impossible to track. Even though Kingpin had verbally described the appearance and figures of the two people, there was no trace of them on the internet. A group of ghosts, living beneath the gaze of society's watchful eyes, invisible and untouchable, leaving everyone feeling powerless. Fury nodded, but kept his thoughts to himself. After a moment of silence, Hill added, "Secretary Pierce is looking for you." Fury raised an eyebrow. Boom! Above the sea, a terrifying roar suddenly exploded, and several figures were seen flying through the sky like birds. With every step in the void, an explosive transparent ring of airwaves burst out, allowing them to move gracefully through the air. In the midst of these airwaves, Sumarokov emerged, muscles bulging, his upper body bare. He raised his double-chain swords, now blackened, and slashed downward. In an instant, two terrifying golden slashes, each dozens of meters wide, tore through the sky. The others, each wielding a cross sword, swung theirs down in unison. Countless flying slashes filled the air, densely packed and overwhelming, as though they intended to slice through the sea itself. Their target, Leon. Leon stood on the roiling, boiling sea, wearing only shorts, a shining cross sword made of golden particles in his hand. Faced with the overwhelming storm of flying slashes, his right hand tightened around his weapon, sweeping, slashing, and blocking at a speed too fast for the naked eye to follow. Clang, 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 boom, boom, boom. The slashes, powerful enough to cut through mountains and rivers, were blocked and deflected by Leon in the simplest and swiftest movements. Dazzling sparks burst out at every point of impact. The deflected slashes crashed into the sea, causing explosive water pillars to rise, filling the sky with heavy rainfall. Once this onslaught ended, Wanda, Sergei, and the others appeared around Leon, descending from the sky at some unknown time. Without mercy, they launched another attack. They charged across the surface of the sea, moving at nearly subsonic speeds, leaving long, rapid waves in their wake. With his heightened sense of awareness, Leon had already sensed their approach. Facing the frenzied siege from Sergei and the others, he remained calm, resisting their attacks with nothing but his own strength. Boom! With a single sword strike, Leon sent Wanda flying 1,000 meters away. Wanda, leading the charge, ignored the seawater soaking her hair and sticking it to her cheeks. She continued speeding forward, gripping her sword in her right hand while extending her left hand. A giant red hand, formed from chaotic magical energy, grabbed the 1,000-meter flying slash and violently shook it. Bang! The flying slash shattered into pieces. Pietro, Sergei, and the others sharpened their focus, accelerating once more as they passed Wanda and rushed toward Leon. Bang! 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 This was a battle beyond imagination, a clash that subverted the human worldview. Over a dozen fighters displayed the results of months, or even years, of intense training. Their swordsmanship, combat skills, energy manipulation, and tactical coordination had reached their peak. Every flying slash impacted the sea with explosive force. Each collision caused airwaves powerful enough to create massive craters in the ocean's surface. The sea churned violently, transforming into a chaotic expanse of whirlpools and towering waves. The entire area, stretching for dozens of kilometers, became a death zone, and all marine creatures instinctively fled from the impending disaster. On a distant island cliff, 3 young girls stood, witnessing the shocking battle with wide, unblinking eyes. Though they had not yet been injected with the super soldier serum, their use of hockey allowed them to barely follow the combat. Even so, the intensity of the battle felt like a real life or death struggle. Despite being surrounded, Leon fought back fiercely, mercilessly kicking Sumarokov. Even though Sumarokov instinctively used his armament hockey, he was sent flying thousands of meters, coughing up blood. Yet, without hesitation, he returned to the fray. To be honest, a battle like this would terrify any normal 13 or 14-year-old girl, but Clarice, Alina, and Polina had long grown accustomed to it. Pushkin, on the other hand, was a different story. His precocious eyes shone with enthusiasm and longing. His blood boiled as his fighting spirit surged, almost overflowing, but he hated his lack of strength and seniority. He yearned for the same power as his older brothers and sisters and craved to be part of the battle he was witnessing. But he was still young and not yet in his golden period of physical growth, forced to watch as his siblings grew stronger before him. Even Yuriko, who had joined the group later, had already surpassed him in strength. In this battle, she played a crucial role. Pushkin, heart pounded as he watched the fight, having stood there for 2 whole days. That's right, the battle between Leon, Sergei, and the others had raged on for 2 full days, seemingly without end. No one took a moment to rest. From Wanda and Natasha to Sergei, Sumarokov, and Yuriko, they all had one goal: to kill Leon. Because when Leon found an opening, he would show no mercy. Everyone bore injuries. Natasha and Wanda had sections of their hair cut off by flying slashes after failing to dodge in time. Sergei and Pietro had wounds from finger guns, while others carried long bloodstains from kicks and slashes. Yuriko fared better, her unparalleled self-healing ability sparing her from scars. But Pushkin had seen everything from the beginning, and he knew just how close Yuriko had come to being cut in half by Leon's sword. Wanda and the others had narrowly escaped when they surrounded Leon. The battle had been intense, and it was clear that this confrontation was Leon's final assessment of their training over the past 3 months. No one felt fear, no one gave up. Their determination to fight was unshakable, as if the fighting spirit had been ingrained in their very bones and souls even with Leon as their opponent. Boom! As yet another day passed, a terrifying, tsunami-like force erupted from Leon, while over a dozen equally powerful auras exploded like volcanic eruptions in response. The clash of these energies turned the sea and sky, stretching for kilometers, into a chaotic, bloody purgatory. Red and black lightning streaked across the heavens, and dark clouds loomed ominously overhead. The earth and mountains trembled, and the explosive momentum felt like the collision of massive forces. The sky finally cracked. Billowing dark clouds split apart, dispersed, and were obliterated by the power unleashed by those kings and godlike. The sea, under the impact of these terrifying auras, rose in monstrous waves layer after layer. Leon stood on the sea, and the waves threatened to shatter his momentum. His sharp eyes radiated an overwhelming haki that seemed to dominate the heavens. Though he was only 1.8 meters tall, a mere speck beneath the endless sky and sea, his presence was as majestic as a god of the ocean. In contrast, Sergei, Wanda, Pietro, and the others, unwilling to show weakness, surrounded Leon, releasing their conqueror's haki without restraint. Despite the sweat dripping down their foreheads and their labored breathing, none of them gave up. The clash of conqueror's haki against conqueror's haki lasted for what felt like an eternity. Waves of red and black lightning raged across the sea. The entire scene resembled the end of the world. Yet, no matter how much Wanda, Natasha, and the others struggled, they had too little time to fully awaken their conqueror's haki. Leon's haki was like an endless ocean, while theirs was merely a stream, a river. Finally, Leon's lips curled into a smile, and with a hearty laugh, his monstrous haki surged once more, mercilessly suppressing Wanda and the others. They were overwhelmed and fainted from the sheer pressure. Damn it, still failed. Even as they slipped into unconsciousness, Wanda, Natasha, and the others murmured in frustration as they fell towards the sea. But even in defeat, they still gripped their weapons tightly. Seeing this, Leon snapped his fingers. With the sharp snap, space fluctuated, and Wanda and the others, who were about to sink into the sea, vanished. When they reappeared, they were lying safely on the beach. Leon's figure transformed into a golden beam and flew toward the island beach. In the blink of an eye, the beam condensed and exploded into sparks of light as Leon descended from the air. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the four little ones on a distant cliff leap with confidence. They stepped on the mountainside and it exploded. The force of the explosive power sent them soaring through the air. Wow, Leon, you're amazing. Wanda, Natasha, and the others never beat you. Marvelous. Leon is so powerful, Natasha doesn't stand a chance against you. The three little girls, like cheerful flatterers, gathered around Leon, showering him with praise. Taking advantage of Natasha's fainting, they dared to speak boldly, otherwise, they wouldn't have had the courage to do so. Pushkin, unable to hold back his excitement, shouted, "That life and death confrontation, it makes me want to fight too." His youthful energy was boiling over. Seeing Pietro lying unconscious nearby, H. almost lost control and felt an urge to punch him. But after a moment of restraint, he shouted, "I want to beat him 10 times too." Of course, he wouldn't do it. After all, he didn't have the strength, and he might end up being the one hung up and beaten. Leon chuckled as he gently patted the heads of the three little girls clinging to his waist. Their big, adoring eyes sparkled with admiration, and Leon couldn't help but laugh heartily. No one could resist the affectionate gaze of these cute little girls. After acknowledging the girls, Leon turned to Pushkin, the only boy in the group, who was blushing with excitement. Leon placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Be patient, kid. In a year, your golden growth period will come. Work hard when that time comes, but don't get too obsessed with it. Just like Wanda and the others, it's not all about brute strength." He pointed toward the distant sky. "Our true goal lies out there in the vast universe, waiting for us to explore and conquer." "I understand, Leon. I'll work hard." The young man's excitement grew, and he nodded with solemn determination. Leon was like a god to him, someone whose words and actions he admired deeply and aspired to follow. Pushkin had sworn many times that he, like Sergei and Pietro, would become a warrior fighting alongside Leon in all directions. Leon nodded in approval. This young man had great potential and would undoubtedly become one of his trusted right-hand men in the future. As a leader, Leon was also quite skilled at motivating his team. What about Leon, Wanda, and sister Natasha? The little girls, now squatting in front of Wanda and Natasha and poking their faces playfully, looked up and asked. After 2 days of fighting and unleashing so much haki, they're physically and mentally exhausted. They need to rest. It's time for us to head back. Okay, the girls chimed in. The 3 months of intense training had come to an end, and Leon was very satisfied with the results. Using Clarissa's ability, the 2 girls and Pushkin quickly lifted everyone and transported them through a portal back to the manor. Before leaving, Leon instructed Keisha to close the space barrier. Leon placed everyone in their rooms one by one, and before leaving, he injected them with a healing serum developed by Sky Blade. This serum not only rapidly repairs necrotic muscle cells and injuries but also replenishes the nutrients they all needed. Leon believed that after this battle, Wanda and the others would experience a significant breakthrough in their strength. Afterward, he took a relaxing bath and enjoyed a delicious meal prepared by the manor's chefs, accompanied by the 4 little ones. Throughout the meal and even afterward, the 4 children were still buzzing with excitement, their faces flushed from all the energy and chatter. Leon asked the maid to prepare a cup of cappuccino for him, then sat on the sofa watching TV. Reflecting on the past 3 months, he realized that while he had been teaching Wanda and the others, his own strength had undergone a tremendous improvement. Thanks to Sky Blade's support, his strength had reached the level of a Yonko, and perhaps even surpassed it. As for Wanda and the others, after awakening their conqueror's haki and surviving this battle, they were now at a level comparable to generals. The fact that they had reached such heights in just a few years was nothing short of remarkable. Leon had poured vast resources into everyone, so this level of progress was to be expected. Using breathing techniques to strengthen internal organs early on, supported by nutrient solutions and relentless daily training, they had surpassed human physical limits within 2 years. Their cardiopulmonary functions had also improved drastically, although eventually, progress from breathing techniques began to slow. Then, with the introduction of armament and observation haki, they broke past their previous limits once again. Combined with nutrient solutions and costly food supplements, their physical development reached near monstrous levels within just a few years. The true game changer was the Super Soldier Serum specially crafted by Sky Blade. This serum catalyzed an all-around evolution. Not only did it enhance their physical fitness to monstrous levels, but it also unlocked immense potential within them. As their training intensified, particularly in their prime years, the high-pressure training, especially under Leon and even with Sky Blade's resources, enabled each member to evolve into powerful warriors. It was only natural that they all achieved the rank of generals and became exceptional swordsmen. But this isn't the end. The future looks bright. With Sky Blade, they have the power to conquer the world. Reaching a godly physique might be challenging for now, as Sky Blade's computing power may eventually fall short. Genetic engineering on this scale isn't straightforward, and Sky Blade can't entirely shoulder the load. But that's a problem for later. The past 3 months of intense training went exceptionally well. Each member of the team Leon had formed over the years committed fully, crafting the finest nutrient solutions with Sky Blade's resources and mastering the skills he taught, especially the flying and slashing techniques essential for great swordsmen. They weren't fully refined in their weapon use or swordsmanship at that level, but that's what the last 2 days of battle were for a real-life confrontation to unify everything they had learned. Of course, this seemingly life-or-death battle was actually under Leon's perfect control. His advanced Conqueror haki, Sky Blade's remote support managed by Keisha, and the relentless attacks from Wanda and the others all created a thrilling scenario. Several times, it seemed as if he might be beheaded or dismembered, but Sky Blade and his own calculations managed everything. Wanda and the others genuinely thought this was a fight to the death, though. Truth be told, it felt invigorating to stretch his muscles through this intense combat, and it even satisfied a bit of darkness within him. The 3 fierce fighters Wanda, Yuriko, and Natasha were especially ruthless, though Leon wouldn't have to pay any price for it afterward. After all, the scars on his body were healed by a serum, so even if he wanted to nurse a grudge, there wasn't any trace left. He figured they'd probably thank him in their hearts. The thought brought a smirk to his face. His thoughts were interrupted by the classic scene of Tony Stark's press conference on the large TV screen in front of him, just as Stark delivered the iconic line, "I am Iron Man." With that, the prelude to a new era of power had officially begun. Leon watched Stark's eyes gleaming with purpose as the press clamored for details, questions overlapping in chaotic waves. Leon stretched, smiling softly. Just then, his phone rang. He answered it to find out that the airborne fortress Melina had been managing was complete, with its launch scheduled in 3 days. Until then, it would undergo final maintenance. The progress was quicker than expected, but with the new artificial intelligence powered by Angel civilization technology and guided by Keisha, the project had accelerated beyond the original timeline. The AI's computing capabilities far exceeded Tony's Jarvis, given it was an angelic creation of Sky Blade's system, designed by a 15,000-year-old civilization. Leon agreed to have Wanda and others go for an inspection. For Leon, the next 3 days were set for some well-deserved rest. Night had fallen over Queens. Inside an apartment on the 2nd floor, Peter Parker, who had taken up the mantle of Spider-Man, was hastily putting on his suit. He opened the door slightly and called down to Aunt May, "Good night, Aunt May." "Good night, Peter. Sweet dreams," her gentle voice called from below. With the door closed and locked, Peter pulled on his mask, opened the window, and pressed himself against the wall before making a nimble leap up to the rooftop. Shooting his webs, he swung out into the city, traveling between New York's skyscrapers, barely noticeable against the night sky. Finally, he reached a 100-foot building in Queens, crouching on the guardrail by a signal tower. Perched high above the city, he sharpened his senses to catch any sign of trouble. Suddenly, he heard a faint noise, a rapid burst of gunfire, almost inaudible due to the distance. "Aha, let's see who's causing trouble. It's such a nice evening, and we all deserve to be in a good mood," Peter thought with a smirk, leaping from the building and swinging toward the sound. As he closed in, he noticed people fleeing in a panic. High in the air, he finally got a clear view of the source. Peter nearly lost his grip on the web as he registered the scene below. Dozens of heavily armed gangsters surrounded a lone figure, their fingers pressing hard on the triggers. And their target, a single woman, a very beautiful woman. Under the spider mask, Peter's eyes widened. "Oh my God, what am I seeing? he whispered, pressing himself against the fifth-floor wall of a nearby apartment to observe, readying himself for the next move. This woman looked different from what Peter had expected. Cool, very cool. She had a striking figure, standing at 1.78 meters, with a black leather jacket, black jeans, and a brown belt. Her left leg was torn off at the thigh, exposing the remnants of fishnet stockings on that side, while her upper body was clad in a short, white top that offered a glimpse of her chest, catching the eye. On her exposed abdomen was a black circular tattoo, adding a touch of style. But the most captivating feature was her long, blood-red hair, a dark, cold beauty that exuded power, even violence. She showed no fear of the hail of bullets fired at her. Raising her right hand, she conjured an energy shield from thin air, causing the bullets to strike it and ripple like raindrops on water. But it was what she did next that made Peter catch his breath. With a cruel smile, she extended her other hand and clenched her fist. Boom! In an instant, the positions of the dozens of gang members holding weapons shifted. Suddenly, crushing gravity bore down like a mountain, and they were flattened without so much as a scream, reduced to bloody pulp. Scarlet blood mixed with the crushed flesh created a gruesome scene. Peter almost lost it. Covering his mouth, he tried to suppress the wave of nausea that hit him. Damn, that's brutal, he muttered, his skin crawling with goosebumps. This woman was terrifying. She was like a devil in human form. Despite his hesitation, Peter knew he had to act. She had caused sheer panic, and with so many dead, he couldn't let her walk away. He would have to arrest her and let the law take its course. But just as he was about to make his move, new figures appeared. On the now empty street, illuminated by lights on either side, three shadows stretched long and ominous. Three figures strolled in at a leisurely pace. One was a middle-aged man in a simple blue and white shirt, another was tall and muscular, clad in armor resembling a rhinoceros. Between them walked a bald, heavy-set man in a suit, gripping a cane, a ring glinting on his hand, and his eyes fierce. Peter could sense something on a rooftop in the distance, aimed at them. The hair on his arm stood up in warning. Whatever it was, it spelled danger. Peter's initial urge to act halted immediately. He crawled along the wall like a spider, moving stealthily to another spot. He found a building closer to the scene, partially hidden by a large tree with thick branches, providing some cover. Mary, this is your only chance. Come back with me, or I'll break your bones one by one, the bald man's voice boomed with a D. Menace, his accent adding to his dominance and ferocity. Peter felt a surge of danger radiating from all three figures, not just the bald man. He watched silently, taking in the scene. Despite the bald man's cruel threat, Mary showed no fear. Instead, she let out a maniacal laugh, making the already tense street feel even eerier. Break my bones, she sneered. That's practically fun for me. But you're not capable of doing it. Mary brushed a hand through her scarlet hair, her eyes gleaming with madness. I'm looking for the man who's truly worthy. A man I believe in. You're just a loser. Mary, no one wins every time, Kingpin replied, spreading his arms as if embracing the world, his cane held in his left hand. But I don't always lose either. For the past 3 months, rumors of my failures have spread, and some have even dared to defy me. He smirked. So, I cut off their heads and displayed them in front of Kingpin Tower. I am still the ruler of the underworld. Ha, congratulations, Mr. Fisk, Mary said with mock applause, only to shift her tone. Unfortunately for you, the man I love is still a mountain you can't climb. He's a nightmare that haunts you every day. She narrowed her eyes. I'm warning you one last time, my leaving has nothing to do with you. Don't interfere with me finding him, or he might misunderstand. I'm truly sorry, my Mary, Kingpin said with a disappointed shake of his head. He seemed to realize that Bloody Mary was beyond reclaiming, leaving him with only one choice. Kill her. At that moment, a gunshot rang out from the distance. Bang! An armor-piercing bullet tore through the night, aimed directly at Mary's head. The shot echoed, signaling the start of the battle, making Peter flinch. As Mary leapt to evade, the fight erupted in full force. Mary seemed to have anticipated the shot, stepping back just in time. The bullet missed her, striking a nearby lamppost and tearing through it, then burrowing into the ground at an angle. As the lamppost flickered, Mary activated energy in her right hand. But before she could retaliate, the silent Sandman standing beside Kingpin sprang into action, his body dissolving into yellow sand. In moments, a terrifying sandstorm swept toward Mary. The storm engulfed the street, lifting cars, motorcycles, discarded leaflets, and trash bags, until everything was obscured by whirling yellow sand. On the outer wall of the nearby apartment, Peter was caught in the aftermath. He quickly ducked his head to avoid the sand whipping over him. Even so, the impact of the sand stung, leaving him wincing as he clung to the wall. The massive man, Rhino, let out a roar and began his charge. He lowered his head like an actual rhinoceros, barreling forward with terrifying momentum, ignoring the swirling sandstorm as he aimed to crush Mary. Meanwhile, Kingpin shed his usual underworld emperor airs, unbuttoning his suit and tossing it aside as he joined the attack. The Sandman clouded Mary's vision, disrupting her focus while Rhino charged from one side and Kingpin approached head-on. From a dark corner in the distance, a sniper lay in wait, ready to fire at any moment. Despite her recklessness, Mary knew she was in serious danger. Yet, even now, she had no regrets.